Morning sunlight washed over the massive marble pillars of the Welton royal estate, looking absolutely cinematic as always. The entire mansion dripped with generational wealth. The second those golden rays hit the bedroom floors, it was the ultimate alarm clock to kick off another day. Soaking in the chill morning vibes, our main guy was already wide awake, basically just waiting for his cue. Letting out a long, deep breath, he shook off whatever heavy thoughts haunted his sleep and braced himself for reality. Gripping his insanely plush blankets, he finally dragged himself out of bed, mentally preparing for the grind. Things had taken a wild turn lately, and no matter how cozy his velvet slippers felt, he couldn't just ignore the crazy shift in his existence. Meet Jamie Welton. The kid practically rolled the ultimate gotcha, born into an ultra-famous bloodline loaded with cash. We're talking zero struggles and absolute easy mode. As the absolute eldest son of the royal Welton household, he was the #1 heir, meaning the dude literally had the world handed to him on a silver platter. But hold up, his flawless resume had a massive hidden dark side that totally contrasted his shiny rich kid status. Behind the velvet ropes and endless allowance, he actually possessed an insanely overpowered world-ending type of magic. We're talking pure nightmare fuel power. Controlling that kind of absolute chaos required a terrifying level of mental willpower, just to weaponize the fallout without self-destructing. Honestly, even the legendary 12 gods couldn't take him down in a fair fight. Their only desperate play was to seal the Grandmaster away entirely, praying they could put a lid on his god-tier potential. Yeah, that was his brutal past life. But he was just biding his time, absolutely ready to unleash pure karma the second he got an opening, just to prove their little prison was completely useless. He swore on his soul that those deities wouldn't get off with a quick ending. No, he planned to drag them through absolute hell, first a threat that seriously triggered his divine enemies. Diablo Volfir guaranteed that every single terrifying promise he made would cash out, even if he had to suffer through endless torture first. Ultimately, those 12 cowards managed to lock him away. But centuries later, their perfect barrier cracked, giving him the ultimate escape route, right into an epic reincarnation cycle. While his shiny new parents were totally obsessed with their perfect little baby, this tiny toddler was secretly plotting absolute dominance behind those innocent little eyes. The dude was dying to just talk normally and drop the massive lore bomb on the two people he had to call mom and dad. But his tiny infant vocal cords literally couldn't handle the flex. Fast forward, he just embraced the high society life, soaking up all that aggressive parental affection. 9 whole years flew by since then, giving our boy plenty of time to adapt to this massive palace layout, getting swarmed by an army of maids, and having the insane luxury of buying literally anything he pointed at. Still hearing the servants sprinting down the halls just to pamper him always caught him off guard, messing with his head a little bit. Because no matter how heavily this VIP lifestyle slapped, the Dark Lord was used to running wild, thriving on absolute freedom and pure chaos back in his prime. Basically, this fragile 9-year-old body was nothing but a gilded prison. Thank God for his fiercely loyal nanny, who practically acted as his second mom, keeping him sane by literally spoiling him rotten and answering every single tiny request. The second she walked through his bedroom doors, a totally genuine smile broke through his edgy exterior. She playfully asked what he was plotting so early in the morning, and he casually brushed it off, claiming he was just vibing with the sunrise. The nanny immediately gushed, totally hyping up how adorable it was for a kid his age to get emotional over nature, which honestly made the reincarnated demon lord cringe internally at the wholesome praise. But she wasn't just there to chat. She dropped the reminder that his mom was already downstairs waiting for her favorite son. She quickly helped him speedrun his morning outfit, and the duo navigated the massive sprawling hallways, making a beeline for the dining hall. The nanny flashed a massive smile, announcing to the room that the young master had officially entered the chat, kicking off yet another super wholesome family breakfast. Even though Jamie internally dreaded this domestic routine, he played along perfectly because his folks were hardcore dedicated to bonding time. Already chilling at the table were his dad, his mom, and his little sister, and all three literally lit up the second they saw him. Not wanting to ruin the elite family vibes, he swallowed his Dark Lord pride plastered on a cute smile, and gave a sweet good morning to his current squad. The energy was nothing but pure warmth, mostly because, ever since he dropped into this world, they totally worshipped their oldest boy and wanted to hand him the galaxy. His parents just sat back, staring at their kids, with absolute stars in their eyes, utterly obsessed with how aesthetically perfect their genetics turned out. For context, Jamie's mom Sears was the exclusive daughter of the insanely prestigious Bell bloodline, but she ditched the snobby aristocratic attitude to be a totally warm, affectionate mom, and heading up the table was his current dad, Argino Welton. Not only was this guy the head of the legendary royal Welton family, but he also held the elite title of one of the kingdom's 5 sword masters. But don't let that god-tier status fool you. Behind closed doors, this absolute unit of a warrior was a total simp for his wife and kids, proving family always came first. Then there was Jamie's baby sister, Sarah. She was so tiny and overwhelmingly wholesome that literally everyone in the estate would take a bullet for her. Nobody could ever say no to Daddy's little princess. The staff basically tripped over themselves to play along with her games and grant her every tiny wish. Even Jamie had to swallow his pride and act super grateful when she aggressively spoon-fed him totally unprompted. You gotta understand the kid absolutely thrived on this kind of big brother validation. Breaking her heart just wasn't an option. Still playing the perfect sibling drained Jamie's social battery to zero, leaving him desperate for some alone time. But hey, he had an innocent little boy persona to maintain in this ridiculously loving household. Once the dinner circus finally wrapped up, he let out a massive sigh and retreated to his room, his one safe haven to just exist without pretending. He immediately belly-flopped onto the mattress, burying his face in the pillows. Finally, peace. Honestly, witnessing people genuinely care for each other gave him major whiplash. It was the complete opposite of the ruthless bloodbath he called his past life. At least this massive estate came packed with ultimate perks like an epic private library to kill time in. Even though being trapped in a toddler's body without the ability to speak properly had basically pushed him to the edge of insanity. Watching a bizarre little creature flutter his way, he sighed at how exhausting this whole facade was turning out to be. A never-ending act. Still, complaining felt pointless. He hit the ultimate jackpot, a second chance at life, and more importantly, a second chance to fight back. Plus, this reincarnation came with a brand new skill that was about to flip the script entirely. Gripping the weird familiar in his palms, his thoughts darkened. He remembered the 12 gods, the exact deities who condemned him to an agonizing void of nothingness. They sealed him away just because his god-tier potential threatened their fragile egos. He remembered them clinging desperately to their pathetic faith, acting like total parasites feeding off human worship. Sure, his current mana pool was basically a joke right now, but he had all the time in the world to level up. Besides, this current era was completely clueless about the terrifying depths of dark magic. He could absolutely weaponize that ignorance against the arrogant 12 gods who wrote him off as dead. He just needed to grind in the shadows until he was strong enough to unleash absolute hell. Suddenly, his dark plotting got totally derailed by the nanny, who popped in to announce it was story time with Mommy. Jamie instantly realized there was zero way to escape this cringe fest. Refusing was completely off the table, no matter how badly he wanted to skip it. Taking a deep breath, he mentally prepared himself for the performance. In a split second, his dead-eyed stare shifted into the bright, bubbly innocence expected of a sheltered little kid. A tiny part of him genuinely thought being locked back in the eternal void might beat having to act like a giggling toddler every single day. At least in the darkness, he didn't have to fake it. Downstairs, his mom and little sister were already waiting on the couch, totally hyped for some quality bonding time, because shockingly, this family actually liked each other. Meanwhile, Jamie was violently fighting his inner Demon King urges. Yet he dropped to his knees in front of his mom, flashing a megawatt smile. "What are we reading today?" he chimed, radiating pure, unadulterated sunshine. The sheer cuteness overload literally made both girls on the sofa freeze in pure awe. Unable to handle the wholesome vibes, they instantly lunged forward, crushing him in a massive group hug, squealing about how much they loved their precious boy. Catching her breath, his mom revealed today's pick, a legendary tale called The Great Magician Heinz. She hyped up the title, asking if they were excited. Without missing a beat, she launched right into the storytime performance. But the hype died down insanely fast. Within minutes, Sarah was already nodding off completely, losing the plot. The fairy tale wrapped up with your standard cliché, happily ever after. Snapping the cover shut, she looked down eagerly, waiting for their review. Sears beamed genuinely, hoping the magical bedtime story had blown their tiny minds. Playing his part flawlessly, Jamie flashed his brightest smile and declared he wanted to grow up to be just as overpowered as that wizard. Melting on the spot, his mom patted his head, swearing her genius little boy could easily reach that level of greatness. She bragged about how he'd already managed to crush the spirits of 3 separate magic tutors. To Jamie, though, that wasn't exactly a flex. Those basic instructors they hired were total amateurs. Breaking them was literally just child's play for a former grandmaster. Hyping him up further, she dropped a bomb his dad had pulled some major strings to hire the absolute strongest mage available. Knowing his father's crazy VIP connections, he definitely wasn't bluffing. This new guy was probably the real deal. Pushing himself off the floor, Jamie made a break for the door. She quickly asked if he was heading back to his favorite spot, the library. He gave a quick nod, and she instantly hit him with the classic mom lecture to go touch some grass instead of burying himself in dusty old books. That definitely didn't speed up his escape plan, though. She pulled him in for yet another suffocating bear hug, absolutely refusing to let her precious boy out of her sight. To dodge any major fallout, Jamie pulls a 200 IQ move and hits her with a preemptive hug just to keep the vibes immaculate. Total stealth mode, she doesn't suspect a thing. Sears is basically ready to beg him to stay and chill, completely melting over how sweet her little boy is acting. But let's be real, he's just plotting his escape route, praying she backs off so he can score some alone time. Mission accomplished. He slips away from his smothering mom and completely ghosts everyone, locking himself in the library to vibe with a heavy-duty magic tome. Snap, the cover slams shut. He just speed ran the entire thing, flexing a massive brain pan that completely shatters the illusion of him being a normal 9-year-old. He cracked this book open, hoping for some high-tier mana hacks, but honestly, it was a total nothing burger. Zero new intel, just pure disappointment. Snapping back to reality, his stomach drops. It's already lunchtime. And no matter how exhausted he is from doing the whole family meal routine, 3 times a day he has to keep up the act. But as he slides up to the dining hall, he gets completely hit with a plot twist. An absolute random just spawned in. The dude is scoping out the hallway, nodding at how the Welton family casually drops ultra-rare artifacts as hallway decor, just to flex their insane net worth. Jamie zeroes in on this guy, eyes totally locked, trying to scan this absolute stranger trespassing in his territory. But then it hits him a suffocating heavy aura. Insane levels of mana are literally radiating off this gray-haired boomer, spiraling around him like a raging typhoon. We're talking absolute top tier, at least a level 7 Grand Mage. Which begs the question, how did he bypass security? Teleportation seems like the only logical cheat code here. Alarm bells ring, is this a high-stakes heist? But brushing that off, the guy is just too ridiculously chill to be a thief. The old man's piercing gaze locks onto Jamie, dissecting every micro-expression, while the kid squares up, trying to read the room. Finally, Jamie channels his inner boss, barking out a demand to know exactly who this intruder thinks he is. And the second he speaks, the air in the room goes ice cold. Jamie's mana flares up with pure killing intent, making the old mage smirk, instantly recognizing that the apple totally didn't fall far from the terrifying Welton tree. Our guy knows. Protocol says he should bow down, but nope. He just glares back, practically choking on the sheer audacity and crushing pressure of this boomer's stare. Being treated like a lab rat, absolutely triggering. He is itching to drop a nuke of a spell just to prove he's built different. The gray-haired wizard takes mental notes. The crazy rumors about this kid's specs are totally legit. He is hyped, baffled by how a literal 9-year-old is packing this kind of heat. And the kid's absolute zero-fear attitude just fuels the fire. He wants to push the limits to see what happens when an unstoppable force meets a tiny, overpowered object. But this blatant disrespect makes Jamie snap. The sheer nerve of some random NPC trying to check his stats, totally unforgivable. He taps back into his original self, the legendary Diablo Volfir, the ultimate menace who literally wiped the floor with pantheons of gods in his past life. So yeah, this geezer just signed his own death warrant. In a split second, Jamie weaponizes his mana, blasting a shockwave straight at the guy, to hit him with a brutal reality check. The old mage doesn't even blink. He just stands there, keeping that annoying, calculating stare, locked dead onto the Welton prodigy. But then the atmosphere shifts. The old man's smirk gets instantly wiped off his face, his eyes going wide as he realizes he vastly underestimated the absolute monster standing in front of him. Meanwhile, Jamie is throwing off massive aura, visibly salty, that his power move didn't instantly vaporize the guy. He's seething. The sharp-eyed elder chuckles, his expression shifting to pure awe. Because honestly, it's mind-blowing that a literal 9-year-old is casually wielding this kind of apocalyptic power. He drops some major props, hyping up the kid's lightning-fast reflexes before announcing it's his turn to deal some damage, and flip the script. Jamie is low-key thrilled. The old man is a master of his craft, and the thrill of a real fight gets Jamie's blood pumping. But hold up, something's off. The way the elder weaves the magic formula, completely bizarre for a head-to-head clash. Jamie's kinetic vision kicks in, catching that the strike is a total dud, missing him by a mile. Why even bother dodging? This absolute Giga Chad move leaves the old mage totally stunned. He can't process how the kid didn't even flinch. Standing there like a brick wall, utterly unfazed by a high-tier spell, suddenly a massive shadow drops between them. Jamie's dad spawns in, aggressively shutting down this chaotic sparring match in the middle of his hallway. His voice drops an octave, shooting a lethal glare that warns the elder he just crossed a massive red line. Furious that some hotshot guest would try to jump his underage son like a total amateur, the Count instantly pivots, dropping to one knee, frantic as he checks Jamie for injuries, going full protective dad mode after that insane magical crossfire. Cue the Oscar-winning performance. Jamie remembers his disguise and hits the panic button, turning on the waterworks like a normal 9-year-old, sobbing and stuttering out fake reassurances that he's totally fine. Seeing those tears, that's the final straw. His dad absolutely loses it, forcefully dragging Marquis Linmel away for a very hostile chat, while Jamie smirks internally, realizing that without his dad stepping in, the kid didn't even flinch, straight up flexing his absolute zero fear. Instead of getting mad, the silver-haired dude just cracked up, totally caught off guard by the sheer disrespect of this hilarious standoff. Catching his breath, he admitted he was low-key jealous of the Count. Why? Because this boy was packing some insanely overpowered potential, just waiting to be unleashed, to shake the very foundations of their world. But the Count, yeah, he wasn't vibing with this hype at all. He was still fuming, totally failing to see the logic behind launching a literal magic attack at a toddler. Fast forward a couple of minutes, The trio relocated to a plush lounge to hash out this utter madness, with Argino absolutely demanding answers. Voice dripping with venom, he roared that this was his flesh and blood, the future lord of the Welton house, making that unhinged stunt a massive red flag. But even with a furious dad breathing down his neck, the old mage stayed ice cold, acting like this was just another Tuesday. That arrogant chill only threw gasoline on the fire, triggering the Count's explosive aura that could easily make a veteran spellcaster wet their pants, proving why he was a top-tier swordmaster. Unbothered, Marcus leaned in, smirking, and asked how much the Count actually knew about his own kid, because honestly, missing this kind of talent was practically a crime. Argino just blinked, completely thrown off guard by this curveball question. The old man deadpanned that he wasn't capping at all. The Welton heir was a certified prodigy. He needed the absolute best grindstone to sharpen those wild skills. Letting out a heavy, stressed-out sigh, Argino snapped back that this was exactly why he hired a living legend in the first place, only for said legend to randomly ambush his boy and put his life on the line. Reading the room, Marcus realized the dad was genuinely clueless about what just went down. He decided to just slide past the Count's raging rant, leaving the poor guy completely in the dark. Keep in mind, this guest was the undisputed strongest 8th-class sorcerer alive, meaning whatever dropped out of his mouth was basically gospel truth. Hearing this, self-doubt started creeping into the father's mind. Did he hype up his boy too much? After all, it took an absolute unit of a wizard, like the guy sitting across from him, to actually gauge the kid's true stats. But right now, the legendary old man was talking in pure riddles, leaving Argino scrambling to piece together the puzzle, so he could make his next move. Dropping the ultimate bomb, Marcus flat-out rejected, taking the boy as a disciple, admitting he simply wasn't qualified to handle him. Argino's jaw metaphorically hit the floor. If the absolute goat of magic couldn't do it, who the heck could? Marcus went on to reveal that little Jamie, despite being practically a toddler with zero field experience, had flawlessly predicted every single micro-movement of his spell. The Count's brain basically short-circuited trying to process this. That kind of battle IQ was physically impossible, no matter how big-brained his kid was. Marcus pointed out that the boy instantly calculated the strike zone of the magic, realizing it wouldn't connect, so he didn't even bother dodging. He was just that insanely cocky. The wildest part, not a single muscle twitched. His confidence was absolute. The Archmage declared that with just solo grinding, Jamie could easily hit Tier 3. In fact, if you ignored the whole weak kid body debuff, his actual raw skill was easily pushing past Tier 4. Calling him a prodigy was an insult. The kid was an absolute monster, who completely eclipsed veteran mages while still drinking juice boxes. He absolutely did not need someone holding his hand. Marcus begged the Count to just back him up with resources. Traditional schooling was useless for a mutant, who was practically guaranteed to hit the mythical 9th class. Left alone with his thoughts, Argino was spiraling. He never imagined his heir was packing this level of god-tier talent, completely shattering the ceiling of his expectations. He white-knuckled his fists, desperately trying to keep his poker face intact, while the old man hyped up his boy to the moon. Hearing that Jamie was destined for 9th-class godhood sent shivers down his spine, forcing him to completely rewrite his entire parenting playbook. Respecting the heavy silence, Marcus backed off, letting the father stew in his thoughts. He pushed off the velvet sofa, dropping one last apology for the sudden magical drive-by. Before leaving, he casually dropped that the magical world was standing on the edge of a massive revolution, one that wouldn't just shake up the wizarding circles, but flip the entire globe upside down as long as this kid's spark wasn't snuffed out. Argino stayed glued to his seat, brain stuck on overdrive. The idea that his tiny son was hoarding enough latent power to completely eclipse an 8th-rank legend was mind-boggling. Now he had to thread the needle how to nurture this wild OP trait without robbing his boy of a normal childhood, especially since the kid probably didn't even realize how busted he was. It was a brutal dilemma. Argino was a family man first, fiercely protective of his son's innocence, yet knowing one wrong move could derail a destiny that would change history forever. Outside the window, the sky had already bruised into a deep purple. The moon peeked through the fog, signaling it was time to wrap up this chaotic day. Retreating to his master bedroom, the Count finally let his guard down, dropping the stoic lord persona to just breathe. Jamie was totally wiped out. Honestly, dealing with his mom's absolute meltdown after she caught wind of the gray-haired wizard's stunt was draining. She was in full mama bear mode, completely terrified for her kid's safety. She swore up and down this would never happen again, vowing to make that old geezer pay for pulling such a shady move. At first glance, the whole day felt like a massive waste of time. But honestly, this bizarre day actually handed him a massive win. Getting hit by that geezer's spell was a disguised blessing. His brain essentially recorded the whole thing. Breaking down the mana structure, the flawless technique, and the sheer balance of it all, Jamie realized this mysterious dude was built entirely different. Getting pressed like that was exactly the reality check he needed to keep his own overpowered skills sharp. But the biggest plot twist, his own dad. Count Welton moved with such lethal precision, it practically left Jamie speechless. He always knew his pops was a beast, but witnessing that god-tier swordsmanship firsthand hit different, proving the man was an absolute menace. Just as Jamie was hyping up his dad in his head boom, that exact same gray-haired wizard materialized right behind him. "What's got you smiling like that?" the old man whispered, sending Jamie's soul straight out of his body. The kid totally froze. The wizard had completely masked his mana, erasing his presence so perfectly that Jamie's radar didn't even beep. Marcus just smirked, roasting the kid for being so lost in the sauce that he didn't even notice the morning's trespasser chilling right on his mattress. Once the shock wore off, Jamie's anxiety spiked into pure frustration. His brain short-circuited, trying to process how this old man bypassed all the security. Honestly, Marcus had successfully rattled him. Jamie sat there sweating bullets, furiously calculating an escape route while wondering what this creep wanted in his room. Marcus cracked up, totally amused by how easily the kid jumped. The old wizard completely forgot he was technically bullying a literal 9-year-old. Jamie brushed off the disrespect, his mind racing to figure out how the heck this guy bypassed the manor's wards, and what his endgame was. Casually, the geezer dropped that he simply teleported in. That detail alone screamed Grand Mage, since spatial magic was locked behind an insanely high skill ceiling. Marcus leaned in, teasing Jamie for acting like a perfect little angel when his dad was in the room. But the second they were alone, the kid dropped the act, completely shedding that innocent 9-year-old facade. Defensively, Jamie snapped back that dealing with family versus some random stalker required two totally different personas. That just made Marcus laugh harder. The old man wiped a tear, sighing that he was too tired to keep messing with a child. Jamie was just glaring at him, utterly confused by this chaotic energy. Why was this insanely overpowered stranger staring at him like a proud grandpa, instead of dropping any actual lore to clear things up? Marcus casually tossed a thick, ancient-looking grimoire onto the bed, mentioning it would be a massive game-changer for his future. Jamie immediately got suspicious. Why hand over top-tier loot to a random kid? But Marcus totally dodged the question. Instead, he hit Jamie with a brutal reality check. The magic the kid flexed earlier was basically ancient history. He needed a serious software update with modern spells. Jamie's face twisted into pure offense, calling his legendary magic outdated was wild disrespect. But Marcus totally misread the glare as awe over the legendary item. The wizard bragged that the book was packed with his own custom, overpowered spells, and Jamie was getting exclusive early access to it. Okay, now the kid was officially hooked. He desperately needed to analyze the power gap between his ancient spells and whatever this modern grandmaster was cooking up. Jamie wasn't stupid. If he wanted to survive this era, adapting to the current meta was absolutely non-negotiable. His long sleep had left him way behind the curve. Suddenly, the chaotic energy vanished and Marcus locked eyes with him. The old man's aura shifted into something intense, stating he was betting big on the kid standing before him. Jamie just stared back, sweating slightly. Marcus challenged him, saying he couldn't wait to see how overpowered the boy would become before they crossed paths again. And just like that, poof, he vanished without leaving a single trace of mana. Jamie let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. That dude was a walking natural disaster. Curiosity taking over, Jamie finally cracked open the heavy cover of the grimoire. The very first page hit him with a heavy truth. All the mana flowing through this world must channel directly through the caster, ultimately anchoring itself deep within their heart. Sure, this was the absolute best way to master mana control, but it came with one massive catch. The human body could only channel so much raw energy at once. Plus, according to the master, his current spellbook was straight-up ancient history. He had to crack the code on Marcus's modern magic. Hyped out of his mind, he inhaled every single page, completely locked in. He soaked up the knowledge like a sponge. But reality hit hard. This stuff wasn't just fascinating, it was insanely complicated. To make it work, he literally had to feel every microscopic particle of mana seeping into his pores and flooding his veins. Pulling off a technique this intense required some next-level focus and a flawless mind-body connection. He flopped face first onto his mattress, wondering what kind of freak could actually pull this off. Honestly, the old-school methods were way smoother, totally practical, and didn't come with these ridiculous side effects. But then, his massive ego kicked in. Hello, he was the one and only Diablo Valfir. Quitting just wasn't in his DNA. He bounced right back up, gears turning as he mapped out a brilliant strategy to conquer this new challenge. Seconds later, he was staring down the exact same textbook he'd rage quit just moments prior. A light bulb went off. This guide was a total game changer, and he silently sent a thank you to the old wizard. He swore right then and there to devour every single word, weaponizing this newfound knowledge to min-max his own stats. But to kick things off, he desperately needed a hyper-reliable assistant. With a flick of his wrist, Jamie summoned Pip, a hovering eyeball familiar that always teleported exactly where he needed it. Honestly, even Jamie was low-key stunned by how fast the little guy spawned in on command. Hit me with some mana, Jamie ordered, and the familiar happily geared up to assist his boss. The shadowy creature locked in, visibly flexing as it hyper-focused on executing the command perfectly. Its eye snapped wide open, unleashing a burst of pure, raw energy, the exact ingredient Jamie needed to start cooking. Right off the bat, he hit the first major roadblock. His physical body hit a hard cap on how much mana it could absorb. To nail the textbook technique, you needed painfully exact measurements, something almost impossible to micromanage manually. But Jamie had a major cheat code. Black acted as a perfect automatic filter, saving him from total mental and physical burnout. Thanks to their soul contract, the familiar could slice the energy output into the exact microdoses required. Problem solved. Black was the ultimate hack for mastering this next-generation magic system, and Jamie had to speedrun this whole process just to keep up with the current era's elite prodigies. With the first hurdle cleared, the second issue didn't seem nearly as intimidating. He just had to work around the fragile stats of his current 9-year-old vessel. The fix, simply spreading the energy load evenly across his entire nervous system. Boom. Flawless. He kept grinding these magic experiments all night long, the hours vanishing in a blur. He stayed busy optimizing his new buffs, but since it had been literally hours, with zero noise from his bedroom, his nanny and dad finally posted up at his door, totally weirded out by his radio silence. They cracked the door open and just froze, completely paralyzed by what they saw. The nanny was utterly clueless about what was happening. His dad, though, recognized the vibe instantly. Yet even he was shook to find his kid deep in a hardcore meditation trance right at dawn. The Count literally couldn't blink. The magical aura radiating off his boy was absolutely hypnotic, pulsing with a flawless natural rhythm. The nobleman just watched in pure awe. Realizing Marcus's parting gift had forcefully leveled up Jamie's mana pool practically overnight, he never could have guessed his innocent 9-year-old was packing this kind of god-tier magical talent. Blown away, the boss of the house immediately banned anyone from interrupting Jamie's grind session today. He stationed a few maids right outside as a VIP support squad, just in case the kid woke up and needed anything. Meanwhile, the poor nanny was stressing out of her mind, desperately trying to compute what was going on with her young master. The Count's brain went into overdrive. If Jamie ditched the sword to become an elite spellcaster, it completely changed the game. It flipped the entire script on their family's future, easily dwarfing the magical bloodline he inherited from his mother's side. This level of genius shattered every expectation, making his maternal relatives look like absolute amateurs in comparison. The Count was hyped. Jamie could legitimately hit the legendary Tier 9, a realm of godlike power Marcus had predicted, while the kid himself was just chilling in his room leveling up. Golden hour sunlight flooded the massive estate, but our boy was locked in. He was grinding away, trying to crack the code of his own core magic. Total tunnel vision. He dove deep into his spiritual center, desperate to figure out the mechanics behind this brand new power system. Well, new to this body, but it was the exact same system he used back in his past life. Snap. His eyes shot open, breaking him out of that intense flow state. He had been in the zone for hours. Reading his own energy like an open book, a smirk crossed his face. He totally nailed it. Splitting raw mana into microscopic particles is usually a chaotic, explosive mess, which definitely threw him off at first. But after just a handful of tries, it clicked like pieces of a puzzle. Still, he hit a hard wall at the 4th tier of mana. For a guy with his god-tier ambition, that was nowhere near enough. To be fair though, he literally picked up this mana control technique a few hours ago. Hitting tier 4 that fast is straight up terrifying. He was practically knocking on the door of the 5th tier, but he had to face facts. This kid's body was way too fragile to handle that kind of heat. Pushing it any further would literally fry his physical limits, so calling a timeout was the only play. Sitting nearby, his absolute unit of a shadow pet was watching like a hawk. The creature subtly checked his vibes, trying to mentally tell his boss to chill out. A quick telepathic chat later, Jamie threw in the towel. Wrecking his own body for a quick power-up just wasn't the move. Plus, the literal gods he planned on destroying weren't going anywhere anytime soon. With that sorted, he cloaked his familiar in a heavy layer of invisibility. To dodge all the annoying questions from the servants. It was time to step out of the lab and go check on his dad. Masking the beast's energy was crucial. If his old man caught wind of a dark entity living in the manor, it would be game over. Black caught the drift in seconds. He instantly sucked up all the heavy mana residue his master had been leaking during the training montage. It was a flawless sync. Being bound as a familiar meant their teamwork was entirely telepathic and seamless. His dad wouldn't suspect a thing. Once the room was completely scrubbed of any magical fingerprints, the coast was finally clear. Jamie headed for the door, but let's be real. Even with zero effort, the guy just naturally oozed a crazy heavy aura. His base stats were simply too massive to mask completely. Cut to the Count's office. The territory boss was booked, and busy dealing with a very pushy new arrival, demanding an audience. Even with the Count's packed calendar, this guy slipped in. The visitor smoothly mentioned how the heist territory was basically a dead zone for religion, and then he dropped a massive thank you for letting the Zenith Church finally set up shop on their turf. Count Argento played it cool, stating he only greenlit the project because faith usually keeps the locals happy and productive. A simple business transaction, right? But the church rep looked confused by this totally clinical answer. The guy started sweating, wondering if the Count was hiding some secret off-the-books terms they never negotiated. Argento leaned back, his tone freezing over. He made it crystal clear that every move he makes is strictly to benefit his land. And since these holy men were stepping onto his property, they better remember exactly who runs the show around here. The atmosphere instantly shifted. The polite chat was actually a heavy-handed threat dressed up as a welcome, basically telling them, do not treat my people like mindless cultists. It was a massive flex showing the church that Argento was not a guy you mess with. The Count kept an iron grip on the vibe, wrapping up the quick power play conversation. He practically pointed at the door telling the guests to beat it if they had so much holy work to do. Tossing out a fake wish for safe travels, they traded awkward goodbyes beneath the so-called blessing of Zenith. The tension in the room could cut glass. Through it all, Argento kept his poker face absolutely flawless, wearing this polite, icy smile right up until the heavy oak doors finally clicked shut. The second he was alone, the smile vanished. His eyes darkened into a heavy, stressed-out glare. He knew letting these fanatics into his territory could blow up in his face big time. But here's the kicker. His oldest son heard every single word. Jamie had been ghosting outside the office the whole time, soaking up the top-secret intel without making a sound. Peeking around the corner, his face twisted. His worst nightmare was literally unfolding in real time. He tried to convince himself he was paranoid, but nope. Right there, stitched on the guest's robes, was that cursed crescent moon and yellow sphere. Worse, he could physically feel the suffocating, disgusting divine pressure rolling off that old priest. Pure, unhinged rage spiked through his veins. How dare the Church of Zenith step foot inside his actual home? It completely shattered his calm. His brain was spinning. Why on earth would his hardcore dad invite these cultists to preach here? His father had never bowed to outside groups before. Staring down the hallway, Jamie made a silent vow he was going to burn this plan to the ground, because there was zero chance he'd let the cult of Zenith take root in his backyard. He locked down his home turf, but his stash of resources was running dangerously dry. To get this new religion greenlit across the territory, he had to completely flip the Count's stubborn mindset. The blueprint was simple: corner his dad for a chat, now then launch a covert midnight investigation later, sourcing bulletproof evidence to shatter his old man's anti-religion stance. Stepping into the Welton Estate's grand parlor, the air felt strictly corporate, a heavy vibe since his dad usually booked this space for high-stakes VIP meetings. Argento was fighting demons, masking a crushing wave of stress from dropping back-to-back brutal decisions recently. Masking the tension, he casually asked if his son had any free time. Flashing a blinding smile, Jamie eagerly nodded, playing it incredibly safe. He had zero clue how much the Count actually knew, especially since today's vibe felt entirely off-script, and it was painfully obvious his father was pulling strings behind the scenes. The Count layered on the warmth, casually dropping a remark about Jamie's hardcore obsession with magic. Our boy didn't even flinch or deny it, since his magical aura was practically screaming the truth. But this chess match was hitting a wall. Raw anxiety bled through. The patriarch's carefully crafted poker face, forcing Jamie to scrutinize him. Still, the kid refused to blow his cover, or hint that he was onto his dad's secrets. Instead, he tilted his head, radiating pure 9-year-old innocence as he asked if everything was okay, fully expecting a generic brush-off instead of a deep emotional dump. But out of nowhere, the Count shattered the silence, spilling his darkest, most immediate fears. He confessed he originally thought his boy would just grow up totally average, a painfully vulnerable fate in their world, but reality just hit him like a truck. His kid was packing god-tier abilities that completely nuked any chance of living a quiet, normal life. It was an absolute double-edged sword. Walking the path of a prodigy is pure hell because standing out from the crowd morphs into a suffocating weight. You can't pawn it off, and you definitely can't erase it from your DNA. You just have to swallow the isolation. Sure, right now flashing that kind of talent just farms hype and awe, but the second he hit adulthood, those same cheering crowds would mercilessly scheme to rip him apart. A massive red flag for Jamie's survival. Argento's knuckles turned white, gripping his armrest, fighting a war against his own panic, desperate not to accidentally traumatize his kid, or send him spiraling into nightmare scenarios, or permanently ruin the beauty of magic for him. Taking a breath, he offered an escape hatch, walk away from the spells whenever he wanted. But the second he chose to grind, his father would back him endlessly. Surprisingly, the kid barely blinked, completely unfazed by the dark side of power haunting his dad. With zero hesitation, Jamie declared he was never dropping magic, claiming it meant the absolute world to him. That raw, fiery passion genuinely sparked joy in the Count's eyes, dreaming of watching his boy max out his stats without derailing his entire future. But in the background, a chilling realization hit him, the aura violently leaking off. Jamie was physically impossible for a 9-year-old. It turned a slightly weird moment into something totally alien. The Count could literally feel his son's raw energy radiating through the room. watching in sheer terror as the boy effortlessly vacuumed up even more power. This completely shattered his expectations. The most terrifying part, the sheer force was bleeding from every single pore of his body. Basic magic theory dictated that mana strictly pools in the heart, yet his son was actively rewriting the laws of physics. Seeking answers, he brought up the grimoire, gifted by Marquis Linmel just last night, probing to see if Jamie had cracked its secrets. Dropping an absolute bomb, Jamie beamed with chaotic energy, proudly announcing he didn't just speed read the entire relic and memorize the core concepts, he actually debugged the trash formulas holding back the spell's true firepower. His dad mentally blue-screened. His jaw practically hit the floor, completely paralyzed by the insane leveling speed. Achieved solo overnight from a single textbook. A suffocating dead air hung between them. Jamie vibrated with excitement, ready to info-dump everything he had just cracked. But the Count was actively glitching out. His brain simply couldn't process that massive data dump without completely short-circuiting. Doing the mental math, Argento realized he was staring at a living myth. His kid was genuinely locked in to become a legendary 9th-class sorcerer, a reality too insane to fully comprehend. But the gut punch, staring at this 9-year-old monster, the Count instantly felt like an absolute scrub. His own life's work looked like a joke compared to what average mages could even dream of wielding. Sensing the shift, Jamie instantly flipped the switch, playing the clueless kid who couldn't figure out why his dad was having a total meltdown of pure awe. Realizing he might have flexed a little too hard, he quickly dialed back his act. He dropped the ultimate dad praise, raving about how insanely proud he was of today's mind-blowing progress. A massive, glowing smile instantly lit up the kid's face. Let's be real, what child wouldn't completely melt hearing their dad call them a literal prodigy, giving the boy's hair an affectionate ruffle? The old man pushed himself up and stepped out, needing some quiet time to process everything and piece the puzzle together. Cut to Jamie, who was practically counting down the seconds until they'd finally get out of his face. He was completely done acting like some naive kid blushing over a basic compliment. Deep down, he fully clocked the real reason they were hyping him up. But plot twist, Argino's eyes locked onto black. He flat out asked if that shadow was his familiar. Cue the internal panic. Jamie had been busting his back to keep his little pet off the radar for as long as humanly possible. This completely derailed his master plan, since exposing his summon was strictly off-limits, leaving him blindsided by the worst kind of jump scare out of absolutely nowhere. His mask slipped for a split second. All that effort to keep this secret buried just instantly up in smoke. Time to improvise. Totally oblivious to Jamie's internal freakout, his dad started grilling him about the magical creature's shape, sizing it up, and casually guessing. It was basically a bat. Kicking himself over the fact that his old man instantly sniffed out its dark magic origins, Jamie scrambled for an excuse. He spun a lie claiming he molded it into a bat and kept his mouth shut, just to hit him with an epic surprise later. Realizing this magical flex was entirely his son's doing, the guy was absolutely stunned. He pulled him into a massive bear hug, practically bursting with pride over his heir's god-tier talent. The second the door clicked shut, Jamie was drained. He dragged himself to his room to recharge his social battery. Utterly exhausted from starring in this fake family sitcom, he just couldn't vibe with a household that actually showed genuine affection, tossing hugs around freely while he was forced to play along. Cut to the city streets, where dusk had rolled in, and the locals were pouring out to blow off some steam after the daily grind. Blending right into the crowd, Jamie went full ghost mode. Rocking a hood to mask his identity, he slipped into the night. He pulled off this stealth mission all thanks to his familiar, a loyal shadow bound by its very code, to obey its creator without a single glitch. Our boy was on a hunt to figure out why some rogue cultists from a religion that already had major beef with him decided to crash his turf. And just like that, the midnight recon began. Using Black as his personal drone, he hijacked a bird's-eye view, locking onto the neon-lit streets below. It didn't take long before he intercepted a shady conversation between two goons chilling on some crates. They were sweating over their next move, totally stressing about the orders handed down by the big bosses they were trying to impress. Guy number one, Philip, basically a mid-level manager in an underground syndicate called Livel, who was heavily regretting signing up for this mess. His buddy Jans was way more unhinged, just a low-level grunt, but sharp enough to know the higher-ups were literally throwing half their squad under the bus for a quick payday. In their eyes, Haste was usually a safe zone. The Count here would conveniently ignore the mob, as long as they didn't cross any major red lines. But human trafficking, yeah, that was an instant death wish. Still, the other dude couldn't stop obsessing over the insane payout, thinking this risk could literally rocket them out of the gutters. Sure, the odds of surviving this heist were practically zero, making it a seriously toxic gamble. It was an absolute house of cards, volatile as a spark in a hurricane. If they got busted, the fallout would be legendary. You had to factor in the Count's extreme obsession with his own kids. If he caught a single whisper about a child trafficking ring operating in his backyard, the man would go scorched earth, ripping the city apart piece by piece. It was no joke, literally that same day the entire criminal underworld would be wiped from existence. The Count absolutely had the firepower to delete them. Yet somehow the mastermind running this whole op was completely delusional, convinced they could ghost the authorities and bag all the loot without a single scratch. The grunts were totally clueless on how they'd outsmart an absolute unit like the Swordmaster. Even though rumors claimed Hani's crew had their backs, that info did absolutely zero to calm the other guys' nerves. These two were stuck between a rock and a hard place. They had to choose between executing an order that screamed suicide mission, fleeing for their lives, or ratting out the architect behind this whole nightmare. Bound by the streets, they finally realized their best play was to pin the blame on someone else entirely. Reporting it was completely off the table. Their only shot at surviving this mess was to pack up, lay low, and vanish. Going off the grid blind wouldn't cut it though. This syndicate had eyes everywhere and would tear the entire territory apart just to hunt them down. Right now, their entire game plan boiled down to one pathetic goal: buying themselves just a few more days of breathing room. They needed to hustle hard. Every second counted, and they had to stall the hunters until they could scrape together enough gear to actually disappear. Both of them were absolutely fuming. Tossing their comfortable lives into the trash for some wild, deadly goose chase was not on their bingo card. And all of this was happening because some higher-up pitched a human trafficking ring, a total garbage idea that was doomed to fail from day one. Sure, their boss was basically a pushover, but greenlighting a shady operation this insanely risky, that completely blew their minds. The hair on the back of their necks suddenly stood up. Stepping out of the shadows was a literal kid, proving he had been eavesdropping this whole time. They had just dropped the most classified top-tier syndicate secrets out in the open. The tension in the alley instantly skyrocketed. They were desperately trying to scrub their tracks and keep their circle totally closed, and now this random brat just crashed their private pity party. Jamie just stood there flashing a cocky smirk. He knew he held all the winning cards in this little standoff. Tilting his head, he dared them to ask the real question. Did they even have a clue who they were dealing with? These thugs were not in the mood for riddles. If even a whisper of their syndicate's plans leaked out, they were dead meat. Zero hesitation. One of the goons launched a brutal right hook straight at the kid's face, aiming to permanently silence their little spy. The second thug, a massive branch boss, instantly backed him up, lunging forward to finish the job. They had crossed the point of no return. This stranger had to be erased. But right as their fists were about to connect, Jamie just evaporated into thin air. Their knuckles hit nothing but empty space instantly, sending a shockwave of pure panic through their veins. Letting this kid slip away meant signing their own death warrants. He was a walking time bomb who could spill their secrets, straight to the heavy hitters who would gladly wipe them out. Before they could even blink, a chilling voice echoed from right behind them, calling them absolute brats. Jamie casually mentioned that their little conversation was way too spicy for him to just walk away without doing a full interrogation. He dropped down right in their blind spot. The thugs flinched hard, absolutely terrified that this pint-sized kid possessed such insane agility. Stepping up, he demanded the full scoop on their little dilemma. And just to establish the brutal power gap between them, Jamie unleashed a suffocating wave of pure mana, slamming it right into their chests. The message was loud and clear. They were completely outmatched. The syndicate members were paralyzed. Their brains short-circuited, trying to process this insane twist, leaving them totally helpless. As this overpowered kid laid down the law, it did not take long for them to crack under the pressure and spill every single detail. Lying was totally off the table when you had a god-tier menace breathing down your neck. The two terrified criminals hated playing the traitor card, but self-preservation kicked in hard. Surviving this monstrous kid was way more important than protecting the garbage bosses who threw them under the bus in the first place. Jamie soaked up every word like a sponge, his blood slowly starting to boil. A child trafficking ring. This was the absolute lowest of the low. It was the exact type of filth his father despised more than anything breathing. Jamie could barely wrap his head around the sheer stupidity of these guys, actually thinking they could get away with selling human lives for a quick cash grab. Did they seriously think karma would not catch up? The idea that corrupt elites played God with human lives, turning lackeys into mindless chess pieces, absolutely disgusted him. They just followed orders like total sheep. But what really bugged Jamie was why the big bosses at the top thought they could pull this off without triggering a massive war. Anyone with a working brain knew the Count's fierce reputation. He would burn their whole operation to the ground. As Jamie pieced the puzzle together, a heavy, unexplainable dread settled in his gut. Time was up. He needed to wrap this little interrogation up. Focusing his mana, he locked onto their minds to completely wipe his own presence from their memories. He planted a deep, hypnotic command right into their brains, an order they literally could not resist. He commanded the duo to march straight to the Count's estate and sing like canaries. Like absolute zombies, the two thugs snapped to their feet, their eyes totally glazed over as they moved out to execute their new mission. They were heading straight into the lion's den. Jamie smirked, knowing that the second the sun came up, absolute chaos would flood the streets. His dad was going to go nuclear and rip the entire syndicate out by its roots. While Jamie started plotting his next epic power move, the two brainwashed syndicate goons marched blindly toward the massive estate, completely dead to the world around them. Jamie's mind control magic was genuinely terrifying. Deciding it was time to play it smart and stop pushing his luck, he called upon his loyal shadow, Familiar Black, to pull him out. Black instantly answered the call, flooding the alleyway with a thick pool of dark mana. It wrapped around Jamie, acting as the perfect camouflage to slip away, completely erasing him from the grim scene. He did not even need to take a single step to pull off the ultimate escape. Out of nowhere, a literal human body gets launched past Jamie. Yeah, he definitely wasn't alone in this alley. He locked eyes with the airborne dude who looked absolutely wrecked, completely outmatched, and backed into a corner. The guy's face was a whole mess of pure panic, zero comprehension, and absolute ugly crying. He was totally helpless. But before Jamie could even process that boom, another body came crashing through the air, tossed like a rag doll by someone way out of his league. Jamie instantly went on high alert, scanning his surroundings. He had to brace for a jump scare. In a sketchy zone like this, literally anything could pop out from the shadows. Then it echoed down the street, some arrogant voice from the darkness, just ruthlessly roasting the two guys who got tossed. Jamie tuned out the noise, trying to pinpoint exactly who he was dealing with. The loudmouth wasn't solo, he had backup. His goons were actually trying to shush him, whispering that all this yelling was going to pull security right to their VIP brawl. But Jamie unbothered. He stepped up with main character energy and casually asked where this psycho, screaming in the dead of night, crawled out from. Honestly, Jamie was low-key furious. How dare this random lay a finger on his personal pawns? These guys were supposed to run an epic side quest for him, and now it was totally derailed. Plans ruined. It was payback time. He was about to give this so-called gang boss a harsh reality check and flex what real terrifying power actually looked like compared to that weak display. The cloaked mage locked his door aura onto the squad. They had zero clue who they were messing with, just staring blindly at his hidden face. Just by stepping up, he literally paused the Grim Reaper for his two beaten lackeys. But that borrowed time wasn't free. He mentally commanded them to finish the job. Meanwhile, Hani, the mid-tier boss of the rival crew, stepped up and ordered his minions to drag the two bruised thugs and the cloaked kid over to him, acting completely out of pocket. He taunted the boy in black. "Why open your mouth?" he sneered, asking if he wanted a one-way ticket to the afterlife too. Jamie just stared at the loudmouth, trying to bait him. This NPC seriously had no idea the absolute nightmare he was about to trigger with that trash talk. Hani's goons roughly grabbed Jamie's two pawns, who had just dodged a bullet thanks to the mage, only to end up right back at square one. One of the dudes broke down, sobbing. He knew it was over. He felt completely pathetic. Getting flatlined now or in 60 minutes didn't make a difference. Fighting back was literally pointless. But the cloaked prodigy, he was chilling, silently calculating the exact frame data needed to pull off his next move. He didn't want to overkill them right away. Priority one was keeping his own vibe flawless while shielding the two extras he'd cast for his little revenge theater. Then out of nowhere, flash, one of the rival goons blitzed him. A brutal strike blew a massive gaping hole straight through the left side of the kid's skull. The combo didn't stop. The cloaked body was suddenly shredded into human Swiss cheese. It looked like game over for Jamie. Hani burst out laughing, watching this brave kid get obliterated so badly, he couldn't even scream. It was supposed to be a humiliating, agonizing end. Hani's ego was through the roof. Feeling like an untouchable god, he strolled closer to the bloodbath, craving to hear the mysterious edgelord beg for mercy. But wait, the camera cuts. Empty space. The wizard's mangled corpse gone, vanished into thin air, and bodies definitely don't just glitch out of reality. One of Hani's lackeys looked down, his brain short-circuiting, the mangled corpse bleeding out at their feet. It was Finn, their own teammate. Hani froze, absolutely baffled. He vividly remembered melting the kid in the black cloak. He never laid a finger on Finn. Then the cinematic hair-raising moment, a chilling whisper brushed against the back of Hani's neck. Jamie was right behind him, brutally roasting the boss for pulling a friendly fire fail. Panic spiked. Hani whipped around, desperate to catch a glimpse of the ghost he just supposedly flatlined. But Jamie sidestepped the reaction swing and teleported away in a blink. Flexing his insane speed, the boy materialized right in his face. "Did you have fun packing up your own minion?" Instead of hitting your actual target, Jamie was thriving right now. He had outplayed the Reaper entirely, used an illusion to force his enemy into team killing, and heavily tilted the raid boss. Hani's mind was spinning with questions. Who the hell was this cloaked phantom? How did he survive? Was that pile of burning ash on the pavement actually all that was left of poor Finn? And the biggest red flag, what was this suffocating pitch-black aura wrapping around the young mage like a demon? Jamie just smirked. He dropped a cold warning, "Don't act tough, and rush in blindly when your mana is stuck at a pathetic level 3, because in this lobby he was completely outmatched. This syndicate branch boss wasn't about to just take the L and roll over. fighting tooth and nail right down to the wire in a desperate bid to break free from the mage's suffocating grip. Bro whipped out third-tier explosion magic to get the job done. Sure, it didn't pack that god-tier 5th-class punch, but it still hit like an absolute truck. He was dead set on incinerating this kid's tiny frame, turning the very brat who just clowned him into absolute ash. A blinding spark ignited between them, the supposed grand finale of this clash, which had completely derailed thanks to Jamie's galaxy brain deception. Yet our boy didn't even flinch. He straight up mocked him, claiming that when facing a true powerhouse, people morph into pathetic, fragile puppets, completely at the mercy of their master. That is exactly why he found it so incredibly satisfying to brainwash arrogant fools, who actually thought they stood a chance against his magic. A mere handful of seconds passed, before the boss completely collapsed, violently hitting his knees in a display of total helplessness. That cocky mobster energy from a minute ago, completely wiped out, replaced by raw agony in his final miserable moments. His lackeys watched the whole thing go down their jaws practically on the floor, seeing their boss get absolutely folded, with zero sweat broken. That massive reality check made one thing crystal clear: they were up against an absolute monster. They needed to dip, fast, before his ruthless wrath locked onto them next. Following their leader's brutal takedown, instead of begging or yapping, these goons basically accepted their fate, cursing their totally garbage luck for even stepping foot in this area today. The same guys who were just plotting their great escape from a battle, screaming guaranteed game over, suddenly realized they were boxed in. No exit, no hope. With one lethal, calculated step, Jamie could snuff them out, sending them to the Shadow Realm before their brains even processed the threat. And that is exactly what went down. Flashing a darkly satisfied smirk at their sheer terror, the young mage simply clenched his fist and permanently hit the mute button on their suffering. Dusting off his hands, he spun back to his original target, the big boss, now surrounded by his fallen crew, ready to squeeze him dry for his own personal agenda. Zero hesitation, zero questions asked. He viciously yanked the dude up by his hair, dragging his battered face forward to ensure he was fully locked in for the ultimate command, about to drop. Step 1. Jamie needed him to spill every single ounce of top-secret intel locked in that skull. Because, let us be real, holding the title of branch manager meant this guy had VIP access to the underground's darkest secrets. Absolutely scrambled by the crushing magical pressure from those final hits, the boss was stripped of his free will, transformed into an obedient, mindless zombie, forced to blindly echo his new master's commands. Like a broken record, he spilled the entire disgusting blueprint regarding the underground child trafficking ring. Honestly, this wasn't a shocker to our boy, having already extracted the same sick details from his previous victims. But this juicy confession proved that the black market rumors were 100% legit, giving him the perfect leverage to finally force a heavy confession out of his own father. Now came the real headache: what to do with this shattered gang leader. Even though Jamie barely flexed on him physically, the guy's soul was utterly annihilated. The physical shell remained intact, but the Grim Reaper was already knocking. Normally, a third-tier magic user biting the dust like this would instantly respawn as an undead minion. But with his soul shredded into pixel dust, this body was destined to rot fast, bringing a horribly grotesque vibe to the area. Out in the blood-soaked trenches of a war zone, totally normal. But dropping a decaying zombie in the middle of a populated city, that was a fast track to mass panic. Jamie knew he had hit a dead end here. He desperately needed a cleaner alternative to sweep this mess under the rug, without triggering a massive headache for himself, or sparking citywide chaos. Then it clicked. A third-tier magic caster was basically a walking, breathing battery, packed with a massive mana reserve. Time to get a little creative with recycling. Extending his hand toward the limp, broken figure, he initiated a brutal drain, mercilessly siphoning every last drop of lingering magical energy. He pulled the raw power deeper into his core with every ticking second. After several intense minutes, the recharge was complete. He felt insanely revitalized, his internal balance totally locked back in after the grueling clash. Sure, the host's physical limits meant the stolen mana was laced with some nasty impurities, but gobbling up that much raw energy was a massive ultimate buff for future battles. With the boss handled, his eyes shifted to his original two victims, the very dudes he had caught lacking during that sneaky eavesdropping session, now parked on the ground like obedient dogs awaiting commands. Even though he forcefully pumped mana back into their veins to keep them breathing, their life force was dropping dangerously low. He needed a clutch play right now, or these valuable pawns would bleed out for literally no reason. A crazy high IQ strategy instantly popped into his head, the perfect shortcut to execute his master plan without burning extra time or stamina. To pull this off, he just had to manifest the dark magic of black. So who was going to step up and act as the ultimate mana battery for this insane stunt? Boom. His loyal familiar popped into existence, ready to drop everything and serve Jamie without a second thought. Since he could not just flat out execute these guys, they still had unfinished business. Jamie tapped into the darkest art of all necromancy. It was the only viable play he had left. We are talking about straight-up puppeteering corpses. Sure, it mimics resurrection, but absolutely zero free will is included in the package. These walking flesh puppets, yeah, they were officially stripped of their life rights. Necromancy spits right in the face of logic and Mother Nature. It is pure, unadulterated paranormal chaos. And starting right now, these two dudes were permanently on his undead payroll. They were stuck walking around as mindless meat shields, completely defying the cycle of life and death, existing solely to execute his every command. But to pull off this massive middle finger to reality, Jamie desperately needed his shadow pet to keep the magic stable so he did not blow himself up. The loyal beast did not even blink, flooding the fresh zombies with a massive wave of backup mana, effectively locking in their mental tether to their master. Fully charged and backed up, our boy pushed the ritual into overdrive, ready to forge the ultimate mindless action figures. But even as he pumped raw magic into their veins to kickstart their dead muscles, granting them a fake illusion of life, something started glitching. These guys were actively fighting back, desperately clinging to whatever shred of their souls remained. It was honestly pathetic. After the absolute physical beatdown they just took over the last few hours, their odds of pulling through were practically non-existent. Jamie literally offered them the ultimate cheat code, an immortal shell, completely immune to human pain and fatal damage. Yet they still resisted. Suddenly their eyes glazed over with this freaky hollow glow, flashing the exact signal that the spell was finally taking root. Not wasting a single heartbeat, Jamie sped up the incantation to seal the deal, refusing to leave them even a sliver of a chance to snap back to reality. The purple-haired guy broke first, his human consciousness completely shattering as his mind plunged into a dark, endless void. He let out an absolutely blood-curdling shriek as the dark magic violently mutated his body from the inside out. Seconds later, his buddy suffered the exact same fate. Rest in peace to their humanity, they were officially full-blown walking corpses. Black was the absolute hard carry in all of this, working overtime to feed Jamie a massive, unending stream of raw magic power. Jamie stared down at his new creations intensely, praying this crazy gamble actually paid off, and he had secured his elite undead squad. The second word spilled from their dead lips. It confirmed his total absolute domination. He owned them now. But hold up. A split second later, a chilling vibe made him question if the spell actually worked flawlessly, because lurking right behind, pitch black, otherworldly aura oozed off their bodies like absolute nightmare fuel. The duo just stared right through him, their eyes totally hollow as they processed their new reality. But after that chaotic ritual, Black started tweaking, pacing around like he sensed a massive glitch in the Matrix, leaving Jamie totally clueless. The kid snapped at his familiar to zip it, and stopped stressing heavily, implying that having zero doubts was mandatory for their master plan to actually work. He was dead set on the fact that his little buddy had nailed the execution perfectly. So he tried brushing off the panic, aiming to keep the vibe stable. Deep down though, Jamie swallowed his pride and realized he fumbled the bag himself. He kinda saw this epic fail coming, but watching his own flawed handiwork play out was a tough pill to swallow. Even though he didn't want to ego trip over his past overpowered status, catching himself making total rookie mistakes still stung horribly. Messing up a basic entry-level summoning, he seriously debated just scrapping these two unlucky test subjects right then and there. If they couldn't execute his flawless strategy, they were just straight up dead weight. Walking around, leaking abyss-level dark energy meant sneaking into Janice's holy turf, or even grabbing a drink at a local pub, was completely off the table. Their stealth stats were literally at 0. Meanwhile, Black was acting super unhinged, doing absolutely everything in his power to snap his spacing out master back to reality. To finally get Jamie to look down, the Shadow Beast literally chomped onto his cheek, practically screaming that he was ready to carry the team on his back. Jamie flared up, low-key offended that his minion would disrespect the boss hierarchy like that. But once he snapped out of his funk and actually locked eyes with Black, the creature smoothly drifted down, right onto the skull of one of the fresh zombies staring intensely. By channeling his focus, the familiar could hijack their dark aura, basically giving their chaotic undead models a much-needed stealth patch. Watching that massive demonic smokescreen vanish left Jamie absolutely hyped. He had no clue his pet skill tree was this broken. Black flexed his abilities right then and there, proving he was the ultimate ride-or-die sidekick, ready to clutch up whenever things went south. He straight up vacuumed every ounce of that busted dark energy that was ruining the zombies' stealth capabilities, clearing the stage so his master could shine again. Cue the glow-up. The two corpses reverted to looking like totally average NPCs, perfectly matching the master's original sneaky blueprints. Jamie did a quick visual sweep of the room, scanning for any extra traps or glitches that might derail his plot. But instead of danger, he just spotted his bloated familiar, totally gassed out. After tanking all the rogue magic that Jamie accidentally spilled, the necromancer immediately showered his pet with hype, praising the little guy for saving the whole tactical operation from flopping. Pivoting back to his fresh mob drops, he figured it was time for an unboxing, giving them official titles and just enough brain cells to run basic errands. Jens was getting a rebrand as Ozard. It perfectly matched his menacing, super toxic villain aesthetic. Meanwhile, Philip got hit with the tag Rizal, a nod to his beastly blood-sucking vibe that totally contradicted his pathetic begging from before. Jamie sparked them up with a single activation command, flashing a smug grin because he literally owned these two trapped souls' body and mind now. At the drop of a syllable, the undead duo snapped to attention, completely locked in and ready to execute whatever unhinged side quest their boss threw at them. He could literally flick his wrist and their hollow eyes would track the movement, mechanically processing their next waypoint based on his voice. Honestly, the whole scene was insanely ironic, considering 5 minutes ago, these dudes were scheming a grand escape to start fresh and ditch the shady syndicate. Fast forward and they're right back to being corporate slaves, just as literal rotting meat puppets this time. The brain-dead duo just kept staring at Jamie's hand like a buffering video, completely frozen without a direct prompt or any shred of free will. Jamie realized their operating systems were still booting up, needing a hot second to calibrate, because their flesh avatars couldn't process the hardcore magical upgrade they just survived. Sinking to their knees, the husks bowed down, radiating absolute submission to the literal god who yanked them from the grave. Even if their new life was totally cursed. Out of nowhere, the newly minted Ozard rasped out a question asking if the kid was his maker, slowly piecing together the wild reality check. Jamie didn't even blink before dropping a hard yes, wanting to instantly hardwire the fact that creator meant absolute boss in their smooth brains, ensuring they'd be top-tier minions. Meanwhile, the confused zombie started questioning who this cloaked mystery guy. The kid standing across from him barely looked a day over 10, but the suffocating aura bleeding out of him, absolutely terrifying. It completely defied logic. For a split second, it felt like this pint-sized powerhouse had clawed his way straight out of some dark folklore, radiating a pure, unfiltered malice that had zero business existing in reality. As the clock ticked down, that primal dread just kept skyrocketing, the sickening pressure radiating off this so-called child making his skin crawl. And Jamie, he was absolutely eating it up, reading his new puppet's sheer panic like an open book. He didn't even bother masking his twisted grin, practically flaunting a god-level dominance that utterly crushed whatever defiance his victim had left. To the walking corpse staring him down, Jamie looked dead up like a demon lord. The sheer volume of raw, pitch-black mana swirling around him was a massive flex, screaming exactly who held all the cards here. Razel could only watch this nightmare unfold in absolute horror, mind blown that he had somehow stumbled into this literal hellscape, reduced to nothing more than a plaything for a total psychopath. Scraping together whatever pathetic shred of bravery he still had, he balled his trembling hands into fists, trying to project a tough guy vibe, even though he was basically a shackled dog. Razel barked out that he didn't care if he was dealing with the demon lord himself, but there was no shot. The thing in front of him was human, not while rocking the body of a grade schooler. Instead of getting mad, Jamie actually found it hilarious. Their pointless little rebellion was highly entertaining, but playtime was over. It was time to teach these mutts how to properly grovel before their master. Low-key, he knew this was on him. He had botched the initial brainwashing, failing to perfectly wipe their minds and chain them at the actual soul level. But our boy wasn't about to just let that slide, stepping up to forcefully rewrite their reality, so his grandmaster plan went off without a single hitch. Just a subtle flick of the wrist. Boom. One of the guys face planted straight into the dirt, instantly paralyzed, and entirely at Jamie's mercy. Jamie went full savage on purpose, laying down the brutal law to show them exactly what happens when you cross your new boss. Absolute blind loyalty was his non-negotiable rule. Letting the silence stretch, he locked eyes with them, and warned them that they got a free pass today, but if they ever glared at him like that again, game over. Dead serious, Jamie swore he would vaporize anyone who even pretended they still had free will, or stepped out of line. The second dude was just standing there, bug-eyed brain, totally short-circuiting at the threat. Seeing his former buddy kiss the pavement so fast, he knew instantly he had to follow suit, and play it insanely safe. Meanwhile, the Dark Mage calmly analyzed the two stolen souls now tethered to his own, knowing full well that whatever they actually wanted didn't matter. The blood pact was sealed, making them absolute slaves to his commands. He literally owned them, holding the power of life and death in his palms, the absolute unbreakable law of the dark arts. But plotting his next move, he figured dialing back the supreme evil act just a fraction might work in his favor, deciding to drop a massive truth bomb on his new pets. Shrugging his tiny shoulders, he casually admitted that, despite the killer aura, he wasn't some mythic demon lord. Nope, they were just staring at a regular dude orchestrating this entire chaotic masterpiece. Shaking off a sliver of his terror, Razel choked out a question. If he wasn't a demon, then what exactly was he? Because that suffocating pressure, 0% ordinary. Smirking like he just won the lottery, Jamie dropped the lore. He was a dark sorcerer who had literally thrown down with the gods. a menace who never compromised on his ultimate endgame, no matter how wild things got. Pivoting instantly, he laid out their one and only mission: ghost the Church of Zenith, and vacuum up every single piece of intel they could scrape together. On top of that, he threw in a side quest track, down the specific scumbag, running the local human trafficking ring, and drag him back breathing. He needed actionable intel, not more mindless zombies. Taking the hint, his newly minted lackeys dropped their heads, not daring to breathe a word of protest. They were officially in the system, hardwired to execute whatever insane scheme their boss dreamed up. Risking a quick glance upward to see if the cloaked terror was still hovering over them, one of them let out a massive, shaky breath. The spot where Jamie just stood was completely dead empty. The kid had ghosted them, leaving them stranded in the alley, to somehow process the absolute fever dream they had just survived. Locking eyes, they shared a silent, totally bewildered look, having zero clue how to even begin navigating this insane new reality. But before they could spiral, the mind control kicked into high gear, forcefully wiping their panic and spinning them right toward the church. They bolted out, perfectly programmed to deliver exactly what the Dark Mage ordered. Cut to an alley across the street, where Jamie's magical familiar was fiercely debating his owner, while the kid barely paid him any attention. Jamie effortlessly shut Black down, metaphorically yanking the invisible leash of submission, so tight that open rebellion was literally impossible, no matter how pissed the familiar got. With that, handled the issue of his father. Taking down this underground smuggling ring, that was completely on him now, but honestly, crushing these scumbags would be an absolute breeze. Selling people crossed his ultimate red line. Plus, there was absolutely zero chance he was just going to ignore the trash polluting his backyard. After all, he was the heir, and this entire territory was destined to fall right into his lap anyway. But right now, the clock was ticking. He had been sneaking around in the dark for way too long. If the maids or his parents caught him missing from his bed, his cover was completely blown. Muttering under his breath, he signaled that it was time to dip. He expected his magical familiar to just teleport them back, but out of absolutely nowhere, a massive thud slammed right into his spine. It happened so fast that his insane reflexes didn't even trigger. Spinning around with pure murder in his eyes, his glare softened slightly. Some random kid had basically bulldozed into him, clearly sprinting for his life without checking his blind spots. Still, a supreme being trapped in a kid's body doesn't just let disrespect slide. His annoyance instantly spiked over this pathetic disruption. Sure, accidents happen, but touching a grand mage, major mistake. He was seconds away from completely obliterating this clumsy pedestrian. He paused, catching himself right before unleashing chaos. It was literally just a terrified brat, definitely not an assassin. And the absolute irony, Jamie entirely forgot his own avatar right now was a literal kid, a fact the sniveling boy aggressively pointed out. You see, with a mind forged over centuries of bloodshed, he naturally forgot he was currently just a 9-year-old child. Trapped in this tiny frame, he put on his best boss aura. Sighing deeply, he promised to let the kid walk away intact this once. He dropped a heavy warning to watch his surroundings, secretly acknowledging that starting a street brawl over a bumped shoulder was low-key embarrassing. The grounded kid just stared at him, absolutely baffled. Why was a pint-sized peer lecturing him like a battle-hardened war veteran? The math simply wasn't mathing. Suddenly, the kid found his voice roasting Jamie for acting like a boomer, when he didn't even have a single gray strand on his head. Apparently, silver hair equaled supreme authority in this kid's brain. That incredibly bizarre logic threw the Dark Mage completely off guard. Facing such a hilariously stupid comeback, Jamie genuinely blanked. How do you even counter that? The kid wasn't technically wrong about the hair color, but using it as a metric for maturity was absolutely unhinged. Locking eyes with the brat trembling in the dirt, Jamie noticed something super suspicious out of the corner of his eye. His own hair was glowing, a totally different shade, practically screaming that his shadow pet was interfering. Black was playing games behind his back. The absolute audacity of his familiar to physically block him from catching a body was insane. Since when did his shadow minion develop a conscience? Pushing that annoyance aside, he locked a death glare on the shivering child. He delivered one final, bone-chilling warning: keep your mouth shut, or face consequences worse than death. The temperature in the alley basically dropped to sub-zero. The immense killing intent hit the kid so hard, he was practically holding back tears. Survival instincts finally kicked in. The kid scrambled forward, sputtering frantic apologies to avoid getting erased from existence. Seeing his master choose peace over an unnecessary massacre, the shadowy familiar internally celebrated. With the crisis averted, Black finally triggered their escape route. But they had burned way too much time playing around in the streets. They needed to warp straight to his bedroom instantly, or the entire household would flip out. The moment his boots hit his actual floorboards, Black instantly went into full pout mode, acting totally betrayed by the scolding. Jamie literally ignored the guilt trip. The shadowy pup knew exactly why he was in the doghouse. You simply do not restrict a dark wizard's movements. Promising a much worse beatdown if mutiny ever crossed his mind again, Jamie watched the shadow entity dramatically sulk in the corner. Honestly, he had no idea who taught his pet to be this soft. completely drained the tiny mage, absolutely face-planted into his mattress. The brutal physical toll of running Black Ops all night suddenly slammed into him like a freight train. Burning through that much mana was definitely not part of his original schedule. Moving forward, his calendar was going to be packed with carnage. So much for laying low and enjoying a peaceful, stress-free second life, right? Because out of all the insane plot twists, the divine scum he despised the most, Zenith was already digging his claws into this territory. Just thinking that cursed name made his tiny knuckles crack. Pure, unadulterated hatred practically venomized his bloodstream. That fake deity had ruined his entire past existence. Now, the only thing on Jamie's menu was a very slow, highly destructive revenge. Staring at the ceiling, he essentially trash-talked the heavens. Zenith could spawn an army of zealots for all he cared. It wouldn't change a single thing. The absolute bloodlust radiating from the boy's glowing eyes was terrifyingly authentic. He was breathing for one specific purpose, now dragging that corrupt god straight down to hell. Meanwhile, back in the grimy city streets, his mind-controlled pawns were finally making their move. Assad stepped out of the shadows, ready to ambush his old crew. They needed answers, and fast. Where was the top dog running this whole twisted human trafficking ring? The thug's jaw practically hit the floor. He had literally seen Jens as a lifeless corpse, yet here this guy was breathing and asking questions. His brain totally short-circuited. Hanny promised he was going to wipe both of them off the map, yet Jens was standing right there fully intact. It hit him like a truck. His partner must have gotten absolutely wrecked by the dude who couldn't even use a single drop of mana. To jog the terrified guy's memory, Jens slammed his fist into the brick wall, mere inches from the thug's nose. Dust crumbled. The unspoken threat was loud and clear. The next punch was caving his face in. Jens was running out of patience. He had a strict mission from his master, and he wasn't about to fail. There was zero time for a slow interrogation. Trembling, the syndicate lackey spilled, claiming absolute radio silence from the rest of the crew. If the gang found out Jens rose from the dead, it would be pure, unadulterated chaos. Knowing his squad had likely been wiped out, the thug desperately scrambled to save his own skin, stuttering out that he had no clue where the boss vanished to. But before he could even finish his sentence, a second undead enforcer materialized right behind him. This guy commanded way more respect and gave off an insane boss-level aura that completely dominated the room. Philip, cold as ice, leaned in and demanded to know if the thug was actually spitting facts or just trying to buy time. Sweating bullets, the hostage swore on his life. It was the absolute truth. If they didn't believe him, they could literally go ask anyone else in the gang. This was getting ridiculous. They needed the head honcho to finish their quest. Since the boss pulled the strings in the shadows, he knew every dirty little secret pulsing through the city streets. That meant he definitely held the missing puzzle pieces about the church. Realizing threats weren't working, Philip switched tactics. Instead of asking for exact coordinates, he demanded an educated guess. Where would a rat like that scurry off to? No more dodging. The trapped gangster knew he had to drop a solid lead right now, or these two superpowered zombies were going to end his subscription to life. Playing it safe, he tipped them off that the boss was a total party animal. He loved knocking back drinks and flirting, making the gang's underground VIP clubs the perfect hunting ground. The two undead exchanged a silent look. It tracked perfectly. Crashing the local syndicate bars was their best shot at catching their target slipping. The hostage let out a massive sigh of relief, genuinely believing he had just talked his way out of an early grave. He thought he was home free. Bam! The stronger enforcer instantly hooked him across the jaw, knocking his lights out and completely shattering his hopes of walking away intact. They weren't just leaving him there. Their master strictly commanded them to drag back a living witness. And this unconscious clown was the perfect ticket to exposing the horrific child smuggling ring. But now, they had a slight logistical headache. Where do you stash a kidnapped mobster? They debated chaining him up in the creepy woods, but the other vetoed that, suggesting they just toss him in their own private warehouse instead. It was way more secure and totally off the grid. So Azar casually slung the unconscious guy over his shoulder, and they dipped. Frustrated that they had burned so much time on an interrogation that barely gave them a crumb of a lead. Cut to a different part of the city. A figure was prying open the door to a notorious shady dive bar, usually swarming with the worst scum imaginable. But right now, it was a ghost town. With every single step he took, he stumbled across more lifeless bodies. He practically slipped on the thick pools of crimson painting the hardwood floor. It was the exact same street kid who crashed into Jamie earlier. His eyes were wide with pure terror, his brain completely unable to process the absolute massacre in front of him. What kind of monster did this? He tried to block out the horrifying reality that every single person in the room had been brutally slaughtered. Safe to say, he wasn't going to get any answers out of these guys anytime soon. Just 5 minutes ago, he was sweating over getting beat up for leaving a gate unlocked. Now, the guys who used to bully him were permanently offline. Survival instincts kicked in. He spun on his heels and bolted, knowing if backup arrived, he'd be dead meat just for seeing the aftermath. Meanwhile, the vibe was night and day over at the Count's estate. Golden morning sunlight spilled through the massive windows, bringing a false sense of peace to the start of the day. But he knew deep down today was going to be radically different, and dodging it wasn't an option. The young master let out a heavy sigh, mentally bracing himself for a grueling schedule he was totally dreading. He didn't have a say in the matter, so he just had to lock in. He threw on his clothes, prepping to face the music, ready to tackle the inevitable responsibilities waiting outside his door. Taking one last breath, he locked eyes with his magical familiar. He had to quickly kill the connection. His dad's radar was acting up, sensing someone was lurking around. Showtime. Jamie slapped on his perfect sun mask, strolling into the dining room to drop his usual morning greetings. But only his dad replied. His mom, completely missing in action from the breakfast table. The head of the house was totally chill, flashing a warm smile and asking how he slept. Jamie almost sighed in relief at her absence, until he spotted a familiar lock of hair peeking out, proving the universe still hated him. Boom, ambush. She practically tackled him with a massive bear hug, going through major withdrawal since he ghosted them yesterday. He hated it. But he was locked into this golden child performance, and there was no escaping the stage. So he played it cool, acting completely oblivious to her super obvious hiding spot, a total fake-out. In reality, he spotted her miles away, just praying he could delay his daily dose of torture a few seconds longer. His mom was practically glowing, totally hyping herself up over her successful sneak attack. She eagerly asked if she spooked him, but Jamie smoothly spun it, claiming it was more of a blessing than a jump scare. The lady was absolutely obsessed. With him acting this sweet, she was ready to glue herself to his side 24/7. Desperate to hit the brakes, Jamie casually tried steering the vibe toward the food. He needed anything to break her suffocating, super clingy affection that he was barely tolerating. Plot twist: a double team. Now, his little sister joined the fray, trapping him in a two-way hug sandwich. They were basically trying to smother him with weaponized family love. He finally fought his way out, demanding his basic right to eat, officially kicking off the meal that got hijacked by this cringe cuddle fest. His mom swiftly shifted her radar to her next target, the little sister, who totally ate up the attention without a fight. She was practically beaming, soaking in all that pure affection. Catching this, Jamie actually had a split-second glitch. He seriously felt the urge to squish his sister's ridiculously chubby, soft cheeks. It was nearly impossible to resist. But reality crashed back down, and he instantly mentally slapped himself for letting his guard down and going off script. As the plates cleared, the family started hyping up some massive event dropping tomorrow. Jamie was completely out of the loop. Still distracting his sister, he shot his dad a questioning look. He needed the tea on tomorrow's schedule. A guy had to stay updated on family lore, let alone city gossip. Argino blinked, genuinely shook that he forgot to brief his oldest son on the upcoming chaos. A flash of dad guilt hit him. His mom immediately chimed in, dodging the blame by claiming it slipped her mind too. She used her chronic mom worry as the ultimate shield. Jamie instantly connected the dots. She was definitely stressing over that day she caught him pulling off that crazy full-body breathing technique. Knowing her dramatic personality, that visual definitely gave her major nightmares. Feeling a bit awkward, Jamie dropped a quick strategic apology for spiking her blood pressure, partly out of guilt, but mostly to lock in those trust points. But his mom waved it off, vowing she was solid, as long as her kids were breathing. She practically begged them to keep a low profile so her heart could catch a break. Because if Jamie kept pulling stunts like that, she threatened to literally collapse in the hallway and ugly cry from the stress. Snapping back to the main quest, Jamie pushed for details on tomorrow's mysterious hype. Turns out they were crashing a massive elite gala thrown by the Counts of Simon and Welton. Basically every high roller in the Eastern Kingdom of Seldom was on the VIP list. Historically, kids were banned, but they had leveled up in age, and his mom was absolutely living for the fantasy of showing them off at this fancy shindig. Jamie, however, internally screamed as his precious free time vanished into thin air. More mandatory family bonding, more playing the flawless golden boy. That meant he had to speedrun his current side quest. Before the ball, fast forward to nightfall, he threw on his cloak. Time to slip into the shadows and ghost through the city. For this op, he tagged in his loyal magical sidekick, ordering him to track down their two undead minions, who were supposed to be grinding hard all day. A quick covert flight landed him right at his target drop zone. Touching down flawlessly, he sneaked over to check on his undead crew, who had actually knocked out a solid chunk of the work. From here, he stalked through the terrain totally solo, no longer needing Black to hold his hand. Meanwhile, a heavy door creaked open into a pitch-black room. The guests had finally clocked in to drop their status report for the day. Both looked dead serious. They knew this entire high-stakes operation rested right on their decaying shoulders. They needed to go all in. Jamie whipped back his hood, cutting straight to the chase about his commands, demanding to know their actual progress. One of the lackeys visibly flinched, stammering out a tense apology, before admitting they had hit a massive dead end regarding the Zenith Church. But the guy scrambled to save face quickly, promising that the target would be wiped off the map shortly. Surprisingly, our boy did not even blink. He knew the score. Even top-tier syndicate bosses could not crack highly classified intel in a single day. Without missing a beat, he pivoted to his second directive. Now this mission was a total dub. They dragged in a syndicate insider, a guy perfectly positioned to spill the tea on the underground trafficking ring. Straight to the Count, exactly as ordered. The captive scanned the dark room, his eyes locking onto the kid's signature hair. Absolute panic set in. As he connected the dots, the Welton bloodline was onto them, and his karma was knocking loudly at the door. The undead minions chimed in, revealing this trembling guy was actually a high-ranking crime lord. He already knew Hannibal was out for his blood, turning him into the ultimate desperate snitch. Azad chimed in with a quick warning, noting the captive was totally clueless about the specific details they actually cared about. Jamie just raised a hand, shutting that down. He smirked, knowing he possessed ways to rip the truth out way more efficiently. He signaled his crew to rip the cloth from the hostage's mouth, finally letting their brand new pawn speak. Before Jamie even dropped a single question, the criminal completely broke. He bawled that he was in the dark, begging for his life and swearing he would dig up whatever intel they needed. But playing the pity card was not going to work on our MC, a dude who routinely deployed utterly ruthless tactics to rip secrets straight from his enemies' minds. Jamie coldly stated that death was not on the menu today, but the guy had a job to do. Suddenly, an oppressive pitch-black aura erupted from the boy, radiating a terrifying dominance that demanded absolute submission. Tears streaming down his dirt-streaked face, the broken boss sobbed that he was down for whatever, even if he had to hunt down his own leader, pleading for just a shred of mercy. Honestly, the endless yapping was seriously annoying Jamie. The constant whining totally ruined his vibe, so with a lazy flick of his wrist, he instantly muted the guy. The captive's jaw moved, but dead silence echoed in the room. Jamie then stretched his hand out, hovering just inches above the hostage's skull, channeling a fierce surge of mana straight into his brain, hardwiring the exact mission directly into his subconscious. He planted a hypnotic directive march straight to the Count, and snitch on every single shadow operation the syndicate was running. This move was guaranteed to spark massive chaos, but that was exactly the master plan. A split second later, the hostage shot up, his eyes totally glossed over, looking like a literal zombie obsessed with a single, unshakable objective that had completely hijacked his mind. Without a backward glance, he staggered out the door, locked onto the Count's mansion, to execute his ultimate life-defining purpose. Jamie shot a cold glare at his crew, reminding them that feeling sorry for this pawn was a massive waste of energy. The syndicate would not even have time to hunt the snitch down because the Count was about to nuke their entire operation. Shifting focus, he locked eyes with his two most fiercely loyal undead guards. He ordered them to skip town immediately and lay low in the shadows, and honestly, they did not even question it. They were basically ride or die. Right then, Black fluttered up to Jamie, leaning in close to murmur secret intel straight into his ear. It was super stealthy, ensuring zero eavesdroppers could ruin the vibe. That is when our MC realized a major shift had gone down today. For the first time, his undead squad had not demanded any explanations. No pushback. No arguments whatsoever. Just straight-up flawless loyalty. The duo formally declared that whatever their young lord commanded was absolute law, requiring zero debate, and their only job was to follow his playbook blindly. The second minion chimed in, hinting that he already cracked the code on why they were being benched. He was totally on board with the strategy, acknowledging it was just pure objective logic. Because once Jamie's dad unleashed absolute hell on the criminal underworld, two random goons vanishing into thin air would not even make the radar. The world would just assume they got caught in the crossfire. Jamie nodded, dropping the detail that he was heading out of city limits for a couple of days. For everyone's safety, ghosting the area was their best bet, effectively scrubbing any trace connecting them back to the soon-to-be wrecked syndicate. Mission accomplished, our boy casually dipped out of the shady underground tavern, plotting his route back to the estate, to wrap things up under the radar. But wait, out of nowhere, one of his undead minions busted through the tavern doors, hollering for his boss like the literal apocalypse had just dropped. Jamie paused, totally thrown off. He had stepped outside for maybe 5 seconds. What kind of massive disaster could have popped off in that blink of an eye? Then it hit him. The panicked zombie shrieked, demanding to know what exactly had happened to their bodies. Sure, they fully accepted they were walking dead, and they made peace with that brutal fate, but this brand new physical transformation was tripping them out big time. There was zero chance of hitting the undo button, and honestly, they were totally cool with that. Getting a massive stat boost after dying was an absolute win, but they still needed to figure out exactly what kind of monsters they'd morphed into. When given the floor, the guy straight up pointed out how their physical specs had skyrocketed compared to when they were breathing. It was a total shock to the system, so he had to ask, did they hit the jackpot and spawn as elite tier undead, like actual boss-level threats? Jamie's response, a sudden burst of laughter that immediately sent the poor minion into a panic spiral. Felon scrambled to apologize, terrified he'd crossed a line. But honestly, our overpowered protagonist was just having a great time. Waving off the panic, Jamie assured him it was all good. His new subordinate was just genuinely hilarious. Their crazy ability to just roll with being undead cracked him up. Felon basically short-circuited, completely clueless on how to reply. He awkwardly blurted out a "thank you," praying he wasn't making a total fool of himself in front of his new boss. Dead serious, Jamie realized that, in his centuries of existence, he had never seen anything quite like this duo. Forget how innocent his current kid body looked. He knew firsthand that victims of this dark ritual usually suffered complete mental breakdowns, mutating into mindless raging ghouls. Yet these two were vibing perfectly. He'd literally struck gold. Finding two natural-born talents randomly wandering into his life was an insane stroke of luck. Breaking the news, he told them straight up they were basic zombies. No crazy cosmetic upgrades waiting for them. Even so, their raw physical power had multiplied way past any normal human's limits. It was all the intel the Walking Dead needed to piece together exactly how their new bodies operated. Knowing this was a massive turning point for them, Jamie threw out a smirk. He teased that if they kept grinding, they might actually level up to elite status. It was half joking, but that sliver of hope hit them right in the feels. Finally a chance to be something epic, even if they had to literally die first to unlock the opportunity. Wrapping things up, he sent them off, drilling it into their heads to stay completely off the radar like he ordered. The tension had definitely vanished. The whole vibe was way more chill now, which caught Jamie off guard. They weren't tragic victims. They were absolutely fascinating. Honestly, they gave off major flashbacks to a certain kid he used to know. A kid who'd permanently burned himself into Jamie's brain. But nostalgia had to wait. He was running dangerously behind schedule. He needed to sprint home fast. Meanwhile, the Count was basically tearing the city apart that night. A massive underground syndicate had poisoned Hayes, forcing his dad to cancel travel plans and go on an absolute warpath. He was staying behind to personally dismantle the mob before they could hijack the city for their sick operations. We're talking horrific stuff like child trafficking. Because of this chaos, only 3 of them were heading out to the massive eastern hub of Regan. Destination, that fancy gala they'd been prepping for. Honestly, Jamie couldn't help but think how much faster this trip would be if he could just spam teleportation magic. Still riding in a luxury carriage beat the brutal Dark Ages. The history books painted a pretty grim picture of what went down right after his original death. We're talking full-scale demon invasions and the literal Demon King dropping in. But plot twist, Jamie might be the one to shatter the world's current peace. Those 12 incompetent gods who spent centuries bickering, they were about to catch his hands. With his current stats, wiping them out would be a cakewalk, even if it meant massive collateral damage across the globe. A tragic loss of life, not his problem. Deep in his villain arc, he completely zoned out. Plotting absolute world domination while sitting there looking like an innocent little kid was a wild contrast. He sank into the flow of mana around him, syncing his heartbeat with his internal core to perfect his magical resonance. Right next to him, his little sister was completely oblivious to his dark scheming, just hyped for a fun family road trip. She was just thrilled to hang out. Meanwhile, Jamie was silently praying this carriage ride would end soon. He wanted 0 drama and 0 random encounters. Just a smooth trip while luck was still on their side. The route was packed with insane, jaw-dropping scenery that practically begged you to stop and stare. Way better than glancing at it while sprinting for your life. The cityscape was dazzling, a total sensory overload for kids. Especially kids who hadn't seen enough of the world to act like fancy architecture critics. Honestly, even Jamie was caught off guard. Staring out the carriage window, he soaked in the skyline of a metropolis he'd never explored. His mom dropped the lore. This place was the kingdom's ultimate flex. Regan was an absolute goldmine, handling more cash flow than anywhere else on the map. Word on the street was that Seldom only maintained its insane wealth because it siphoned off Regan's massive economy. Now it was finally time to witness the hype firsthand. The carriage ride passed in an absolute blur as they soaked in the stunning scenery outside, and before they knew it, they had arrived at the drop-off point. Jamie totally played up his act, screaming about how hyped he was to meet Count Simon. He laid it on super thick, acting like a totally obsessed fanboy whose heart was basically pounding right out of his ribcage. Naturally, his mom took that as the ultimate green light to swoop in for a massive bear hug, practically squealing over how precious and sweet her little boy was. Once the intense affection finally cooled off, she tilted her head and asked if all this hardcore fanboying meant he wanted to be a top-tier spellcaster, just like his uncle. Trapped in a corner, our guy knew opening his mouth would be a huge mistake. He just gave a silent, eager nod to dodge the bullet, knowing from experience that talking back would only trigger a full-blown interrogation. Buying the act, his mom dove straight into the lore dump. She flexed how insanely overpowered the Count was. Dude was exactly his dad's age, yet he was already rocking the title of a 7th-class mage. That alone proved he was built different. Since his mana manifested like blazing crimson flowers, the streets knew him as the legendary Red Lotus Mage. Rumor had it that a single strike from this guy could instantly wipe out 1,000 enemies without breaking a sweat. Now, that kill count, that definitely grabbed Jamie's attention. He immediately wanted to dig deeper into the man behind the myth, trying to figure out the best strategy to interact with him. His mom was totally caught off guard by this sudden hardcore curiosity, and scrambled to keep up with his rapid-fire questions. She froze up for a second before dropping another crucial detail. mentioning his hair was literally blood red, which gave him this insanely dark and terrifying aura. But honestly, our boy literally could not care less about the flashy titles or the 7th class ranking. That was all just background noise. The only detail living rent-free in his head was the sheer destructive firepower required to solo an entire army in one shot. Jamie needed a face-to-face chat. He was desperate to scale this mage's true potential, hoping to swipe some high-level secrets to level up his own future game plan. His previous chat with Marcus felt like a total waste of time since it wrapped up way too fast. The upcoming clash of minds with Count Simon sounded incredibly spicy. The carriage finally rolled to a stop and his mom went full helicopter parent mode, ordering them to stick to her like glue. Knowing better than to trigger another exhausting lecture, Jamie swallowed his pride and played along. He offered a quick nod of surrender. Right on cue, a slick, dark-haired guy stepped up, verifying if she was the honorable wife of Count Welton. After she gave him the green light, the attendant offered a deep bow and promised to escort the VIPs straight to their quarters. It was time to chill out post-travel and gear up for the massive event ahead. And bro, their suite was dripping in absolute wealth. Their home estate was already pretty stacked, but this was straight-up billionaire tier. Every single inch was dripping in gold and crazy intricate details, the kind of ridiculous opulence a normal person couldn't fathom in their wildest dreams. The staff member politely announced that this insane penthouse would be their base of operations for the entire festival. If they needed literally anything, their private butler was just a call away. His mom was visibly impressed, flexing about how the Count was rolling out the red carpet for them. Hooking them up with the most god-tier suite available was a major power move that she totally respected. Jamie even scored his own massive private room entirely off-limits to everyone else. The host definitely read the room perfectly, knowing a growing kid absolutely needed to escape his parents' shadow. But his overbearing mom, forever clinging to her precious baby, immediately ordered him to report back to her suite the second he finished dropping his bags. Fast forward a few minutes, and she was practically mobbed by a squad of stylists aggressively prepping her for the high society gauntlet on their schedule. The maids were totally losing their minds over how gorgeous she looked. She stared into the mirror, completely shook by her own reflection. After a legendary makeup session meant to get her gala ready, she basically leveled up her aesthetics to a jaw-dropping degree. Even Jamie was completely stunned. She was glowing with this insane youthful elegance. You'd never guess she had 2 kids running around. Catching her son staring like he had just seen a goddess, her ego absolutely skyrocketed. Jamie's hype meant the absolute world to her, making her giggle like a stoked teenager. Sure, the staff had been showering her with praise all day, but his silent awe was the only validation she cared about. She literally lunged forward, desperate to crush him in a thankful hug and totally gush over how sharp his own outfit was. But the stylist squad instantly hit the brakes on that idea, terrified she'd wreck the masterpiece they just created. She begged her glam team for just one tiny squeeze, but they straight up denied the request. One false move and that insanely expensive dress was done for. Right as she tragically accepted defeat, his little sister finally made her grand entrance, stepping out in a crazy, elegant ball gown. The kid honestly looked like absolute royalty. Looking straight out of a royal lookbook, the little sister was basically a living, breathing doll twirling around while her mom hyped up her fit. But the only validation she actually craved was her big brothers, mainly because this whole family basically worshipped the ground he walked on. A dynamic that honestly felt a bit heavy-handed sometimes. Jamie gave her a solid 10 out of 10 for the cute factor, but immediately pointed out how suffocating that dress looked. He patted her shoulder, promising they would just grit their teeth and survive this fancy nightmare together. But now, it was the young lord's time to shine. Time to throw on his own high-end drip and absolutely blind the crowd, with his visuals proving that elite genetics seriously ran in the family. Honestly, the grueling makeover session was the perfect mental distraction from the high-stakes political chess game waiting for them. Stepping into the main hall, they walked right into a massive sea of the kingdom's most elite snobby VIPs. Jamie scanned the massive room, letting memories of epic banquets from his past life flash through his mind. But even he had to admit this place was dripping in pure, unadulterated wealth. From the gold-laced architecture to the custom silk gowns, the flex was unreal. Leaning in close, he whispered to his mom, asking if the Count was always this obsessed with showing off his cash. She just smirked, confirming the guy was a total show-off, and told Jamie to brace himself for the actual meet and greet. Right on cue, a swarm of high society ladies zeroed in on Madame Welton, hitting her with the classic fake shock of how long it had been. They showered her with over-the-top compliments about her flawless fit, though to be fair, she genuinely looked like an absolute queen. Jamie watched the entire exchange with dead, unamused eyes. He knew exactly what this was, blatant networking to squeeze some clout out of his family name. Some things literally never change. Whether in his past life or right here, right now, clout chasers were always going to act fake. It gave him major flashbacks to those pathetic mortals who used to kiss up to the very same gods that ruined his life. The memories alone made his blood boil, but thankfully, his mom was an absolute pro at swatting away these social parasites. She maintained the perfect icy boundary, slicing right through the chaotic, loud energy of the mingling crowd. Just as the gossip was hitting its peak, a booming voice echoed through the massive hall, slicing through the chatter. Enter Rival Banner, one of Reagan City's top-tier administrative dogs. He projected his voice to welcome the elite crowd, and instantly, a dead silence dropped over the room as every single eye locked onto him. You had to give the guy credit, he managed to silence a room full of hyped-up self-important nobles in 2 seconds flat. Flashing a PR-approved smile, he announced the main event was kicking off and ordered everyone to hit their assigned VIP seats to dodge a stampede. But then he dropped the real bomb. He told the crowd to brace themselves because Count Simon and his inner circle were pulling up any second. He demanded a roaring applause, but before the crowd could even prep their hands, the main doors blew open, revealing a guy with blazing crimson hair. The dude's aura was just aggressively intense, making the rest of the dressed-up crowd look incredibly basic by comparison. He strolled in with this slow, absolute main character energy, drinking up the spotlight like it was his oxygen. He dragged out his entrance for maximum dramatic effect. Meanwhile, Jamie completely froze his jaw, practically hitting the marble floor. His brain instantly pulled up a file on a person he never in a million years expected to cross paths with at a stuffy rich people party. The redhead smirked, throwing out a vague comment about it being a long time no see, sending Jamie's anxiety through the roof as his worst theories were instantly validated. The reincarnated wizard was officially backed into a corner, his mind racing to calculate the least disastrous way to handle this trap. One wrong move and his family's reputation was cooked. Ignoring the tension, the crimson-haired man threw out a casual greeting, telling the crowd to party hard. He played the gracious host perfectly, but Jamie was deaf to the speech. His brain was screaming. One terrifying fact, this guy was a casual level 7 wizard. Keeping his poker face took everything Jamie had. He was staring down a monster whose power scaling completely rivaled the legendary Marcus Linmel. Heck, this dude might actually wipe the floor with that gray-haired veteran. Suddenly, a specific warning from his mom echoed in his head. She had casually dropped the title Wizard of the Red Lotus, and looking at this walking inferno, that nickname suddenly hit way too close to home. Despite the danger, Jamie was ridiculously intrigued. The ancient scheming soul inside the kid's body practically smirked, sensing a massive cheat code in this new connection. The Count casually sauntered over to Madame Welton, locking eyes and noting it had been a hot minute since their last run-in. He threw out a super backhanded compliment, claiming she looked way better than last year, a toxic mix of praise and straight-up shade. Without missing a beat, she kept her cool, coldly shutting him down and demanding he keep last year's drama out of his mouth. She then hit him with a deadly polite smile, claiming she was just so thrilled he was still breathing. The Count, sensing the ice, quickly pivoted. He pointed out the glaring absence of Count Welton, but the madam brushed it off, stating her husband was handling some sudden high-level fires and would roll in later. Business that absolutely could not wait. The redhead gave a short nod, shifting his intense gaze to Jamie, asking if this kid was the heir. It was a total no-brainer of a question, honestly, just a formality to establish dominance. But stepping up to the plate, his mom practically radiated pride as she officially introduced Jamie, who was busy staring down the Count with a lethal mix of awe and pure tactical calculation. The matriarch gently pushed her daughter forward, introducing Sarah Welton to the room before nudging both kids to pay their respects to the man of the hour, Count Simon. Dipping into a flawless bow for the ball's grand host, the siblings proudly announced their full names, making sure everyone knew exactly who the Weltons were. Simon's wife immediately swooned, gushing over how absolutely gorgeous the siblings looked. She even praised their sharp wits, clearly impressed by how smoothly these kids handled themselves around high society heavyweights without breaking a sweat. Never one to fake false modesty, Mama Welton totally owned the compliment, hyping up her kids with pure, unfiltered pride. In her eyes, her babies were absolute perfection, and she was not about to pretend otherwise just to be polite. But off to the side, the Count's eyes were locked dead onto the eldest Welton boy, his gut screaming that something about this kid was dangerously off. He kept his mouth shut though. Jamie, meanwhile, was chilling like he owned the place. Even with the host practically burning holes into his skull, the boy's magical aura was so insanely overpowered that he knew exactly how much he could push this guy's buttons. Flexing just a fraction of his power, Jamie curled his fingers into a mana-packed fist, dropping a massive silent threat that he could absolutely wreck the room if pushed. That little flex, it actually cracked Simon's stone-cold facade, pulling a sly smirk onto the previously emotionless host's face. Looking completely thrilled by the invisible standoff, the Count leaned in and casually verified if the kid went by the name Jamie. It was clearly a test, a verbal jab at the boy who just dared to check him. Not even slightly rattled, the Welton heir looked him dead in the eye and confirmed it. Locking gazes in a heavy, unspoken duel, the two magic users communicated volumes without dropping a single syllable. They forged a silent pact to hash things out later, their clashing egos sparking a massive mutual curiosity. Suitably entertained, the Count finally spun around. He strolled back to his throne-like chair, leaving the Weltons floating in a cloud of weird vibes and unanswered questions. Jamie tracked the man's retreating back, secretly hyped that the host actually matched his crazy expectations. Round 2 could not come fast enough. Next time they could drop all this annoying polite society garbage. Wrapping up the mandatory greetings, both sides exchanged standard pleasantries. The hosts flashed their practice smiles, urging the newcomers to mingle and enjoy the lavish bash. Off in the wings, Simon's son was eyeing Jamie like a complex math problem, wrestling with a deeply unsettling vibe he just could not put his finger on. Snapping back to reality, Jamie quietly asked when his own dad was showing up, prompting his mom to whisper back. She guessed he would drop in right around sunset. Meanwhile, back at the VIP section, the host's family finally had breathing room to spill their real thoughts. The tea started spilling immediately. One of Simon's boys cornered his dad, demanding the full read on the Welton kid. But Simon totally flipped the script, questioning why a literal 10-year-old was suddenly so obsessed with their brief little standoff. Playing defense, the kid quickly reminded his dad that he was the future heir, and since Jamie was exactly his age, keeping tabs was just smart business. He claimed it was purely for networking purposes. Simon squinted at his offspring, seeing right through the painfully fake innocent angel routine. The kid was trying way too hard to play nice, especially since the streets were already whispering about his cutthroat hustle to dominate the young noble scene. He was practically running a miniature mafia among the rich kids. It was crazy obvious he was just trying to score some brownie points with the old man. Simon thought the whole power play was total garbage, but decided to entertain the kid's little ego trip anyway. Tossing a bone like he was petting a puppy, the Count dryly commended his son for having such a massive brain for his age. Thinking he had won, the boy eagerly waited for his dad to drop more lore about Jamie. Instead, Simon totally shut him down, demanding a pre-dinner cocktail. And just like that, the Welton gossip was officially dead. Luckily, the kid knew he could always manipulate his way-too-sweet mother for backup. Always wearing rose-tinted glasses when it came to her offspring, she gently begged him to play nice with Jamie, reminding him about their family's deep historical alliances. Keeping the peace was vital for the legacy, she insisted. The ginger brat immediately shifted gears, nodding along like a total saint. He swore up and down he would be the absolute best buddy to Jamie, promising his mom she could sleep easy tonight. For a split second, she beamed with absolute joy, thrilled that her little boy actually grasped the cutthroat political chess game of high society. Convinced the drama was diffused, the Countess finally let her guard down, ready to just vibe and sip some expensive champagne. She flagged down a waiter for her own drink. But the exact nanosecond his parents looked away, the kid's angelic mask completely shattered. His face twisted into a villainous sneer, shooting a mental middle finger to his mom's pathetic little peace treaty. Zero chance was he ever going to play nice with that absolute trash bag sitting across the ballroom. Jamie was strutting around with way too much unearned swagger. The ginger psycho silently vowed to make the Welton heir physically beg at his feet. It was officially his personal crusade to shatter Jamie's edgy ego illusion and expose him as a total fraud. Tripping insanely hard on his own power fantasy, he totally lost track of reality, his twisted focus snapping right back to his dad. Surely the old man would have to acknowledge his absolute genius now. The redhead was desperately craving that sweet paternal validation. If he could literally mentally break the rival family's golden boy, Count Simon would finally have no choice but to bow down and respect him. Another guy from Count Simon's bloodline caught his brother's smug expression, throwing some serious side-eye at that arrogant smirk, as pure judgment flashed in his gaze. Right then, a twisted idea sparked in his head, one he was dying to test out, so he could watch the chaos unfold and use the fallout to his absolute advantage. Once the endless dinner finally wrapped up, everyone split up to mingle, since networking is basically a survival skill for these high society snobs, to keep their VIP connections tight. Jamie's mom immediately went into Tiger Mom mode, ordering him to play nice and charm every single person in the room. Meanwhile, she strutted straight toward the heavyweight noble houses, to spill the tea on elite politics and catch up with old friends she hadn't seen in forever. But Jamie, he was absolutely not vibing with this crowd, heavily preferring to ghost everyone and chill by himself. Exhausted from faking smiles, playing this flawless air act, and craving the sweet peace and quiet he'd been manifesting all day, he slipped out the back and stumbled into a gorgeous water garden. It was the ultimate low-key spot to just crash and vibe with the scenery. Tucked away nearby sat a hidden pavilion, literally the perfect sanctuary to dodge nosy guests, and finally breathe without an audience in total silence. Looking at the layout, he realized mastering magic wasn't Count Simon's only obsession. The guy clearly had taste, yet it blew Jamie's mind trying to picture someone reaching that insane tier of power. Honestly, Jamie was secretly sweating his upcoming face-to-face with the Count, needing a rematch to truly gauge the man's terrifying stats. Suddenly, a voice snapped him right out of his thoughts. Instinct took over. Pure mana flared in his palm as he instantly pivoted for a lethal strike, convinced that nobody casual would sneak up on him here. Eyes locked and fully focused, Jamie swung his arm, ready to obliterate whoever had the guts to ambush him, fully believing he had just walked right into a trap. His spell crackled to life in milliseconds, leaving zero room for hesitation or mercy mid-swing. As the glowing light illuminated the shadows, he finally locked eyes with his target. But instead of an assassin, Jamie was staring down a terrified girl, who looked absolutely traumatized, that dropping two simple words almost got her nuked. Jamie's killer instinct completely glitched. He had zero clue who this stranger was, and let's be real, the odds of this trembling kid plotting his murder were practically zero. He immediately canceled his spell, giving her a totally bewildered look, trying to process how someone so ordinary bypassed his radar and triggered his fight or flight. She let out a shaky breath, clearly not signing up to dodge fatal magic just for trying to chat with a party guest. Mental note: approach rich kids with extreme caution next time. Once the shock wore off, her fear snapped right into anger as she yelled, asking if he was literally insane for attacking random people for zero reason. Jamie fired right back, pointing out that creeping up on a mage like a horror movie villain is a massive red flag. He coldly told her she should be celebrating the fact she still had a pulse, even if threatening a lady wasn't exactly polite. Pushing the drama aside, he narrowed his eyes way more focused on who exactly she was, and how on earth she managed to stealth drop right behind a master mage undetected. Her eyes lit up with a spark of defiance. She suddenly realized she held the cards here. She could either spill her secrets or leave him completely clueless, which sounded super tempting, after he basically almost blasted her to ash. Jamie instantly felt a surge of annoyance. Everything from her snappy attitude to her spooky ninja skills was seriously rubbing him the wrong way. Done playing games, he decided, to make it crystal clear he wasn't here for the sass. Skipping the small talk, he summoned a fresh surge of raw mana, sending a massive warning sign that treating him like a joke would end incredibly badly for her. The blast slammed into the dirt just 2 inches from her boot, a hardcore visual aid, proving that if she gave a fake answer, the next shot wouldn't miss. The girl froze, completely stiff, her brain short-circuiting as she tried to figure out how to survive this, without triggering another strike, while desperately trying to keep her true identity under wraps. He casually mentioned the spell was an airball solid tier 2 magic. To a regular person, that power level was an absolute death sentence. Jamie leaned in, his voice icy, explaining that unless she had some heavy-duty defensive barriers equipped, that blast would literally shred straight through her, guaranteeing an instant game over for a fragile kid like her. She stared at him in utter disbelief, struggling to accept that this random boy was dead serious about unaliving her, over a simple jump scare. Letting the terrifying threat hang heavily in the air, he hit her with the question one more time. Who was she and how exactly did she breach his blind spot? The reality check finally hit her like a truck. Flexing on a clearly unstable, overpowered mage was a terrible strategy, and keeping her mouth shut might actually get her killed. She was totally ready to spill her guts, even if she tried playing hard to get. Jamie gave her a chilling warning to start talking, fast before a magic bullet literally pierced her skull. Desperate to cool his intense vibe, she instantly blurted out her name, Ashbal. Then she dropped a massive bombshell. She wasn't just Viscount Bal's eldest daughter, she was a legit spirit summoner, laying all her cards flat on the table. A summoner is a rare breed of mage who locks down contracts with mysterious nature spirits, unlocking insane powers that leave regular wizards in the dust. You barely ever see them wandering the continent, which makes them VIP magic users practically guaranteed a Baron's title. And right now, Jamie had to wrap his head around the insane fact that this random girl was actually one of them. Packing a wind spirit explained exactly how she crept up on him like a ghost, a detail that clicked in Jamie's mind as she kept talking. He was genuinely shook. They were the exact same age, yet she was already wielding summoning magic. Normally, mages don't even start training to vibe with nature until they hit 10 years old. But honestly, looking at her crazy talent, she was clearly a born prodigy. If she kept grinding, she could legitimately sign a contract with a spirit king. Suddenly, her loud voice snapped him right back to reality. She was practically demanding to know his identity and why he was throwing around such lethal magic. Jamie just let out a dark chuckle. The sheer audacity of this girl actually trying to interrogate him right after spilling her own life story was hilarious. It was painfully obvious she absolutely hated losing, or at least being the only one exposed. Still, she didn't back down for a second, desperately trying to drag some info out of him to level the playing field. Figuring it wouldn't hurt, he decided to drop his name, and casually flex that he was the sole heir to the Earl of Welton. Smirking, he told Ashbally it was a pleasure to finally meet, totally brushing past the fact that they were literally just seconds away from a lethal magical brawl. He only played nice because the Ball family were fiercely loyal vassals to the Welton estate, meaning she had zero leverage over him anyway. Meanwhile, back at the main estate, Jamie's father was currently handling some street trash. He glared at one of the bandits like he was nothing but a minor pest. Normally, he let them slide, since underground rats occasionally had their uses. But these absolute fools had the nerve to repay the Count's rare mercy by running a human trafficking ring right under his nose, a completely suicidal mistake. He usually looked like the picture of calm and collected wisdom, but cross him and the Count turned into an absolute unstoppable demon, and right now he was about to unleash hell on this syndicate. He coldly stated that only a complete lunatic with a massive death wish would ever dare pull a stunt like this in his territory. Pure, unadulterated rage radiated from the man, and he was fully prepared to violently take it out on every single scumbucket who thought they could break his absolute moral code. The terrified thugs screamed and begged for their miserable lives, but the Count was deaf to it. Their pathetic cries literally just faded into static background noise, an annoying distraction from his brutal delivery of justice. Keeping his face completely stone cold to mask his boiling fury, he gave a terrifyingly simple order. The arrogant scumbag in charge was to be publicly hung by the neck the very next morning, a permanent fix to ensure he'd never cross the line again. His elite guards immediately nodded, swearing to execute the command perfectly. Honestly, they were totally on board with the heavy-handed sentence, considering these traffickers were absolute monsters anyway. With the trash taken out, Argino instantly barked for his carriage to be prepped. He had to hit the road that exact second if he wanted to crash the noble ball and reunite with his family in time. Barely minutes later, the wheels were spinning rapidly, closing the distance to the lavish party where his wife and 2 kids were waiting. Cut back to the busted human traffickers. These dead men walking were currently being dragged straight toward the execution block, about to pay the ultimate price for their sick crimes. But high up in the shadows, a mysterious guy rocking a black cloak was intensely stalking the convoy. Keeping his face totally hidden from the world, he was absolutely seething at how horribly this mission tanked, muttering that the street gang completely blew it. He gripped some weird, ominous sphere in his palm time to roll out a deadly plan B. While all this hardcore mafia drama was going down, across the kingdom, the vibe over at the high society ball was a totally different kind of chaotic. Out in the moonlit garden, heavy aristocratic teen drama was fully brewing. The 2 of them were practically glued to the grass, locked in an incredibly awkward standoff. Their weird clash had flared up so fast nobody could even process what the actual beef was anymore. Jamie's brain was totally short-circuiting. This was literally the absolute last scenario he ever wanted to deal with. All the guy wanted was 5 minutes of peace and quiet. Losing his chill, he angrily snapped, demanding to know why she was stalking him like a total creep, instead of just letting him catch a breather. But then the girl fired back with a line that genuinely stunned the reincarnated mage. She straight up told him that her father, being his sworn vassal, meant absolutely zero when it came to the 2 of them. Rolling his eyes, Jamie just told her to drop the weird attitude and get lost because she was heavily killing his vibe and stressing him out. He was literally pivoting to walk back to the boring party hall, fully ready to tell her to stay put, when she suddenly yanked his arm. She was clearly not letting him escape that easily. And honestly, Jamie was reaching his absolute boiling point. Dealing with his suffocating mom and sister was already a massive headache, but now, some completely random girl was invading his space without a single right to be there. He honestly couldn't process why she was clinging to him like a literal parasite. Seriously, who actively latches onto a dude that literally threatened to end her life just minutes ago? Ash clocked that he was the absolute first person, her exact age, she'd bumped into around here. So naturally, she wanted to play besties, treating him like some golden networking opportunity she absolutely couldn't pass up. Jamie's brain straight up blue-screened at her words. The whole concept of friendship felt like a completely out-of-touch punchline to him, or just some ridiculous myth straight out of a corny fairy tale. It literally never crossed his mind that she was shadowing him just to play pals. A heavy, painfully awkward silence instantly crashed down between them. If she wanted a loyal minion, sure, that made logical sense. But craving a buddy, that equation just did not compute in his head. To be brutally fair though, the young mage had to admit that having friends was a massive deal for regular kids her age. That was a painfully normal detail he'd entirely wiped from his memory, considering he was basically speedrunning his second life and couldn't relate to actual childhood innocence anymore. Even with fresh tears pooling in her eyes, Jamie remained ice cold. Her emotional baggage wasn't his problem, and he definitely wasn't running a charity. Snapping with pure irritation, he flat out told her to go bother someone else. Since he wasn't taking applications for a best buddy, and tying himself down with useless emotional attachments sounded like pure dead weight. She immediately shrieked about how incredibly toxic he was, being a harsh wake-up call that she was in fact just a 10-year-old kid. And you really couldn't expect any deep logical maturity from someone still throwing tantrums. But in his eyes, any kind of bond was a straight-up hazard. Relationships were totally irrational liabilities that compromised his absolute safety and personal gain. Had he realized this brutal reality back in his first run, he wouldn't have swallowed the catastrophic fallout that completely ruined him. So he figured doing her a solid meant shattering her delusions right then and there, force-feeding her the harsh survival rules he had bought with blood and failure without wasting another second. The whole vibe had Jamie practically crawling out of his own skin. And deep down, a dark spark of fury ignited toward this girl. Her mere presence was dragging up, suffocating trauma from his past that he fought so hard to bury. The exact second he finally shook off his unwanted shadow and tasted sweet solitude, an obnoxiously loud voice echoed right behind his back, which automatically meant his internal radar was screaming danger. Standing there was a pack of bratty kids from rival aristocratic bloodlines, and trust me, they weren't looking to trade friendship bracelets like Ashvale. They were absolutely out for blood. Jamie's eyes locked dead onto a shock of fiery crimson hair that belonged to none other than Count Simon's arrogant heir, flexing at the very front like the untouchable alpha of his pathetic little squad. Instead of cowering like these punks desperately expected, Jamie stood his ground, radiating pure, unfiltered hostility. Yet masked by ice-cold calculation, he dared the kid to repeat whatever garbage name he had just called him. The lackeys instantly bristled at the blatant disrespect being thrown at their brother. To them, this level of sheer audacity was a straight-up violation. The second kid lurking in the back suddenly clocked that they were actually squaring off against the infamous Alf, a title that sent shivers down his spine, even if Jamie literally couldn't care less about some meaningless label. Trying to make sense of the madness, the duo barked out a question in perfect unison. Rocking the title of Count Simon's oldest kid and future heir was basically the ultimate flex in their circle. But Jamie was already dead sick of these random loudmouths barking in his ear, so he casually dropped a mute spell to shut down the noise. Talk about a plot twist. These guys were gearing up for a whole villain monologue, only to hit a brick wall. Their jaws kept moving, pushing out a whole lot of nothing. It was pure phantom audio. Meanwhile, Alf, the so-called alpha of the squad, just stared at his crew, glitching out, completely clueless on how to bail them out. His main priority, dodging the exact same fate. He managed to piece together that a high-tier, absolute binding spell had just been slapped onto his friends, but had zero clue how to counter it. Watching this, Jamie figured the redhead had at least a single brain cell left, making him a slight upgrade from his goons, purely because he recognized the magic at play. Catching his breath, Alf lost his cool entirely and loudly reminded everyone in the room that he had years on this rookie mage. Jamie, however, was allergic to pointless filler dialogue and cut straight to the chase before he decided to mute the ringleader too. Reality checked in for Alf's seniority meant absolutely nothing here. His alpha status was crumbling, and he was practically cornered into following the unspoken rules set by the Welton family prodigy. Still, the guy had an ego to protect and needed to drop his actual agenda, clinging to his original game plan just to test the waters. Giving a nervous cough, the redhead totally backpedaled, playing it cool like he just dropped by for a friendly chat, zero hostility intended. He immediately switched to buttering Jamie up, hyping up his insane talent for pulling off a complex silent spell. Jamie smelled the cap from a mile away. He was completely over the fake hype and just wanted the bottom line, flat out telling the guy to kick rocks and keep his distance if he valued his safety. That was a massive blow to the redhead's ego, who genuinely thought he was about to get the red carpet treatment. Desperate, he tried weaponizing his family name once again. But it was the weakest flex ever, considering the whole world already knew he was Earl Simon's spawn. Catching his breath, Alf banked on his bloodline, throwing out the logic that, since Jamie repped the Welton crest, they were practically in the same elite bracket. Gesturing at his frozen goon squad, he tried pinning the blame on Jamie's attitude for triggering their aggression. Total gaslighting. Considering if Jamie hadn't flashed his god-tier magic, they absolutely would have bullied him into submission. Ignoring the glaring plot holes, Alf kept pushing his script, pitching a grand vision where the two of them would basically run the Eastern aristocracy's inner circle, making teaming up a no-brainer. But Jamie saw right through the cheap salesman pitch, no matter the camouflage. Alf's true goal was to put a leash on the fresh aristocratic powerhouse, pushed to his absolute limit. By this absolute garbage-tier conversation, Jamie verbally slammed the door brutally, stating he gave zero flips about Alf or his pathetic little alliance. If that was the whole pitch, the meeting was officially over. Alf completely lost his mind at that rejection, deeply triggered that some kid dared to disrespect his noble status right to his face. Flipping the switch from diplomat to tyrant, he changed his approach entirely, loudly bragging that he could steamroll Jamie's quote-unquote weak magic into absolute dust. In his twisted reality, an absolute beatdown would force Jamie into hardcore loyalty, getting high on his own delusion of power. But instead of cowering, Jamie didn't even flinch. He just hit him with the ultimate deadpan stare, looking at Alf like a complete clown, flexing a power level he clearly didn't possess. Breaking the silence, a cold smirk crept across Jamie's face, instantly shutting down the circus act and killing the villain monologue dead in its tracks. Trying to salvage his intimidating aura, the redhead spilled the beans, admitting that from day one, using raw violence was his backup plan anyway, exposing every single nice word he said as pure trash. Dropping the nice guy act completely, Alf confessed he only tweaked his strategy after witnessing the kid's insane magic, but ultimately decided to default back to his signature, toxic bullying. Honestly, Jamie found it nauseating that a kid this young was already acting like a two-faced snake, manipulating the emotions of literal children just to stroke his own ego. Locking eyes with his wannabe rival, Jamie hit him with a reality check, asking if he seriously believed the academy adults were blind enough to let him run wild without consequences. Jamie was banking on the fact that if this pathetic stunt went south, Earl Simon's golden boy would be facing some massive disciplinary heat. But the ginger antagonist just flashed an arrogant grin, brushing off the Welton prodigy's warning like dust on his shoulder. He was 100% convinced he was untouchable, all thanks to a hidden magical sphere that totally cloaked their little showdown from the outside world. For a little while, this neat little gadget let them handle their dirty work in total silence. 0 witnesses. The second he flicked it on a glowing ring, snapped around them, wiping them off the map. His 2 goons, still shaking from Jamie's earlier attack, were locked in there too. But our boy, he didn't even flinch. He instantly clocked it as an illusion relic. Honestly, it just confirmed he was staring down an actual spellcaster. Alf smirked, dead set on the idea that this punk would be crying for his mommy in about 3 seconds flat. Running his mouth came naturally. Flexing his mana, the red-haired snob ripped right through the absolute binding spell holding his crew. The invisible chains shattered. His buddies gasped, finally dragging oxygen back into their burning lungs. That crushing grip around their windpipes gone. And it was all thanks to the nightmare Jamie had put them through. For a hot minute, they legitimately thought they were going to flatline from that insane restriction art. Now, they were absolutely foaming at the mouth, furious at being treated like lab rats. Jamie just tuned out their whining. His eyes were completely glued to the barrier. Gotta hand it to the jerk that was one premium piece of hardware. Against all odds, the arrogant little rich kid had actually brought something worth looking at to the table. Just 24 hours ago, Alf would have scoffed at anyone calling his power merely interesting, especially since he was fully planning on making the Welton clan's life a living hell from here on out. At least that was his fantasy. Before the threat even left his lips, Jamie unleashed a brutal, unrecognizable pressure. Bam! All 3 wannabe thugs slammed into the dirt, simultaneously hacking up blood before they could even launch a team combo. Looking down at the wreckage, Jamie casually suggested they keep the privacy shield up. Nobody needed to see them looking this pathetic. Tears, snot, and pure terror. Not exactly a great look for guys trying to flex their high-class nobility. For massive hypocrites like them, this was the ultimate humiliation. They were trapped in a total nightmare scenario. Staying inside the dome meant Jamie's oppressive aura would keep crushing their bones to dust. They panicked, killed the barrier, and instantly spilled out onto the pavement, completely shell-shocked by the beatdown. The sheer psychological trauma broke them. One of the goons literally hurled his lunch all over the sidewalk, spewing chunks right onto the flawlessly manicured estate grass. Meanwhile, the sheer violence of that final strike just kept looping inside Alf's skull. His brain was straight up short-circuiting, totally unable to process the slaughter. How did this happen? He frantically retraced his steps, desperate to figure out how he let himself get cornered like a rat. The math wasn't mathing. He was a solid Tier 2 mage, but this absolute demon was swinging with Tier 4 firepower. His mind and body were entirely shattered, accepting that reality was completely off the table. Stepping into that fight so underprepared was the biggest fumble of his life. The young aristocrat started frantically connecting the dots. Jamie's background didn't align with this god-tier mana output at all, especially since the kid belonged to a legendary bloodline of swordsmen, not spellcasters. There was only one explanation. This monster was a once-in-a-millennium prodigy, a level of genius Alf would never possess, no matter how desperately he craved his father's validation. Dragging his bruised body off the dirt, he tried to salvage a scrap of dignity in front of the guy who just mopped the floor with his squad. Forcing down his panic, Alf made a silent vow. He was never ever letting this slide. Jamie was a dead man walking. That unfair talent made his blood boil. He wanted to rip the kid apart, cripple his core, and permanently strip him of his magic, let alone watch him flex on opponents like this again. Fast forward through the humiliation, the battered crew snuck back into the main estate. Safe behind closed doors, they had a chance to lick their wounds and piece together their next shady move. The lackeys anxiously side-eyed their red-haired boss, sweating bullets over whether they could actually pull this heist off. I mean, grand theft of a magical artifact isn't exactly a minor offense. But Alf, he was completely blind, drunk on pure spite. Barking at them to shut up and trust the process, he ordered his crew to stay on his heels and stop killing his vibe. But then, a massive plot twist. His brother's voice suddenly called out from the shadows, completely derailing the mission. They were supposed to be moving like ghosts. Getting caught red-handed was the absolute worst-case scenario. The guy just gave a smug, mocking little wave, fully aware he had just blown his little brother's top-secret operation to pieces. Stealth was officially dead. Shocked to his core, Alf stuttered, demanding to know what on earth Leon was doing, lurking around in the dark. Literally everyone else was getting wasted at the banquet, but Leon, he just stood there, completely unfazed. Dripping with sarcasm, he scoffed at the sheer audacity of his older brother. Like, how do you just forget someone existing in their own house? Honestly, it hit a little too close to home. Rolling his eyes, the kid fired back that he could never just chill on the sidelines, while someone dragged his precious big bro. He had to play the ultimate hype man. But right then, Alf clocked the wildly lethal weapon gripped in his brother's hands. Just looking at the thing gave off major red flags. Where on earth did he even score that? If wielded right, that item spelled absolute destruction. Totally dodging the interrogation, the older sibling instantly pivoted, pitching a savage team up to crush the brat from the Welton bloodline and snatch his artifact for their own stash. That proposition completely flipped a switch in the kid's brain. He was instantly on board. Watching Jamie finally eat dirt was his ultimate fantasy, and honestly, who cares about the sketchy origins of some weapon, if it guaranteed their victory? Fast forward to the dead of night, and the absolute boss of the Welton clan finally made his grand entrance. He was running totally behind schedule thanks to some heavy business tying him down. But plotting aside, Count Simon stepped out to welcome him in the flesh. You don't just send a butler for a VIP like him, especially with the ironclad alliance and deep-rooted history, keeping these noble powerhouses locked together. Flashing a charismatic grin, the fiery-haired host held out a hand, dropping a slick comment about how long it had been since their last meetup. You could literally feel the genuine hype radiating off him as he reconnected with his longtime rival-turned-friend. The Welton patriarch matched that smooth energy, visibly caught off guard that a whole count was playing the greeting committee. He joked that the world must be ending if Simon was rolling out the red carpet himself. After knocking out the standard rich guy small talk about health and wealth, both absolute units agreed that life was pretty elite right now. Ditching the doorway, they pushed into the sprawling palace to crash the main bash. The vibe inside was immaculate, just pure, unfiltered luxury, where the high society crowd could drop their guards and network. Cutting away from the noise, the duo posted up in a dimly lit, aesthetic private library. Argino kicked things off, checking if the massive feast lived up to the hype. Simon brushed it off as just another flex of wealth, but then his expression shifted. He couldn't hold back. The absolute shock of seeing Argino's kid in action. Hearing his heir brought up, the Welton Lord instantly locked in. Getting a review from a top-tier magic user about his boy's insane potential, that was the ultimate validation he needed. Simon instantly caught Argino trying to play it cool, masking that soft, proud dad energy behind a stone-cold poker face. Letting the mask slip for a second, Argino chuckled, straight up admitting his kids were his entire universe. Hearing that the redhead's vibe dropped, muttering how insanely jealous he was of that deep family bond. Arching an eyebrow, Argino probed if something dark had gone down since their last chat, directly targeting some highly classified skeletons in the Count's closet. The air grew instantly heavy as Simon physically recoiled from the question. You didn't need a sixth sense to tell a major tragedy had struck him. Frantically changing the channel on the conversation, Simon aggressively hyped up Argino's heir, stammering that calling the kid a prodigy was basically an insult to his actual god-tier talent. Argino was internally eating up the praise like a proud king, but his eagle eyes stayed locked on the Count, scanning for any micro-expressions that might expose his true agenda. He easily deduced that the fiery-haired noble was desperately dodging his own trauma, totally paralyzed by his past. Honestly, Argino kind of respected the deflection, so grabbing the steering wheel of the conversation, he fired point blank. Did Simon seriously think his kid had the sauce, considering the boy's jaw-dropping mana control was practically blinding? Taking the bait without hesitation, Count Simon leaned back with a cocky smirk, shutting down the word capable as absolute trash. He stared dead into Argino's eyes and dropped the bomb. His son wasn't just good, he was a living anomaly. We're talking about the most broken, overpowered force to ever exist in human history. Smirking, Argino revealed that those exact words came straight out of Marquis Linmel's mouth. Floored by the name drop, Simon demanded to know if the absolute legend had met Jamie. Playing coy, the dad dropped hints that Jamie's monstrous stats had been on his radar for a hot minute. But even he, the guy's own flesh and blood, never predicted his kid would be hacking the magic system this hard. That's exactly why he summoned the Marquis in the first place. If his boy was basically a walking cheat code, he needed to be forged into an elite spellcaster, weaponizing that flex to literally save the entire world. Simon's jaw practically hit the floor. Was the reigning archmage seriously going to take the boy under his wing? That alone proved the kid's ceiling was non-existent. But then Argino dropped a massive plot twist. The Marquis actually rejected the job, and honestly, it made total sense. Why? Because Jamie was such an unfathomable mutant that he could literally solo level his way to the mythical ninth circle without a single lesson. Simon let out a bitter laugh, confessing he was sick to his stomach with jealousy over that raw, unteachable cheat skill. Yet at the same time, he was absolutely foaming at the mouth to witness what a fully awakened version of that monster could actually do. Argino's jaw practically hit the floor, reeling from the sheer hype of those words. He demanded to know what the Count was getting at. Simon kicked things off by dropping a harsh truth. Humanity's willpower was straight garbage, which was already a massive red flag. Sure, humans had built some absolutely cracked civilizations, but that was just them coping. In Simon's eyes, human mages were straight-up fodder compared to dragons or high elves. The only thing keeping society from collapsing were swordmasters like Argino, acting as the ultimate meat shields against top-tier threats, with their busted abilities. But Simon was itching to know how the meta would shift. And what kind of insane power balance would drop if a ninth-class mage suddenly spawned someone who totally eclipsed every single entity that had ever walked the planet? Argino instantly caught his drift, but the words totally died in his throat. It made him sick to his stomach knowing this hypothetical god-tier weapon was his own precious kid. Simon flexed that even the dragons, sitting at the peak of the magic food chain, would be sweating bullets over a wizard this broken. But Argino told him to shut it down. The fiery redhead was obsessed with humanity, taking over the top spot, ditching the whole hopes and prayers vibe, and just steamrolling everything with raw, unfiltered power. Argino clapped back, calling out his massive ego regarding humanity's place, and warned that things could easily go south. He absolutely refused to let his son get dragged into this mess. But Simon fired back, claiming that having an ego was a survival trait, something Argino knew deep down. He slyly hinted at the completely wiped and heavily censored lore of their world. This whole standoff was incredibly heavy, even for a hardcore Welton family leader, who usually kept his chill no matter what. This ultra-classified intel was locked down by only a handful of elites on the continent. It exposed events from roughly 10,000 years ago, proving exactly why the prequel era of history was completely nuked. Of course, the gods weren't exactly dropping lore drops to explain it to the masses. And Count Simon was convinced that humans desperately needed the firepower to clap back when things hit the fan. To him, it was the ultimate endgame, that they had the stats to prevent a second mass wipe of civilization, a threat that was literally brewing right in front of them. They finally tapped out of the heated debate, agreeing to hit the hay since it was way past midnight. Argino just told his bro to get some sleep too, exchanging a quick peace out before locking in a meetup for the next day. Cut to Jamie, who was totally passed out in bed, his energy levels completely drained after today's chaotic events. That forced him to burn through his mana pool. Argino watched his kid snoring quietly, and it really hit him. His boy was a literal prodigy carrying the entire world's expectations. But everyone seemed to conveniently ignore that he was literally just a kid. As a dad, seeing those broken abilities gave him major anxiety, knowing it could completely rob Jamie of a chill childhood or any shot at a normal drama-free life. He couldn't stomach looking at his boy as some apocalyptic ninth-class weapon, because right in this moment, he was just his awesome, innocent kid. Right then and there, Argino made a silent vow to do whatever it took to carry this burden, so all Jamie had to worry about was leveling up into a solid, stand-up guy who would naturally make the right calls. Fast forward to morning, the sun popped up, bringing out the insane aesthetics of the crazy expensive lush gardens wrapping the estate. Inside, all the high society VIPs were grouping up to keep the party rolling, forming little cliques to gossip and scheme. Meanwhile, Jamie was totally zoning out, wondering why his dad looked so on edge last night. The curiosity was killing him, but his mind-reading stats were too low level right now to snoop. Suddenly, he got completely yanked out of his headspace by that same girl from yesterday, the one he completely ghosted. He gave her major attitude, bringing up his crystal-clear rejection and telling her to straight up leave him alone. But she had zero quit in her. Flexing absolute confidence, she smirked and said that even if he was not feeling it, she definitely was, so he was stuck listening. Before Jamie could even drop a comeback, she started shouting for her sister, catching everyone completely off guard. Jamie was totally baffled by her insane main character energy, wondering why she was so obsessed when he literally gave her 0 green flags. He decided to dip before things got any weirder, dropping one final reminder that he was not looking for a squad. But Ash clapped back, pointing out their family's alliance and demanding basic manners. Cue Rebecca, the older sister, stepping into the frame to roast his etiquette, telling him to act like a proper Earl's son, completely ignoring her own blunt hostility. Jamie just stared into the void, absolutely stun-locked, completely tuning out the bickering match going on between the sisters. Dude was absolutely paralyzed. Ash totally assumed he just caught feelings for her big sis right off the bat, which made sense since the girl was straight up stunning. However, his expression screamed pure heartbreak, completely baffled by how she could possibly be standing right there. He let the name Jane slip past his lips. Tears pricking his eyes, a flood of memories hit him about the one soul he had cherished forever. Back in the day, she literally gave up her own life to the deities just to save him. That tragedy alone triggered Diablo Volfir to turn into a totally numb beast, and her sudden reboot right in front of him completely shattered his sanity. Right in the middle of this massive mental breakdown, Alf rolled up. This punk made it his personal mission to wreck Jamie itching, to prove he was the actual top-tier sorcerer around. Gripping that exact same relic from yesterday, the kid barked out that our boy was basically a dead man walking, for messing with the wrong guy. Meanwhile, Jamie was straight up zoning out, totally locked in this crazy daze, over bumping into Jane's literal twin. He completely blanked on the fiery-haired noble barking threats at him, shooting this tragic, heartbroken glare toward his new friend's older sibling instead. The girl was totally clueless about why she was getting stared down like a ghost. She tried to make sense of the heavy vibes, but he just stood there muttering his lost love's name. The little sis just stood there, shook, asking if he actually caught massive feelings for Rebecca, considering she only joked about that exact scenario yesterday. This super awkward staring contest got abruptly wrecked by Alf, who was starving for the spotlight and dying to see Jamie bleed. The sheer toxicity burning in his gaze made it seriously wild to think this was just a kid, especially one so obsessed with tearing others down. Out of nowhere, he blasted a massive wave of flames, flexing that, from now on, everyone better address him as the boss and bow down. Our boy was totally caught slipping. He definitely wasn't braced for a heavy-hitting strike while his brain was short-circuiting over Jane. Rebecca reacted way quicker, diving to shield Ash so the kid wouldn't get caught in the crossfire of some random beef. Then bam! With just a single effortless flex, every ounce of that fiery assault was instantly vaporized, leaving the brat glued to the floor, clutching his shiny toy completely mind-blown by what just went down. This little terror had unleashed a Tier 6 Phantom Bird spell his dad crafted into the item, and his brain just couldn't compute how a 10-year-old punk brushed off a nuke. Panic and pure disbelief flooded his face, as the brutal reality check crushed his ego, instantly deleting any dream of dunking on the Welton prodigy. Jamie shot back this absolutely freezing, dead-eyed glare, silently judging the absolute audacity of this clown, trying to pull a stunt like that in a packed room right while he was mentally spiraling. Because of that insane disrespect, our main character completely took the training wheels off, dropping a devastating hex that could have easily flatlined the boy in a heartbeat. Searing frost hijacked Alf's limbs, creeping higher by the millisecond and sending absolute agony through his veins. The kid's brain completely blue-screened, trying to figure out a defensive block against something this insane. The timing was so flawless that even if he had the skills, he'd never pop a shield in time. The fiery-haired brat was spiraling into pure panic mode, finally grasping that he was a literal inch away from getting deep-sixed by the absolute demon he provoked. Jamie locked onto him with a hyper-lethal glare, completely blinded by pure, unadulterated rage toward this stuck-up rich kid. Out of nowhere, a hand casually swiped through the air, instantly neutralizing the raging mana and dropping a hard boundary line. His dad manifested right behind his shoulder, attempting to snap the kid out of his absolute murder trance, where nothing but zero-chill hostility existed. The boy didn't even bother fighting off the suppression, knowing full well things had violently hit the fan, and pushing the high-level adults in the room any further would be a massive mistake. The ballet siblings watched the chaos unfold in complete awe, with the older sister desperately shielding Ash from the crazy collateral damage. Without even realizing it, Jamie caved to his old man's overpowering spell, and on top of having his bloodlust instantly wiped clean, he basically passed out from the heavy mana pressure. Argino, trying to keep his kid from catching a body, locked eyes with Count Simon in dead silence, scanning the wreckage to piece together the absolute mess that just went down. The patriarch stared at his unconscious kid, totally clueless on how to fix this public relations nightmare, especially since Jamie just pulled off a stunt that broke all the rules of reality. Both leaders initially assumed this was some wild optical illusion, considering this lethal brawl went down in a packed living room, and felt way too cinematic to be real life. But a few seconds later, reality hit them like a freight train. This wasn't a glitch, and if they hadn't slammed the brakes on Jamie, Alf would have been breathing his last breath in 5 minutes flat. Simon pointed out that, look, Alf's magic stats were absolute trash, meaning he could barely tap into 50% of that artifact's true juice. But even that half-baked summon spawned a blazing phoenix ready to torch the entire ballroom, literally transforming the fancy gala into ground zero. Yet without breaking a sweat, our boy snapped his fingers and erased that raging inferno in a single heartbeat. That insane flex screamed 9th-class prodigy energy, proving exactly why he's destined to crush his ultimate goals. Cue Alf's mom sprinting onto the scene, completely losing her mind, while her husband stood there like a stone statue. She started pointing fingers, shrieking that Jamie was out for her kid's blood, and demanding someone hold him accountable. Enter. Jamie's mom absolutely panicked. She dropped to his level, begging him to spill the exact tea on what just went down. No sugarcoating allowed. So he flat out exposed Alf, dropping the bomb that the redhead threw the first punch. She quickly pieced it together. This ginger brat didn't even have a valid reason. He just sparked a beef out of pure selfish ego. Worse, the kid actually tried to obliterate her son with a high-tier artifact, which Jamie only shattered out of pure self-defense. Locking eyes with Countess Simon, she practically dared the woman to deny it, pinning the entire blame squarely on the redhead's shoulders. Jamie was simply surviving. But of course the rival mom scrambled to spin the narrative, claiming Alf was just pulling a harmless prank, and Jamie was totally out of pocket for retaliating so aggressively. Sears wasn't having a single ounce of that garbage. The concept of a peaceful chat was completely off the table. You could practically see the murderous aura radiating from her. She looked ready to utterly destroy both the Countess and her brat. Catching the dangerous vibe, Earl Welton smoothly slid between the two glaring moms, stepping up to kill the drama before it became tomorrow's tabloid headline. Alf's mom was sweating bullets, totally isolated on the battlefield, while her baby daddy chilled in the background like an NPC. He honestly looked like he couldn't care less, so when she finally spotted his shadow stepping into the spotlight, a wave of massive relief washed over her. She fully bet on him coming in clutch to back up her claims. In that desperate moment, she completely blocked out the fact that the man had ice in his veins, delusionally expecting him to play the ultimate hero dad and protect their family's pride. Plot twist: things were about to go totally sideways for her. Opening his mouth, he bluntly announced that on this gorgeous evening their idiot son had totally fumbled. Zero hesitation, he threw his own blood under the bus, deeply bowing to Mrs. Welton and apologizing for the massive disaster his kid almost triggered. Sears was vibrating with pure frustration. To her, targeting a kid was a red line you just don't cross, period. Suddenly, they realized they were the main event. A massive crowd of high society nobles surrounded them, totally paralyzed and whispering about the absolute chaos that just crashed their exclusive party. Sears mentally clocked how terrifyingly fast the Count had switched up his mask to save face. With him bowing so publicly, he totally checkmated her. She couldn't keep raging without looking like the villain, forcing her to swallow her anger and nod, prepping to dip from the ballroom. The host caught the vibe and politely suggested Count Welton take his family to chill in a private suite. The Earl gave a smooth nod, agreeing that dipping out was the smartest play to put a lid on the boiling tension. Taking control, the host grabbed the mic, telling the gawking VIPs to call it a night, while dropping a heavy apology for the unhinged drama. The crowd slowly melted away into the hallways, instantly spilling hot tea and murmuring about the insane showdown they just witnessed. But the crazy part, not a single extra actually knew what sparked the boss fight or how the absolute mess even got swept under the rug. Fast forward. The second they were out of earshot from the nosy nobles, the wife spun around to face Count Simon, absolutely flaming him for that public betrayal. It was a massive shock to her system. Tears literally streaming down her ruined makeup, she screamed that Alf was their own flesh and blood, demanding they shield him at all costs. She was terrified of the fallout, but no matter how fiercely she tried to push the victim card for her boy, crying about Jamie's overpowered magic, the Count just hit her with a sub-zero glare and ordered her to shut her trap. This dude was strictly in damage control mode. He coldly commanded her to grab the kid and vanish off the radar entirely. Lay low, go ghost. He needed them out of the picture while the heavy hitters figured out how to patch things up before a full-blown clan war ruined their political alliances. Pitch black outside. The second the heavy doors clicked shut inside their ultra-secure VIP suite, the Countess went right back to screaming, utterly horrified at how savagely he just threw their heir to the wolves. In her mind, family is ride or die. Even if the kid totally messed up, a real dad should have backed his play. He completely tuned out her screeching, locking his dead eyes onto his son, and asking if this pathetic stunt was just a twisted cry for attention. Alf froze. He glued his eyes to the floor, absolutely terrified to make eye contact and expose his own shaking nerves. Dropping his voice to a terrifying growl, the Count ordered him to spill the truth. Sure, Alf was practically paralyzed with fear, but he was about to learn a brutal lesson about the massive fallout of his actions. This whole fiasco threatened to completely wreck the kingdom's political chessboard, especially ripping up ties with the Eastern elites. Alf was practically shaking out of his skin, terrified to spill the truth. The irony, he only sparked this entire disaster just to get a shred of his father's validation. Swallowing his panic, he managed to stammer out an excuse, claiming Jamie was acting way too cocky, and he never expected the clash to snowball like this. Simon saw right through the lies, but getting that vocal confirmation was all he needed. Time to drop the real hammer. He demanded to know exactly where Alf scored the Phoenix Ghost, the overpowered amulet that unlocked that forbidden technique. Tears pooling in his eyes, Alf stared at the terrifying patriarch, fully aware that every word escaping his mouth was just digging his own grave a little deeper. But he didn't pull this off solo. Simon locked eyes with his son, projecting an aura so freezing it could stop a beating heart. The Count laid it out straight. He absolutely despises. Repeating himself and spilling the truth right now was Alf's only lifeline. Strike 3 was approaching. He made it crystal clear this was his absolute final time, asking who handed over that artifact. Right as Alf hit his breaking point, moments away from snapping and throwing Leon directly under the bus, the universe delivered impeccable timing. Mere moments later, Leon casually strolled through the doorway, dragged into this interrogation by their dad to face the music. Simon wanted the mastermind. Taking one look at the suffocating room, Leon instantly read the vibe and just clicked his tongue in pure annoyance. He was incredibly salty that his big brother completely fumbled a cheat tier item that should have easily flipped the script. Staring at Alf's pathetic, trembling face, Leon internally cringed. He had literally spoon-fed the guy a guaranteed flawless victory, yet Alf still managed to totally throw the match. But right now, Leon had to play the innocent little angel card. He needed absolute plausible deniability. No way was he letting his dad punish him just based on the word of a disgraced older brother who held zero clout. When the Count flat out demanded if he supplied the Phoenix Phantom, Leon just gave a short nod. No stuttering, no excuses. Simon instantly fired back, demanding to know why he would hand off a literal weapon of mass destruction that could have caught massive crowds in the crossfire. Playing the naive little kid card, Leon smoothly claimed he thought it was just a harmless, friendly sparring match. He insisted he just couldn't stand watching his big bro take a brutal loss. What kind of younger sibling would just stand by and watch? But Simon sliced right through the facade. He coldly cut him off, dropping a massive truth bomb. Leon was simply using Alf as a disposable pawn. That brutal reality check completely rattled the boy. The Count kept tearing into his defenses, exposing that Leon never actually cared about helping his brother win. He orchestrated this entire setup just to watch Alf crash and burn. Speechless, the younger sibling stared up at his terrifying father. The man stood there like an unreadable brick wall. Leon's mind was reeling, completely baffled at how this guy flawlessly deduced his secret master plan. The dynamic instantly shifted. Now Alf was totally traumatized, shooting pure, unfiltered panic at both his terrifying dad and his two-faced little brother. Leon's five-dimensional chess move had just completely backfired on him. Breaking the tense silence, the patriarch dropped the ultimate soul-crushing bombshell. He straight up gave zero cares about either of them. Any lingering hope for a fatherly bond or mercy instantly reduced to ashes. The absolute savage actually looked his own flesh and blood directly in the eye and confessed they meant nothing to him. He mockingly asked if they wanted to know the exact reason behind his apathy, not even giving them a single second to reply. He completely roasted their stats. Sure, his legendary DNA flowed through them, but their actual talent levels were absolute garbage compared to his elite standards. But beyond their weak abilities, what really killed him was the audacity. Did these kids seriously think they could hide their pathetic little schemes from him? He read their immature plotting minds like an open book, laying down the absolute brutal reality of their dynamic. He declared there was only one valid way to ever earn his respect. He demanded they drop these goofy, useless side quests. Prove you aren't just background characters. Step up, show absolute loyalty, and become actual assets to his empire. Stepping back, the Count washed his hands of them. No more safety nets. These two boys were now completely on their own, forced to survive the boss-level fallout of their own epic stupidity. Simon laid down his final humiliating order tomorrow morning. They both had to march right up to Jamie Welton and beg for forgiveness, and they couldn't stop groveling until the overpowered kid officially let them off the hook. The heavy wooden door slammed shut. Reality hit them like a freight train. Showing their faces to Jamie again after practically trying to nuke him felt like an absolute death sentence. Just visualizing locking eyes with that monster mage had Alf visibly shaking, though he desperately tried to mask his total panic. He turned to his younger brother, asking if he was seriously going to apologize to that punk. But Leon was completely zoned out, mind completely fried. Simon's absolute verbal destruction had basically short-circuited his brain. Now only one single manic thought was looping in his head. He had to prove he possessed the true alpha bloodline. It wasn't just a goal anymore, it had morphed into a full-blown toxic obsession. His eyes burning with a dark, intense resolve, he silently swore to the universe that his future actions would force his father to acknowledge his worth. Meanwhile, completely oblivious to the elite family drama, our boy Jamie was knocked out cold, catching some well-deserved sleep after completely dominating the day's chaos. Completely unaware of his poor mother pacing the room, still stressing out and checking to make sure her boy didn't have a single scratch on him. Look, Jamie was basically a walking cheat code. He could have walked away from that brawl without a single scratch. But Mama Bear instincts don't just turn off. Sears hovered over him, totally aware that her son had practically been out for Alpha's blood. What kind of insane beef sparked this? This wasn't some petty playground scuffle. This was straight up lethal. Her knuckles turned white as a dangerous resolve took over. She was ready to drag her entire bloodline into a war. She was inches away from doing something unspeakable. But right as the darkness crept in, she caught Jamie shifting away. It was like he could literally feel the toxic, murderous energy radiating off her. Instant reality check. The guilt hit her like a truck. She was supposed to be his safe space, the picture-perfect mom. Not some unhinged villain ready to catch a body. The tears spilled over before she could stop them. She needed to back away from his bed, swearing to lock up that dark side forever. Her family needed her as their rock, not a wrecking ball. Then, a heavy, warm hand dropped onto her shoulder. Instant anchor. It was Argino bringing that unmatched dad energy to ground her. The Count pulled her close, his voice a soft rumble, asking if she was okay, silently promising that the nightmare was finally over. He urged her to go crash, and honestly, having him right there, melting away the panic was exactly what she needed. He reminded her they were a team, she didn't have to carry this insane burden solo. Still playing the tough girl. She wiped her face and acted clueless. Why wouldn't she be fine? It wasn't even her mess to stress over, right? Argino didn't push it. Instead, he smoothly asked for his marching orders, ready to burn the world down if she gave the word. Her word was literal law to him. Sears let out a breathy laugh, teasing him about holding her back earlier. He just smirked, pointing out he only stepped in to save her from doing something she'd deeply regret. Damage control was his specialty. Plus, Count Simon was already groveling and begging for forgiveness. Starting a massive turf war between the East and West nobility over one kid's beef wasn't the move. They both agreed. Alpha was going to face absolute hell at home, judging by how the brat practically wet himself when his dad showed up. Deciding they were hovering too much, the parents finally slipped out to let their boy catch some sleep. Jamie lay there dead still. He tracked their fading footsteps, playing the perfect sleeping angel. Once the coast was completely clear, the mask dropped. He got why they were freaking out. He had fully snapped back there. He was 1 second away from sending Alpha straight to the afterlife. The adrenaline crash hit hard. Squeezing his eyes shut, a haunting visual flashed across his mind. An image burned into his soul for ages. His mind drifted back to Jane and the insane reality of her reincarnation, hijacking the body of his sister's friend Rebecca, a girl wandering around with Jane's face completely clueless. Honestly, it wasn't even the craziest plot twist. If a 10,000-year-old being like him could respawn, her coming back was just standard physics. But here was the kicker: she drew a total blank when she looked at him. Meanwhile, Jamie was cursed with crystal-clear memories, his heart still heavy with an ancient tragic romance. Memory wipes were the default setting for reincarnation. His god-tier retention was the glitch in the matrix. Yet the math wasn't mathing. What were the odds of them dropping into the exact same timeline? Was the universe just playing a sick joke, or were they pawns on someone else's chessboard? A chilling thought spiked his anxiety. The 12 gods. Were those celestial creeps pulling the strings? A sudden mental pushback from Black snapped him out of it. His familiar basically called Cap, pointing out the massive plot holes in that theory. Jamie shook off the paranoia. Black was right. If the gods actually knew he was back on the map, they'd have sent a hit squad, not a puzzle. To dodge the doom spiraling taking over his brain, he started aggressively messing with Black, much to the familiar's absolute annoyance. But the distraction failed. His mental defenses crumbled, throwing him back to his most agonizing, cherished memory. The cinematic replay was brutal. There she was, his original Jane, bleeding out, paying the ultimate tragic price just because she dared to love him. The heartbreak hit him like a physical punch. Keeping his emotions in check whenever she crossed his mind was practically impossible. He needed a game plan. Step 1, confront Rebecca. Step 2, piece this mystery together before he lost his mind. Cut to a different scene. A shady, cloaked dude petting a bird muttered under his breath, declaring that the mystical alliance. Reality itself was shifting right down to its core. He set the little bird down on the wooden planks, watching its tiny claws grip the surface to stay upright. A faint smirk crossed his face as his mind drifted to his own hidden agenda. This shadow figure was fixated on Count Welton's oldest kid, Jamie. The boy was only 9 years old, but he was already crushing the 4th tier, an absolute prodigy with magic. Snapping out of his trance, the man scattered the flock, commanding them to vanish into the distance. Once morning finally cracked the horizon, and the coast was clear, Jamie slipped out to the estate gardens. He needed a quiet spot by the rushing stream to clear his head. Buried deep in pure nature, he took massive gulps of the crisp morning breeze. It felt like absolute brain bleach washing away the chaos and snapping his focus back into place. Even his summoned beast was totally vibing with the gorgeous scenery, projecting those chill feelings straight to his master. Jamie was honestly blown away. Who knew Black even processed the concept of fresh air, let alone actually enjoyed it? A wild but welcome plot twist. The shadow creature started buzzing, trying to communicate something deeper, but Jamie shut it down instantly. He told the beast he got the memo and did not need to suffer through its clunky mush chatter. He just wanted to soak in the absolute peace and quiet. Since it was the final 24 hours of the gathering, and the massive crowds had already packed up for home, the hype party energy was fading into a heavy silence. He mentally bookmarked the fact that he absolutely had to track down the one person who mattered most. He needed to catch her before she dipped and vanished from his life again. On his way back, his instincts screamed at him. He slammed the brakes on his walk, his ears zeroing in on the environment. Something was totally off. The kid whipped his head around his eyes, darting through the trees to pinpoint the noise that was setting off all his red flags for an ambush. At first, he just tuned in with his raw physical senses, keeping his magic completely suppressed, but quickly realized that was not cutting it. Without missing a beat, he flared his monoradar outward, casting a massive net to trace exactly what was triggering his fight or flight response. Bingo. His magical pulse locked right onto the epicenter of the disturbance, and he bolted straight toward the hotspot. To figure out what was throwing off such bizarre energy waves, Jamie pushed his tiny body to the absolute limit, gasping for air, but refusing to slow down. He needed answers immediately. Bursting through the final wall of foliage into the clearing, the scene waiting for him was wild. Rebecca was chilling by the water edge, with an otherworldly entity hovering right over her. It was an actual Undine. The water spirit locked eyes with the boy, glaring at him with heavy boss energy and challenging him to step up. The intense stare down totally tipped Rebecca off. Realizing she was being spied on made her instantly awkward around her summon, spinning around to confront whoever was creeping in the bushes and ruining her vibe. She completely froze in shock. Rebecca scrambled to her feet, rapid-firing questions about how he was holding up, desperately trying to deflect his attention from the magical spirit. But Jamie was already spiraling, completely paralyzed. How do you even act normal around the literal love of your past life, who was now treating you like some random noble kid? She looked absolutely stunning. That radiant smile of hers lit up the whole area, blending flawlessly with the magical glow, radiating from her core. Breaking the tension, she finally introduced herself, since up until this exact moment, they had never actually spoken in private. And just as he suspected, she was a legit water elemental master. It hit him like a massive shockwave. Every single fragmented memory from his previous existence was standing right in front of him. Same soul, same water affinity. Then, like a ghost whispering in his ear, her dying wish, begging him never to forget her, crashed into his brain. His face completely dropped, contorting into pure heartbreak. Rebecca had zero clue what was happening. She tried to keep things polite and friendly, but all she got back was dead silence. It completely baffled her. Why did this kid look so utterly shattered watching her move? It was like he was desperately trying to burn her image into his brain permanently. The second they locked eyes, the insane sense of déjà vu gripped him by the throat. Keeping his composure was impossible. The cold, ruthless edge he had spent lifetimes building just melted away. Staring at his lost love, he forgot all about his tiny 10-year-old vessel. In his mind, he was a full-grown man again, standing right beside her. Totally oblivious to his mental breakdown, Rebecca just assumed the crazy trauma from yesterday was catching up to him. To her, that explained why he was acting so spaced out and weird right now. Her big sister instincts kicked in. Seeing this little kid trying to act tough while clearly falling apart, she closed the gap between them. Before Jamie could even process it, she pulled him into a warm hug, gently rubbing his back. She whispered that the nightmare was over, promising him he was totally safe now. Caught entirely off guard, the boy. That gentle, familiar touch hit Jamie like a freight train, flooding his mind with feelings he thought were long dead. But he forced himself to snap out of it, desperately trying to write it off, as nothing more than some lingering phantom pain from his past life. He slapped on his usual mask, slipping right back into the act he had perfected over the years, and shoved those chaotic past life memories back into the dark corners of his mind. Taking a breath, the two of them sat down, playing it totally cool, like absolutely zero tension hung in the air. Rebecca started pouring her heart out. Honestly, it was like her dad had hardwired her brain to believe that just venting to someone would magically make all her problems vanish into thin air. And catching the intense way he was listening, she totally bought into that idea. Jamie bit his tongue, choosing to keep his mouth completely shut about whether her falling for his fake persona was actually a good thing or a total disaster waiting to happen. Instead, he smoothly pivoted, asking, "Wait, did Viscount Val actually say that?" Her face instantly lit up. She was literally obsessed with her family holding them on this massive pedestal, and she looked absolutely thrilled that Jamie actually picked up on that vibe. She let out a soft sigh, admitting how bummed she was that they totally missed their chance to chat the day before. But then her eyes sparkled, adding how hyped she was. That fate finally threw them a bone and let them cross paths today. Flashing a charming smile, Jamie nodded, totally agreeing that this little accidental run-in was actually hitting the spot. Honestly, she was low-key shocked. It blew her mind that this conversation was flowing so smoothly with a guy who had just acted like a total ice king toward her little sister, yet here he was serving straight-up gentleman energy. Staring at him, Rebecca honestly felt like she was talking to a completely different dude. But right in the middle of her thoughts, Jamie totally derailed the chat, dropping a random question about the Ball family and some ancient mythical pact they supposedly had with the wind spirit, which honestly sounded like absolute fiction. She shook her head, explaining that she actually tried locking in a contract with that exact spirit but completely fumbled it. Turns out trying to vibe with wild elemental forces is wildly unpredictable. The wind spirit literally manifested just to tell her straight to her face that she was not built for it. But then Undine pulled up on her out of nowhere, proving it was absolute destiny. Because the water spirit straight up demanded they seal a contract right that second, treating the whole thing like an insanely high-stakes mission. Normally, you would want to run something that huge by your dad first, right? But she just blindly said yes on the spot. A total leap of faith that proved the universe was pulling the strings. Jamie soaked in every word, the gears turning in his head. It practically screamed that the god of spirits was playing four-dimensional chess and knew every single detail, which made this whole mess infinitely more toxic. See, a Spirit King's contract is not some basic everyday deal. It is a hardcore soul-binding pact, literally locked in by the very lives of both participants. So when Jane's soul reincarnated into Rebecca's body, there is zero doubt that the Spirit King was tracking her the entire time. Treading lightly, the boy tested the waters, asking if the Viscount completely lost his mind over his oldest daughter pulling such a reckless stunt. but she just brushed it off casually, dropping that her dad was only bummed out for a quick second, completely keeping the messy details under wraps. Alarm bells were going off in Jamie's head. This whole scenario was uniquely unhinged, breaking literally every rule of standard spirit lore. As she studied his intense expression, she started second-guessing everything herself. I mean, a high-tier spirit just pulling up unannounced to pitch a magical binding contract. That kind of wild flex was completely unheard of to the boy. Playing the part perfectly, Jamie let his voice drop, acting like he was totally gutted that things went down like that, instead of following her original game plan. He leaned in, hyping her up by saying that if the water spirit handpicked her, she needed to just own her power and trust the process. Rebecca was totally caught off guard. His words hit so deep that she was basically left speechless, realizing she had completely glossed over the crazy butterfly effect of everything that just went down. Snapping back to reality, a soft, genuine smile broke across her face, totally vibing with his energy. He was right. She needed to stop stressing and actually appreciate the wild cards destiny was tossing her way, especially a massive glow-up like this one. Deciding to bounce before the trauma dumping could continue, Jamie hit her with a quick, polite thank you for the chat, and literally just dipped. The poor girl was totally stunned, not expecting the vibe to get cut off so brutally fast. She could not even squeeze out a goodbye before he was already sprinting back to the estate, leaving her completely whiplashed by his totally unhinged exit. Honestly, the elegant noblewoman was low-key dying to keep the conversation rolling, and felt incredibly salty that he just rage-quit their hangout out of nowhere. But there was literally nothing she could do except stare at his back. Out of nowhere, this heavy, suffocating sensation crashed through her veins, making her knees go ridiculously weak, totally terrifying her, because her body had never glitched out like this before. Meanwhile, Jamie finally made it back to his room and started venting to his familiar. He broke down the whole chaotic meetup, pointing out how Rebecca totally gave off heavy grown-up energy, making it super awkward to just treat her like a normal peer. He finally collapsed inside his space, desperately needing a minute of pure silence to process the massive lore drop he just got hit with and piece together how the absolute heck the gods were tied into this mess. But boom. Familiar, annoying voices suddenly echoed through the hall, totally throwing him off. He really thought the beef between them was completely squashed, at least for now. Standing dead in his path were Count Simon's two sons, and man, their faces were basically screaming murder, which made sense considering the absolute train wreck of a clash they had the day before. It was painfully obvious that their toxic grudge had zero time to cool off. Jamie's muscles instantly locked up. He braced himself, scanning their faces to figure out what kind of garbage they were about to pull. This time around, because honestly, he considered both of them to be completely unhinged. They stood there awkwardly, totally struggling to spit out the actual reason they blocked his path. Then, out of literally nowhere, Alf mumbled an apology, though the delivery was so dry it felt faker than plastic, especially after the pure, unfiltered villain glare he had flashing in his eyes just a day ago. Jamie froze his brain, completely short-circuiting, as he tried to figure out their game. These guys started begging for forgiveness, like their lives were on the line, but Jamie instantly saw right through the act, knowing full well the Count had literally forced them to apologize, which was the only reason they even showed up today. This wasn't some heartfelt moment of regret. It was pure survival. One of the bullies turned beet red, hating every second of it, but realizing he was completely checkmated, he wisely decided to swallow his pride and keep his mouth shut. Jamie then shifted his gaze to the random red-haired kid standing nearby, wondering who this fresh face was. When Alf introduced the boy as his little brother, Jamie mercilessly roasted him, asking if he literally brought a child along to act as a human shield. Before things escalated, Leon chimed in, confessing that he was the one who handed Alf the artifact. Jamie narrowed his eyes, instantly picking up major red flags, knowing this toxic family was perfectly capable of spinning a massive web of lies. Refusing to be played, Jamie locked onto his former rival's little brother to dig up the truth, demanding his name. Leon introduced himself with a guarded, hostile glare, masking an absolute fiercest volcano of dark energy that made his older sibling look completely tame. Without missing a beat, Jamie stealthily scanned the kid's monocore, needing to know exactly what kind of threat he was dealing with. The scan revealed some insane latent power. Leon completely outclassed Alf by a mile. On top of that, the kid's cold demeanor proved he was no pushover. Yet it was painfully obvious that Count Simon treated this prodigy like absolute trash, barely acknowledging his existence. This whole chaotic stunt was just a desperate cry for Daddy's attention. Leon then brushed off the drama, casually asking if Jamie accepted their pathetic apology so they could secure the win and walk away. But Jamie wasn't blind. He caught the subtle sneer on Leon's face, proving this fake apology meant absolutely nothing. He realized this arrogant kid hadn't even bothered showing up to yesterday's fight, acting totally superior, and treating the whole conflict like a twisted chess game played purely for his own amusement. This pint-sized sociopath viewed Jamie, Alf, and literally everyone except his dad as absolute garbage, an insanely dark mindset for his age. Jamie instantly flagged him as a major future villain who would definitely derail his plans if left unchecked, meaning he needed to nip this threat in the bud right now. Snapping back to reality, Jamie noted Alf's desperate thirst to be the heir, pressing right on his insecurities since becoming the family's top dog was all Alf cared about. Jamie completely ignored Alf's babbling, locking his piercing gaze onto Leon, whose smug aura instantly shattered as he realized his dark secrets were utterly exposed. Stepping uncomfortably close, Jamie coldly stated that their toxic family politics were none of his business, but he absolutely wasn't letting this disrespect slide. Closing the gap, he laid down the law since Leon pulled the strings. He was going to face the ultimate consequences. And by consequences, he meant a brutal dose of karma to make up for the absolute nightmare they caused yesterday. The red-haired menace couldn't even fathom the world of hurt heading his way, without anyone there to hold back this overpowered mage. Before Leon could even gasp, the entire world instantly blacked out, plunging him into a suffocating pitch-black void, completely stripped of light. Pure terror gripped Leon as his strength evaporated, his limbs locking up like they were encased in solid ice that he couldn't break. Unable to move a muscle, his knees slammed into the ground just as a colossal godlike eye ripped through the darkness, echoing a bone-chilling warning. He gets one pass, and if he ever crosses that line again, it's game over. The second those words hit his brain, he snapped back to reality, standing right back in the parlor, gasping for air as he reeled from Jamie's absolute masterclass of psychological, magical warfare. Leon's brain was short-circuiting, desperately trying to figure out if he just blacked out or tripped out, totally failing to comprehend the cosmic horror he just witnessed. Before he could even process the sheer trauma, he collapsed and shrieked, his mind utterly broken by staring directly into the abyss of overwhelming power. Alf absolutely panicked, staring at his little brother, who was now thrashing around like a total lunatic. Tears streamed down Leon's face like waterfalls. His nervous system had completely crashed, leaving him convulsing in sheer panic. Through the blinding haze of tears, one terrifying truth locked itself into his brain forever. If he ever provoked Jamie again, he was leaving in a body bag. A knowing smirk crept across the Welton family rep's face. He finally pieced together the root of this total, absolute nightmare. Jamie wasn't just flexing, he was dropping a masterclass in raw, undeniable power. Tears welled up in Leon's trembling eyes as he stared down his nightmare, realizing his only play was to drop right to his knees. He was bowing to the exact same dude who could have literally erased him from existence just heartbeats ago. Running on absolute fumes, the broken boy choked out a pathetic apology. It wasn't genuine remorse, just pure primal terror carving its way deep into his soul. After witnessing Jamie's god-tier technique, cut to the aftermath, it was finally time to bounce. High society snobs who crashed this stiff traditional gala were exchanging their fake little pleasantries. Fancy rides lined up the driveway, waiting to haul the elite back to their mansions. Honestly, Jamie was absolutely hyped to ditch this place and head back to his chill, low-key, everyday life. No more wasting breath on wannabe menaces like those red-headed brothers. Looking back, he mentally clocked a brutal reality check. The exact second he stepped off his home turf, the drama instantly snowballed. Hindsight is 20/20, and staying holed up in his room, dodging his mom's smothering affection, would have been infinitely better than dealing with the absolute train wreck he just survived. Then again, he instantly checked himself. Keeping up that flawless golden child persona was its own kind of mental torture. Stomaching all that high-class family bonding was exhausting. Deep in his own thoughts, he completely missed Count Simon sliding up beside him. The older man easily caught onto the kid's sour vibe. Honestly, Jamie had totally spaced out on how badly he originally wanted to network with this family. The chaotic mess of the past 48 hours had completely derailed his main objective for crashing this party. Flipping the switch, the boy masked his annoyance with a polite front, claiming he wasn't mad at all. He played it off, saying he was just pumped to finally hit the couch and escape this endless drama. Playing the gracious host, the Count dropped a heavy sigh, genuinely regretting they couldn't squeeze in a deeper chat. While the kid was bunking under his roof, playing the game, Jamie smoothly replied that he was totally down for a real conversation too. But fate had other chaotic plans, leaving them both holding an L. Simon threw out an open invite offering him to crash for a few more days, but our boy hit him with a hard pass. He was completely drained and craving the peace of his own bed. Let us be real, the actual reason was floating right there in the tension. No one needed to say it out loud. The Count's own bloodline was literally the epicenter of every single disaster that just went down. Letting out a heavy breath, the man read the room. He caught the drift immediately and dropped the whole stay longer routine. Changing lanes, he dropped a warning. The underground magic scene was already putting Jamie on their radar, meaning the kid needed to watch his six and move incredibly smart from here on out. Wrapping up his thoughts, Simon seemed genuinely impressed that Jamie knew exactly how much weight his name carried in these circles, especially after watching him completely shatter that red-headed kid's ego. Jamie just nodded along, not even trying to humble brag. Because honestly, he was done playing the weak, helpless victim. It was time the world recognized exactly who they were dealing with. Casually, he mentioned handing out a brutal reality check to the son Leon. Without missing a beat, the father admitted he already figured that out. Considering the kid had been absolutely losing his mind since yesterday, Jamie stared at the Count, completely baffled by this icy reaction. We are talking about his own flesh and blood here, yet the guy wasn't throwing a tantrum or even looking mildly pissed off. Simon's logic was freezing cold. His son messed around and found out. Karma collected its debt, so why hold a grudge against the Reaper? The puzzle pieces instantly clicked in Jamie's head. No wonder those brothers were absolute menaces. Look at the emotional frostbite they got from their own dad, right out in the open. Dropping some unsolicited truth, the boy pointed out that Leon actually possessed some raw magical affinity. With the right mentor, that kid could seriously level up his arts. He wasn't even throwing shade. It was straight up, genuine advice. But the Count's response was absolute zero. He already knew about his son's spark but chalked it up to being painfully mid, so he intentionally starved the kid of any real training. Stepping up, Jamie broke it down for him. Even bottom-tier mages have to hit the books first. If Leon actually grinded and put in the sweat equity, he could easily catch up to his old man's power scaling. Dropping a heavy hint that wasted potential is a choice. Tearing down his own polite diplomatic mask for a split second, Jamie fired shots. He called the Count out on his toxic parenting, blaming him for treating his kids like talentless trash. He did not hold back, clarifying that while Alf was basically a lost cause, Leon was sitting on a goldmine of sleeper potential. The older man's ego took a hit. He challenged the boy, asking if he seriously thought a veteran like him couldn't spot a prodigy. He was genuinely baffled how, sitting at the 8th tier, his own radar completely missed his kid's hidden specs, yet this literal child stood there spitting absolute facts about latent power. A chilling realization crept up the Count's spine. He was staring directly at an absolute grandmaster, but trying to wrap his head around that felt like pure fiction when looking at a pint-sized kid. Delivering the final blow, Jamie calmly stated that by actually backing his son, the Count could easily smash through the bottlenecks holding his own power back, tearing down walls Simon hadn't even admitted existed. The older man was absolutely blown away by how this kid completely read him like an open book. Right before their ride rolled up and signaled it was time to bounce. Catching Jamie before he left, Simon dropped a crazy detail. Some random little girl had once hit him with the exact same harsh truth. Hoping this prodigy would stay on the right path, the Count gave his farewells, while our boy dashed straight for the carriage. In that split second, he totally looked his age, just an ordinary kid, despite dropping enough heavy wisdom to send a grown man into a full-blown existential crisis. Simon just stood there, watching the carriage fade into the distance, completely speechless after having his entire worldview shattered in a 5-minute chat. Unable to handle the sting of his exposed insecurities, he just shut his eyes tight, choosing the path of maximum delusion by pretending none of it ever happened. Back on his own turf, he admitted he felt pretty awful about how everything played out. But let's be real, he wasn't about to change his ways anytime soon. Meanwhile, the second our main guy touched down at his own estate, he instantly shifted gears, since his hometown had been dealing with some serious drama while he was away. Throwing on his signature pitch-black face-concealing cloak, he grabbed his magical familiar and ghosted straight into the nearby woods. It was time to tie up the massive loose ends. He was forced to ditch when that whole fancy ball at Simon's mansion hijacked his schedule. Since yesterday was a total wash, Jamie instantly flipped the switch, stepping back into his absolute boss era. As the Lord of the Undead, his aura flared as he commanded his shadowy minions to quit creeping in the brush and show their faces. Knowing better than to test him, the rotting squad materialized out of thin air, honoring his original command to lay low in some ghost town for a few days, trying to save face. For their seriously delayed arrival, one minion immediately threw Azad under the bus, blaming his sloppy moves for the massive holdup. But Jamie couldn't care less about their petty drama. He was totally laser-focused on the intel they had scraped together, while he was playing dress-up, knowing this data was the ultimate key to his next big brain play. Stepping up, a minion dropped the bomb. The Zenith Church had basically speed-run their expansion across Hace, infecting the entire city with insane efficiency. They were handing out free meals and beds to the homeless, farming massive PR points with the locals, and had even just launched an orphanage. Jamie soaked in the details, his mind racing to build a timeline, snapping a quick question about when this whole campaign kicked off. The undead lackey spilled that it all started going down roughly 2 months back, right after Revel crumbled. Once Count Welton absolutely nuked that underground syndicate, the Zenith squad slid right into the power vacuum, pushing their holy agenda, while playing the ultimate saviors for the broke and broken. Naturally, the street-level citizens were super sketched out at first, assuming these mysterious do-gooders had some massive hidden catch. But fast forward a bit, and they totally drank the Kool-Aid, morphing into hardcore devout followers that skyrocketed the church's street cred. As of right now, Zenith was flexing as the absolute top-tier untouchable faith in the region. Taking all this in, Jamie was internally raging. The fact that they locked down the city this fast felt way too calculated. And he wasn't buying the happy accident vibe for a second. His blood boiled, knowing the exact same clown who wrecked his previous life was now actively polluting his brand new playground. Letting his dark aura spike, he glared down at his decaying squad and dropped an insanely cold question. Could total war and perfect peace actually survive on the exact same turf? That explanation went straight over their heads. Azad and his buddy just exchanged this totally blank stare, silently agreeing that connecting these dots was physically impossible. But surviving their boss meant faking it. Desperate to avoid triggering Jamie's legendary temper, the guy threw out a wild guess about them sharing a bloodline. Bingo. Jamie ate that up, dropping a smirk and claiming that was exactly how Jana pictured her own vibe. Did that clear things up for Azad's crew? Absolutely not. To Jamie, this whole universe was basically a ticking time bomb, built on rotting corpses, just begging for a spark. He saw war as the ultimate mask-off moment, where the true twisted divinity of this reality stepped into the spotlight, stripping away all the fake symbolism. Right now, some absolutely ruthless deity was pulling every string imaginable, desperate to brainwash the masses. He wanted everyone hopelessly addicted to his power, setting the stage for an absolute disaster. Jamie totally called it out. This whole savior complex was nothing but a massive smokescreen. In reality, this god was cooking up a master plan way darker and more chaotic. Now, the henchmen had one mission: crack that secret agenda. They tuned in closely, knowing that crossing Jamie meant instant deletion. You either executed his orders, or you perished. Smash, cut to Ricky, chilling in the sanctuary, run by the Genus Church. The vibes here hit different. People actually smiled and hyped him up for doing the bare minimum. Thinking back to scraping by in the grimy gutters, the kid felt like he just unlocked the gates to literal heaven. The robed priest taking care of them locked eyes with the boy, acknowledging the brutal trauma he was carrying. He swore on his life that as long as the kid stayed inside these walls, that street nightmare was officially over. It had been exactly 1.5 months since Ricky got scooped up by the orphanage, and the energy here acted like pure healing magic. Without this place swooping in, he and his sister would be nothing but bones in some alleyway. Stepping into the room, his sister did not even flinch or spin around to check who walked in. She just instantly called out his name, reading his aura like a radar. Ricky shot her a soft nod and closed the distance, making sure she knew he was there. Anna was completely blind. Back in the day, the second their toxic parents discovered her condition, they dumped both kids on the curb and bolted. Shielding her meant Ricky had to dive headfirst into the most soul-crushing gigs imaginable. Bro had zero options. It was either hustle in the dirt or starve. The concrete jungle showed absolutely zero mercy, and every adult walking past them was just another cold, heartless, non-playable character. Praying for a hero back then was a complete joke. Existence was pure psychological horror. But then for the absolute first time, a real lifesaver reached out. No strings attached. Just pure rescue for two kids who got dealt the worst hand possible. In their traumatized minds, they fully believed the creator himself had reached down to pull them out of the abyss. From that exact second, Ricky and Anna secured a brand new timeline. A total system reset compared to their tragic origin story. Drowning in this sudden, unexplainable miracle, the boy made a hardcore vow to morph into a divine disciple and broadcast these holy blessings to the entire server. The shelter was packed with strays just like them kids, hauling massive baggage. So whenever a win dropped, the whole squad celebrated like it was top-tier loot. Lately, the hallways were buzzing with wild whispers about a kid named Shinu, supposedly handpicked by the heavens. He was packing his bags next week to hit the main cathedral and level up into a full-blown priest. Ricky soaked up the gossip, a tiny spark of jealousy flaring up. Bro desperately wanted to be the main character of that kind of headline. Meanwhile, Jamie was cruising home after a midnight scouting mission that just dumped a massive lore drop right into his lap. Flexing his bond with his shadow beast Black, the kid signaled that their base was in rendering distance and to initiate the landing sequence. But out of nowhere, his radar pinged. An anomaly chilling in the dirt below forced him to hit the brakes and investigate before clocking out. Some dude was totally wiped out in the dirt, his blade tossed to the side like garbage. No pulse check yet, but the scene was screaming red flags. Tapping into his familiar's dark magic, Jamie drifted down without making a single sound. He crept up on the knocked-out target eyes, scanning the perimeter. He desperately needed to analyze the crazy aura leaking off this random body. It felt heavy, and definitely lacked that pure, holy protagonist energy. Initially, he bet it was some corrupted temple boss bleeding out, which would be a totally mind-bending plot twist, considering the current meta. But zooming in for a hardcore inspection, the armor gave it away. This was not just a grunt. It was an elite holy knight, and that just made the mystery 10 times more chaotic. Why the hell was a top-tier paladin face down in the gutter at midnight with literally zero witnesses or enemies in the zone? Jamie's survival instincts flared. Walking away from this glitch in the Matrix guaranteed it would boomerang back and ruin his life later. Logic dictated one brutally simple solution. Just execute him right here. Jamie tightened his grip, and stepped into the strike zone. Jamie firmly planted his boot right onto the skull of the motionless stranger. Out of nowhere, a hand violently locked around his ankle. The sudden grip sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through Jamie. He totally assumed this holy knight was knocked out cold, completely defenseless. Snapping back to reality, he desperately swallowed his panic, knowing any sign of weakness would instantly give up his upper hand. But keeping a poker face was insanely tough. The guy glared up with totally unhinged, bloodshot eyes. His grip tightened like a vice as he endlessly muttered a single chilling syllable, Ed. Jamie frantically racked his brain, trying to decode the hidden lore behind this weirdly specific name drop and what message this psycho was trying to push. But it was a total dead end. The broken knight just kept looping that same creepy chant straight up, dodging every demand about who the heck Ed actually was. Pressing for answers was absolutely useless. No matter how violently Jamie demanded an explanation, the guy stayed locked in his eerie trance, never straying from his broken record script like some glitching NPC. Completely out of his depth, our boy froze, his frustration officially peaking. He thought he had stumbled onto an epic new test subject to experiment on. But this interaction was a massive flop. Clueless on how to hack the situation, Jamie just dusted off his hands, hoping the guy would just starve out and fade away in absolute isolation. He was completely done dealing with this mess. Fast forward to the crack of dawn. Sunlight spilled through the storm clouds, signaling a return to his chill, monster-free morning aesthetic. He fully expected just another boring breakfast loop, but one massive plot twist instantly made his jaw drop, forcing him to squint hard, to process the absolute fever dream unfolding right inside his own dining room. In a twisted stroke of irony, the exact same weirdo from the alley was casually kicking back at the table, aggressively devouring a massive piece of bread. The visual was so totally absurd, compared to the half-dead corpse vibe he was rocking last night. The guy openly confessed that without the count coming in clutch, he would be totally flatlined in the gutter right now. The freezing streets definitely would have packed him up, but thanks to insanely good luck, he was somehow chilling in VIP with the elite. Jamie's dad humbly deflected the hype, reminding the table to respect the actual foot soldiers who hauled his freezing body inside when he was desperately clinging to life. The knight countered instantly, pointing out that those guards literally take their orders straight from the count anyway. So logically, the big boss up top deserved all the credit for this massive rescue operation, pouring out his endless gratitude. Count Welton leaned in sarcastically, asking if sacred warriors made a habit of starving on random street corners. The guest admitted it was super rare, but ultimately they bleed, just like anyone else. Sure, top-tier paladins basically have cheat codes for insane stamina, totally outlasting average humans. Argino cut straight to the chase, questioning his ties to the Pyro faction. The knight nodded hard, flexing his loyalty to the fiery goddess of ultimate mercy and brutal judgment. The patriarch smoothly mentioned how totally thrown off the entire household was, stumbling upon a holy warrior in such a pathetic state, catching an agreeing nod from his wife. Sears casually jumped into the chat, asking if he had ever partied with Bishop Sapira, a dude famous for his insane hospitality. The knight instantly perked up, asking if she repped the Apton region. She kept it incredibly low-key, just casually dropping her maiden name as the Bell clan. That single word hit the blonde warrior like a freight train, totally unprepared to share a meal with such absolute royalty. He violently pushed his chair back immediately, folding into a deep bow, to show massive respect to a legendary bloodline that basically bankrolled the entire Pyro establishment. Realizing he was literally breathing the same air as top-tier nobility, he dipped his head even further down, fanboying over the fact that his sacred church literally rented turf on the Bell estate. But wait, that flex still did not justify this extreme level of groveling. Jamie threw massive side-eye at the whole spectacle, his brain short-circuiting. Paladins never bend the knee for cash or clout. They only bow to divine entities, desperate to unlock the lore behind this glitch in the Matrix. He brilliantly deployed his ultimate trap card, acting like a clueless 9-year-old kid begging his dad for adult tea. Channeling peak innocence, Jamie blinked his huge eyes loudly, asking why the messy street dude was practically worshipping his mom. Internally, he was literally gagging. Pretending to be a brain-dead toddler was sheer physical torture. His dad totally shut him down, promising to drop the lore later off camera because interrupting the main quest right now would be insanely toxic. The rejection stung bad. Jamie had poured his soul into that Oscar-worthy performance, only to catch a massive loss. He had literally debased himself for absolutely zero intel. But then a much darker realization clicked. If the Bell dynasty was practically besties with the Pyro cult, Jamie was officially staring down a catastrophic debuff he really did not need right now. Why? Because he fully planned to pack up and assassinate that exact same goddess. Talk about a seriously awkward family reunion. Later on, Count Welton cornered the knight off-grid, demanding the real scoop on why he was lurking around the eastern borders. A Pyro operative literally had zero business being this far out of his zone. It instantly triggered massive red flags pointing to one toxic theory. The radical church factions were plotting to aggressively conquer more map space, aiming straight for the Welton turf. The paladin instantly waved off the heat, swearing he had zero political beef. He was purely on a solo hunting mission, relentlessly tracking a very specific target. Arsène wasn't going to let this slide, demanding the knight spill the tea on exactly who he was hunting. The blonde warrior finally caved, revealing their target was an absolute madman, a rogue scientist crossing lines that should never ever be crossed. We're talking twisted, highly illegal chimera experiments. This revelation instantly hooked the Count. But the kicker, hearing that this freak was operating right inside Haste, completely pissed him off. The knight totally clammed up, throwing out a quick apology and claiming the intel was strictly classified church business. He tried to brush off the topic, pulling the classic, "I can't share secrets with civilians" card, but Arsène wasn't having it, throwing him a lifeline he offered to handle a favor in exchange for the truth. Bingo. The knight recognized a golden partnership when he saw one. He decided to ditch the rulebook, realizing that having an undisputed swordmaster in his corner was an absolute game changer that could flip the entire mission. Arsène processed the heavy news, his mind racing over the fact that a chimera architect was running loose. This was a massive threat, one capable of totally wrecking the power dynamic of his entire territory. If you don't know, chimeras are terrifying lab-grown monstrosities, forged by mashing up the absolute deadliest traits of different beasts. But the sickest part, these creators are branded as ultimate sinners because they use living, breathing humans as the core. Maybe some ethical weirdos out there use animal cores, but Arsène had literally never heard of one. Playing his cards close to his chest, he told the knight he couldn't just throw cash or holy prayers at their little crusade. But here's the massive plot twist. He couldn't exactly ghost them either. Why? Because his wife's bloodline was deeply entangled with the Pyro Church. This bombshell was exactly what the knight needed to hear. His hopes skyrocketed, totally hyped that he somehow manipulated a top-tier aristocrat into picking up a sword for them. A second later, the swordmaster shattered his delusions, making it crystal clear he was only joining the fight because he was backed into a corner with zero options. The guest practically jumped out of his boots with excitement, but Arsène instantly told him to pump the brakes. He needed the real rundown. Why was the church hunting this psycho in the shadows instead of letting the royal guard handle it? The knight started sweating, admitting that if the crown got involved, they'd definitely send backup, but it would trigger a massive PR nightmare the Holy Order desperately wanted to dodge. Honestly, calling in the feds would make the church look completely incompetent, broadcasting to the world that they couldn't clean up their own messy backyard. And it gets darker. This rogue architect hadn't just been hiding, he had already slaughtered over 10 high-ranking clerics. Arsène instantly connected the dots. The freak was harvesting priests to use as ultra-powerful cores, injecting pure divine energy into his monsters and making them insanely dangerous. Cut to Jamie, who was low-key baffled. How did this random, nobody, holy warrior end up crashing their fancy dinner? He was equally annoyed and deeply intrigued. With this massive lore drop about his mom's secret Pyro Church ties, he realized his cushy new life was getting super complicated. Even so, he was slowly starting to vibe with their daily afternoon tea, settling into the aristocratic routine. His little sister was totally obsessed with him, practically glowing whenever he was around, always craving way more brother-sister time than she was already getting. Rolling up to his mom's hyper-aesthetic tea setup, he had to pretend to care about whatever fancy blend she was pouring today. Honestly, he was on a mission. He needed the intel his dad had completely blocked him from getting at breakfast. His old man had shut down the conversation before it even started. But Mom, she easily read the room, noticing her boy, practically rushing through the posh etiquette just to interrogate her. Jamie decided to play the innocent card, acting like a clueless kid. He hit her with a fake curious question about why the shiny knight bowed so deeply to her, pretending he just didn't understand adult greetings. Sears saw right through his little act. Smirking, she called his bluff, knowing exactly what her eldest son was fishing for. She casually asked if he was ready for the deep lore connecting their family to the paladin. Jamie gave an eager nod, and she dropped the bomb. His great-grandfather, a legendary figure he had never even met, was a massive financial backer for the Pyro Church. Their entire family legacy was literally built on his holy clout. Jamie's brain practically short-circuited. This plot twist hit him like a truck. His own bloodline secretly funding the exact same religious order. He quietly despised absolute insanity. She didn't stop there, revealing that back in the day when a priceless sacred artifact was hijacked, her grandpa stepped up to the plate, saving the day and cementing their family's god-tier reputation. But as she spoke, her vibe shifted, her eyes locked in a heavy, melancholic stare. You could tell this memory carried some serious trauma. The showdown went down in the Forsaken Garden where psychotic cultists of the Demon King tried to reboot their Dark Lord using the stolen holy gear. They completely choked, but the victory came at a massive cost. Her grandfather died a hero's death, throwing himself into the crossfire to stop the ritual. To honor his ultimate sacrifice, the church slapped an elite archbishop title on his grave, swearing an oath to treat the Bell bloodline like absolute royalty VIP bishops for 100 years. Sitting across from her, Jamie silently watched the lingering grief shadow his mother's face. It clearly showed how tight she and her grandpa used to be, though bringing up this whole story totally killed the vibe and dragged up some major trauma. The church seriously broke their backs trying to flex this massive honor. But honestly, since their one and only holy artifact literally got snatched, the puzzle pieces finally clicked. He totally cracked their system. Someday, every single one of Pyro's blind followers was going to drop dead by his blade. But until that bloodbath happened, he was absolutely going to milk every single cheat code this new connection handed him. His mom totally snapped him out of his villain era, turning his way to fish for some kind of reaction to her whole speech. She basically needed to know his take. Realizing he had been zoning out way too hard, he instantly slapped his innocent mask back on, acting like he totally wasn't plotting a masterclass on how to weaponize their own resources to completely obliterate the goddess. Trying to fix the awkward vibe, she offered him another round of tea. He played along instantly, not wanting to blow his cover and ruin the chill aesthetic. Cut to the orphanage later that night. The vibes were bittersweet, as everyone threw a huge send-off party for their orphanage brother Shin. Father Zenith had literally hand-picked the kid right before hitting the road. One of the high-ranking priests hyped everyone up for a toast, celebrating the exact moment Shin would step into his new life as a literal disciple. The kid was absolutely glowing. He totally bought into the church's whole doctrine, completely hyped to grind for the same organization that literally dragged him out of the gutter. The rest of the orphans were cheering their lungs out, but nobody was hyping him up harder than Ricky. The dude was basically losing his mind with joy that his best friend was heading straight to the big leagues at the main temple. The second the newly crowned golden boy hopped into the luxury carriage, his absolute closest squad crowded around for one last goodbye. Specifically Ricky and his sister Anna. Shin leaned out, admitting this whole glow-up happened so fast he was actually stressing about when he would see his crew again. But Ricky just grinned. He spilled that the priest secretly promised he would be drafted next. The red-haired kid swore there was zero reason to cry. His squad was going to link up with him in no time, and their lives were about to peak. Time was up. The carriage wheels started grinding against the dirt. It rolled out toward the grand main temple, the ultimate training ground. Shin's friends tracked the carriage until it disappeared into the dark, screaming out safe travels and praying for a smooth trip. Meanwhile, Ricky was floating on Cloud 9. His ultimate goal was to score his own priest robes one day, and he was crossing his fingers that dream was finally locking in. For Shin, the ride was a total blur, pulling up to the exact spot that was about to violently snap his life into a before and an after. His personal escort tapped the glass dryly, announcing they had hit their drop zone, which instantly set off alarm bells in Shin's head. He was bracing for a massive multi-day trek. He peeked through the window, and his jaw practically unhinged. The vibe check was completely off. This was nowhere close to the majestic Holy Land he had been dreaming about. If this sketchy guy was telling the truth, this cramped, busted 3-story building they just drove 5 minutes to reach was supposedly the legendary main temple. The escort was dead seriously trying to gaslight him into believing it. Shaking the kid, nervously double-checked if they were at the right address because the red flags were everywhere. The escort ghosted the question. He just coldly barked at the kid to fall in line and shut his mouth. The dude was so obviously covering up something deeply messed up. The shady priest started marching forward, not giving a single shred of a care if the kid was terrified out of his mind. He didn't even bother dropping a fake reassurance. Shin's safety was literally not on his radar. Shin kept tugging at his sleeve, stressing that the navigation definitely took them to the wrong hood. But the guy just brushed him off, demanding he keep his legs moving. Then the creep grabbed a random book on the shelf, a literal secret switch. A heavy mechanical click echoed. The totally normal-looking painting split apart, revealing a pitch-black hidden dungeon. The escort shoved the kid toward the dark abyss, refusing to drop a single clue. Shin's panic levels absolutely skyrocketed. This whole setup was screaming horror movie. His boots clicked down the cold stone steps, his gut twisting into sickening knots. He kept praying it was just a massive typo in the paperwork, because the sus levels were off the charts. Hitting the damp basement floor, his escort was still playing the silent treatment, freezing out every single one of Shin's desperate questions. The kid was begging for just one crumb of comfort, but then his eyes locked onto a cracked door. A mangled, totally butchered hand was weakly scraping at the frame. Pure, icy terror spiked through his veins. His brain practically short-circuited trying to process why he was trapped in this nightmare. Operating on pure naive panic, Shin scrambled behind the priest frantically, pointing at the freakish monstrosity lurking in the cell. He literally thought the guy would protect him. Instead, the priest didn't even flinch or spare him a glance. He just bowed to the pitch-black corner of the room, loudly announcing he had finally delivered the bishop's special little guest. A towering figure stepped out of the shadows. The guy flashed a sickeningly sweet smile, acting like they were at a totally normal summer camp. But Shin was practically shaking out of his skin. He knew there was a literal mutant behind that iron door, and he was seconds away from interrogating the bishop about it. The bishop didn't even bat an eye. Even though the kid had supposedly been handpicked by God for the priesthood, this guy acted like it was just another Tuesday. He gave a slow, practiced nod, backing up the kid's story. But something wasn't adding up. If Sheena was the chosen one, why drag him down to this sketchy room instead of the Grand Temple for training? Suddenly, the bishop's calm mask slipped. A twisted grin spread across his face. He whispered that this was all for the sake of crafting a flawless world, completely obsessed with seeing how a pure, innocent soul like Sheena would break. With a flick of his wrist, the bishop signaled a massive figure waiting in the shadows, ready to kick off their sick little experiment. Poor Sheena was practically glued to the floor, shivering out of his mind. The newcomer stepped into the light. His face was a literal nightmare, completely covered in horrific bleeding blisters. Scratching his chin, he casually mumbled that they had bagged a top-tier specimen for his twisted project. Leaning in close, he purred that the boy was destined to become a breathtaking chimera, his rotting fingers inching toward Sheena's pale cheek. That pure, unfiltered terror completely paralyzed the kid. Cut to the bustling city of Hace, right in the heart of Belbat Street. Over at Earl Welton's sprawling estate, the vibe was a million times more chill. Soaking up the warm afternoon sun, Jamie was busy giving their new guest a VIP tour. Not that he wanted to, though. The Holy Knight gazed around, amazed by the massive main drag of the city. He laughed, admitting he had totally stumbled down this exact road the other night when he was practically starving to death. Jamie just gave a stiff nod. He remembered seeing the guy roaming around. Honestly, Jamie was dragging his feet the entire time, only playing tour guide for one very specific reason. Flashback to morning tea, his dad basically cornered him. The Earl insisted their VIP needed to experience the local sights, and threw Jamie right under the bus, claiming his kid would make the absolute best local guide. The clueless knight ate it right up. Next thing Jamie knew, he was dragged out the front gates without a say in the matter, forced to show off the local hotspots. While Jamie was internally screaming about his terrible luck, the knight was low-key mind-blown. He couldn't wrap his head around how a literal 9-year-old had the stamina and brainpower of a seasoned pro. Turns out the Earl wasn't just flexing about his kid. The hype was 100% real. The blonde warrior glanced down at the boy, totally unaware that Jamie was plotting his escape route the entire time. Flashing a bright smile, the knight gave a massive shout-out to his tiny guide for showing him the ropes. Jamie slapped on a fake smile and mumbled that it was a blast. Reaching out a massive hand, the knight suggested they wrap things up and head back to the mansion. But Jamie shot that idea down instantly. He stared right into the guy's eyes and asked for a quick favor. The knight blinked, caught totally off guard by the icy tone coming from a literal child. Still, he nodded, bracing himself. Without missing a beat, Jamie demanded to know exactly what went down in that secret meeting with his dad yesterday. This intel was do or die for his master plan, especially since the church had deep ties to his mom's bloodline. The blonde dude practically short-circuited. Who expects an interrogation from a 4th grader? He figured the kid would ask about cool sword tricks or fighting monsters, normal kid stuff. Panicking, the knight tried to dodge the bullet, blurting out some garbage about how they were just discussing how handsome Jamie was going to be. Cue the ultimate deadpan stare. The knight started sweating, realizing his epic lie completely flopped. He doubled down, swearing it was the absolute truth while awkwardly laughing it off. But Jamie wasn't buying a single word. He knew right then that playing nice wouldn't crack this guy, especially since the knight kept spinning this ridiculous fairy tale about his dad just being a super proud parent. Honestly, it was pretty pathetic watching a grown man lie straight to his face, actually expecting him to fall for it. Eventually, the knight cracked under the pressure, throwing his hands up. He admitted it was top-secret adult business, way too classified to leak to a kid. Boom. Confirmation. Something massive was brewing in Hace, and babysitting this guy was Jamie's ticket to the front row. He just needed the exact details. While the kid mentally scrolled through a hit list of potential local enemies, the knight hovered around him like an anxious puppy. He was terrified he'd just ruined his standing with the young noble by lying to his face. Out of nowhere, Jamie snapped out of his trance, his eyes locking back onto his target. That lightning-fast vibe shift had the knight absolutely convinced the kid was holding a grudge. But instead, Jamie smoothly offered to show him one last essential landmark. You could practically see the relief wash over the blonde warrior. The kid wasn't giving him the silent treatment after all. Crisis averted. Now he was genuinely hyped to see what this grand finale of the tour was going to be. Jamie was rolling the dice here. He figured that dragging him to the local Zenith Church branch would perfectly expose exactly where this holy knight's true loyalties laid. Totally clueless, the knight happily hopped into the carriage, driving them straight into the lion's den. They hit the main drag in 0 time flat, closing the distance effortlessly. The knight was totally sweating bullets, begging to know if Jamie was pissed off, but our boy just hit him with a cold deadpan, "I do not care." Cut to Ricky. He was literally just sweeping up the churchyard, entirely clueless that destiny was about to smack him in the face with a ghost from last week. Spacing out, he locked his eyes onto the massive crowds flooding into Zenith Sanctuary. and his brain instantly started connecting the dots. At the exact same time, the Holy Warrior was totally fanboying over the gorgeous architecture, which absolutely blew his mind even for a guy who literally lives and breathes fancy cathedrals. Suddenly, Ricky locked onto Jamie, yelling out about the jet black hair he remembered from their weird little run-in. The blonde warrior leaned in, asking if that random kid screaming absolute gibberish was his buddy. Jamie immediately stiffened up. The absolute last thing he wanted was to be spotted by anyone during his top-secret midnight patrols, especially under these sketchy vibes, praying to high heaven it was not that same annoying kid from before. Playing it cool, he completely ignored him internally, raging that his magical hair dye job was a massive flop. Getting clocked this easily meant he desperately needed a major disguise upgrade for their next mission. But Ricky was not letting this slide. Offended by the total ghosting, he went full sprint right after their ride. Pumping his legs, the kid enthusiastically screamed that the new dye job almost fooled him, hyping him up without a single ounce of malice. Plot twist, though, he was chasing the completely wrong ride, while Jamie's actual carriage was barreling up right behind his back. The driver violently yanked the reins to avoid crushing the kid who had just wildly dashed into the street. Ricky whipped his head around, finally realizing the pure chaos he caused, only to see a massive wooden beast literally inches from his face. It was moving way too fast. The driver screamed at the top of his lungs for him to move, panicking because the momentum was completely unstoppable. Inside the cabin, Jamie and the Holy Knight could only watch the nightmare unfold, jaws fully unhinged, horrified at the absolute tragedy about to go down. Meanwhile, Ricky, still clutching his stupid little broom, was caught dead center in front of two massive horses, violently locking their legs to stop. Dust kicked up everywhere. The heroic knight instantly bolted from his seat, desperate to save the kid, who was literally half a second away from getting brutally flattened and ending his story way too early. The poor guy was completely frozen in pure terror, staring death in the face while tears flooded his eyes, brain completely short-circuiting. His legs felt like lead, refusing to budge a single inch. No matter how aggressively the driver ripped the reins back, those heavy beasts had way too much velocity and were guaranteed to crush Ricky into absolute dust. Time slowed down as the blonde warrior realized his speed simply was not enough to shove the kid to safety. He was completely powerless to stop the inevitable. Ricky just shut his eyes, fully accepting the grim reality that his own reckless chasing was about to get him killed, letting the tears aggressively stream down his face. But Jamie was not about to let someone get squashed on his watch. He instantly tapped into his arsenal, whipping out his magic, right as the hooves were a millisecond from impact. Channeling his raw mana flow, he spawned a massive barricade of heavy chains, perfectly designed to tank the brutal force of the crashing carriage. In that exact same split second, the knight successfully snatched the kid up to dive away, only to realize they were already boxed inside a glowing cage of magical steel that completely blocked the wreckage. The holy warrior snapped his neck back, questioning his own sanity over the crazy spell that materialized right after he left Jamie's side, wondering if he was literally hallucinating. But despite the absolute shock factor, those chains were 100% solid and totally saved the day, proving that even if his jump had been a fraction too late, the magical barrier would have tanked the hit and saved the kid regardless. Ricky snapped out of his daze, frantically patting himself down and completely losing his mind over the fact that he was actually breathing, especially since mere seconds ago he was practically shaking hands with the Grim Reaper. Overflowing with gratitude, he lunged at Jamie, trapping him in a bear hug so intense it felt like every single rib in his body was snapping under the insane pressure. The young mage immediately demanded to be released, squirming against the massive discomfort of being crushed by a guy who really did not look that incredibly jacked. Meanwhile, the knight was completely shook. He stared at Jamie like he was looking at an entirely different entity, realizing the sheer power of the spell totally eclipsed anything the veteran wizards back home could pull off. It absolutely broke his brain trying to comprehend how a literal 9-year-old possessed such top-tier combat skills, cementing the absolute fact that this kid was a generational prodigy, destined to become an insanely overpowered monster in just a few years. As for Jamie, he did not give a single care about the knight's massive existential crisis. Ross was completely mind-blown, trying to wrap his head around how such an insane aura fit into the body of a literal child. Snapping his confused guest back to reality, our boy finally called the shots, declaring it was time to move. Their main target, the Zenith Church, they were already in the area, so there was zero chance they were skipping it. Just as the knight started getting low-key irritated by Jamie's vibe, Ricky sprinted over. Total plot twist, the kid was heading to the exact same spot. Talk about perfect timing. Wanting to pay them back for the whole saving his life thing, Ricky volunteered to be their VIP tour guide. He literally lived there, so he knew the grounds like the back of his hand. He spilled the details, explaining that the church ran an orphanage for street kids with zero options. Because it was his home turf, he promised to give them the ultimate behind-the-scenes look. But before they could get far, a nun ambushed them. Recognizing Ricky, she instantly grilled him, demanding to know where on earth he had been hiding. Her eyes narrowed at the two strangers trailing behind him. This was a safe zone for orphans, and she wasn't about to let random, dangerous-looking dudes casually stroll in. Panic dropping from his voice, Ricky confessed about the near-death carriage incident. He pointed at his two saviors, gushing that they were basically his personal guardian angels. Hearing that, the sister completely lost it. She went into full panic mode, frantically checking the kid for injuries and gasping about how traumatized he must be. Flipping the switch, she showered the duo with absolute gratitude. If they hadn't stepped up, the kid would be a goner, and she praised them for dodging an absolute nightmare. Ross, being the classic humble knight, brushed off the praise. He dropped the lore that as a die-hard follower of the Church of Pyro, saving lives was just in his DNA. The name Pyro made the nun's face glitch with raw disgust, a micro-expression the clueless knight entirely missed. Ignorant to the tension, Ross happily threw Jamie under the bus, revealing the kid actually did all the heavy lifting, but wanted to keep it super low-key. So much for staying off the radar. The nun's eyes locked onto Jamie, completely baffled that a pint-sized kid outshadowed a fully armored warrior. To make matters worse, Ross casually flexed Jamie's background, dropping the massive bombshell that this was the feudal lord's literal heir. The second his full name left the knight's mouth, the atmosphere shifted. Around these parts, that name carried insane weight, instantly connecting him to his ultra-powerful father. Scrambling to save face, the nun claimed his iconic emerald hair and eyes should have been a dead giveaway, making up a lame excuse that the shock of the carriage crash completely scrambled her brain. Jamie's internal alarm bells went absolutely crazy. Any true local would spot a noble a mile away. Her fake concern was glaringly obvious, plus her whole vibe was just wildly off. Pivoting the chat, the woman probed to see if they were just here to drop Ricky off. Ross shut that down fast, explaining he was just snooping around. He heard the Zenith Church was expanding and wanted to scope out the vibes for himself. Taking control, the nun told the knight to tag along with her for the official tour, while instructing Ricky to handle the young lord's sightseeing. Jamie instantly connected the dots. She was purposely splitting up the squad. Still, he played along. Honestly, what was some sketchy old lady gonna do to a literal powerhouse? Keeping his guard up, just in case Jamie bid the knight farewell. Putting on his best innocent child act, he chirped about seeing him later at family dinner. Flashing a megawatt kid-friendly smile, he completely shattered his usual brooding aura. Ross was utterly stunned by the sudden personality swap. Just a second ago, they were exchanging super awkward glares, and now the kid was acting like his best buddy. Make it make sense. Shrugging off the confusion, the knight flashed a warm smile back, waving goodbye and promising to catch up later. Meanwhile, Ricky's tour guide skills were tragically awkward. He basically just pointed at a random building, mumbled that it was his dorm, and gestured vaguely toward the cafeteria. The kid was sweating bullets, desperately trying to make the rundown shelter look like a 5-star resort. Sensing the tension, Jamie told him to take a chill pill. Ricky was literally vibrating with anxiety, completely stressed out, despite finally being in the safe zone. Blinking in confusion, the street kid had zero clue how to act around nobility. But our young lord totally squashed the hierarchy, casually mentioning that high-class manners meant absolutely nothing to him. Ricky's jaw dropped. Treating a noble like a normal bro was unheard of, so he cautiously double-checked if Jamie was actually being serious. Jamie, hating nothing more than repeating himself, gave a sharp nod. Instantly catching the vibe, Ricky's anxiety vanished and he hyped Jamie up to follow his lead. Ditching the boring corporate tour route, the kid decided to show off the real, unfiltered orphanage. He dragged his new guest straight to the dorms, hyping up the cramped room he shared with his little sister. Ricky was absolutely buzzing with energy, while Jamie hit him with a massive, unbothered side-eye. Undeterred by the poker face, Ricky kicked the door open, happily announcing to his sister Annie that he brought a friend home. Jamie mentally cringed. They had known each other for exactly 5 minutes. Labeling them friends was a massive stretch. Inside, the little girl absolutely gasped in shock. Her older brother had literally never brought a single friend back to their room, sparking an intense wave of curiosity. Desperate to see the mystery guest with her own eyes, she squinted through her terrible vision and immediately rushed toward the door. Jamie leaned in to scope out Ricky's new buddy, but the second she stepped up, his face totally dropped. Because something about this girl threw him so far off guard, he could not even mask his absolute shock. Ricky nudged Anna to drop a quick hello, hyping Jamie up as this top-tier guy, and she totally played along by dropping her name. But Jamie just stood there, completely paralyzed, not even batting an eye, because his brain was literally short-circuiting over the insane red flags popping up all over the place. He was genuinely mind-blown. How did this literal kid radiate the heavy, intense aura of an adult, let alone pack straight-up holy magic in her eyes? Legends talked about divine messengers dropping down from the sky, flexing divine power like it was absolutely nothing. Usually one specific body part on these beings practically glowed with intense, sacred energy. And looking at her, it was glaringly obvious that this little girl's blindness was caused by that exact divine force. The crazy part, once her true potential fully unlocks, she will read the flow of the entire universe through literal god-tier vision, making her a massive threat to Jamie down the line. For a split second, he actually debated taking her out right there. but quickly scrapped the thought. If he could spot her insane energy, the higher-ups at the church definitely had her on their radar already. Catching a body right now would basically be a massive death wish. Meanwhile, Ricky was staring at Jamie, totally misreading the whole vibe. Seeing his buddy spaced out, Ricky straight up assumed Jamie was instantly crushing on his little sister. Honestly, his brain was totally short-circuiting, trying to trace back his own logic. Honestly, no matter how hard he tried harping on her being way too young, the girl shut that down instantly. She cut him off before he could totally embarrass himself, pivoting like pro to fake a burning question. Her ultimate distraction tactic, forcing him to read a random passage from a book. The execution was a bit clunky though. Her main goal was honestly just getting her big brother to zip it, absolutely desperate to keep him from triggering their edgy new guest. You definitely do not want to poke the bear, right? The brother totally caved hopelessly, asking which exact page he was supposed to read, while Jamie was silently dissecting the whole scene. He was hyper-focused on the weird energy radiating around them. Was this Zenith's holy magic, or some other dark, twisted power? Either way, red flags were flying everywhere. He made a mental note to keep her on a brutally tight leash, letting a raw talent like hers level up unchecked. Yeah, no. That was practically begging for a boss-level villain later down the line. Seeing the siblings distracted by their bickering, Jamie saw his window to pull a ninja vanish and score a massive head start to ghost them completely. Ricky obliviously assumed the dude just needed a bathroom break, but Jamie hit him with the cold truth: he was bouncing. His schedule was packed and the clock was ticking. Hearing that, the kid immediately stepped up to play the good host, casually throwing a warning to his sister that he was just walking their guest to the door. He told her not to freak out if he took a minute. The walk outside, pure awkward silence. The heavy quiet was totally eating at Ricky, so he finally cracked and asked the million-dollar question: would his new bro ever come back to chill? Crickets. Jamie straight up ignored the kid's raw, genuine hope to hang out again, completely dodging the emotional stuff. Jamie flipped the script entirely. He randomly interrogated Ricky about his ultimate life goals. The heavy question completely caught the kid off guard. Like who drops a deep philosophical bomb on a casual walk? But Ricky, being the pure soul he is, instantly figured this intense grilling was just Jamie's awkward tough guy version of a hug. A weird flex, sure, but a welcome one. Jamie couldn't care less about the kid's wholesome misunderstanding though. He just played along to extract the intel he needed. So, spilling his guts, the boy confessed that back in the day, his only dream was just surviving alongside Anna. But hitting this new city totally flipped a switch in his brain, unlocking some massive ambitions. Crashing at the sanctuary run by the church. That was his light bulb moment. He desperately wanted Zenith to pick him. Becoming a holy priest felt like the ultimate way to pay it forward, honoring the exact people who dragged him out of absolute rock bottom. Then the kid casually dropped a massive piece of lore just yesterday. His best friend actually got drafted by the higher-ups and shipped off to the Grand Sanctuary. Ricky couldn't even hide the bitter, jealous edge in his voice. That single sentence made Jamie's blood run cold. His ears instantly locked onto the phrase Grand Sanctuary. Alarm bells were ringing everywhere. Something told him this so-called holy draft was a straight-up trap. The flashbacks hit him like a freight train, linking every single red flag together. Pure terror washes over his face as he immediately grills his new buddy about his life before the shelter. The guy shrugs it off, claiming he was just roughing it on the streets, barely scraping by. But that surface-level answer isn't gonna cut it. Jamie presses harder, demanding to know his actual hustle. Right before hitting rock bottom, Ricky looks completely thrown off by this intense interrogation. But he spills the truth anyway. Turns out he used to be a low-level grunt running with the rival Syndicate. Boom. Every single puzzle piece suddenly snaps into one massive, terrifying picture. It all clicks for Jamie. Every single breadcrumb trails right back to Zenith, the absolute mastermind who orchestrated this insane psychological trap. Meanwhile, we cut to Russ, who's wrapping up his conversation with the sister, telling her their chat was actually pretty solid. The vibe is totally mutual, and she smoothly drops a massive offer. If he ever comes back around, she could totally introduce him to an elite noble kid. Russ plays it cool, giving her a simple thanks. He keeps it polite to avoid any drama, but mentally notes one huge detail: this woman calculates every single syllable she drops. This massive red flag made Jamie seriously question if these local holy men were actually legit. His mind immediately raced to one dark possibility: was the sick mastermind behind the chimeras pulling the strings here too? But before he could spiral, the two boys wrapped up their scouting mission. Ricky spun around to check on his new buddy, only to freeze when a towering shadow loomed up behind him. It was the absolute last person you'd expect dropping by unannounced. The bishop himself stood right there smoothly, dropping the excuse that while he was away, his church had welcomed some top-tier VIPs. The guy locked eyes with Jamie and instantly clocked exactly which powerhouse bloodline this kid belonged to. Flipping the switch to full politician mode, the clergyman singled out our young lord with a tailored greeting, heavily Jamie's elite rank to flex his own authority in the room. Jamie coolly dropped his name, pasting on a fake polite smile, while internally cracking the entire case wide open. This twisted church wasn't saving orphans, they were harvesting defenseless street kids to forge an army of blindly loyal fanatics. Pivoting seamlessly, the bishop gestured to the blonde dude flanking him, who formally introduced himself as Ras Armitage, a devout follower of the Pyro Church. Jamie's gears kept grinding, dissecting their sick obsession with vulnerable kids, especially since this shady bishop was aggressively overplaying the gracious host routine, faking way too much interest in a kid. But what really set off Jamie's internal alarms was the silent brute lurking in the background, playing the role of the bishop's personal attack dog. Sure, the guy radiated the heavy aura of a trained holy knight, but the energy felt entirely corrupted. This screaming dissonance forced our young prodigy to scan the room like a hawk. Ras was throwing off the most chaotic vibes, sweating bullets, and looking completely rattled despite supposedly sharing the bishop's elite tier. Jamie shot the clergyman and his guard a deadpan, piercing glare. The whole room reeked of secrets, and he was ready to rip off the mask to find the rot underneath. The bishop stared back, visibly flinching under the kid's intense gaze, fully realizing he was dealing with an untouchable noble who could literally end his entire career with one word. The walk back from that cursed chapel was thick with tension. Both of them were spiraling, mentally replaying the disturbing puzzle pieces, trying to lock in a solid theory. Out of nowhere, Jamie shattered the silence casually, dropping that Ricky's bestie just got chosen, and dragged off to the main temple. He added that Ricky was super jealous and desperately wanted to get ordained too. Ras essentially blue-screened. He totally froze in his tracks, blinking wildly as his brain failed to process the loaded statement. Recovering clumsily, the blonde knight slapped on a fake cheerleader smile, praising Ricky's raw talent and predicting huge success for the kid. It was painful to watch. The guy completely missed the massive neon warning signs Jamie was flashing right in his face. No matter how explicitly Jamie tried to serve up the dark truth behind their little field trip, Ras remained clueless, completely brick-walled, to the horrifying reality. Losing patience, Jamie hit the brakes, locked eyes with the knight, and asked if his dad had briefed him on anything specific. Ras just tilted his head, hopelessly confused. So Jamie spoon-fed him the intel exactly 2 months back. His father absolutely eradicated a ruthless underground syndicate, a sick cartel, running armed robberies and literally trafficking children, for profit. Then came the ultimate plot twist. Ricky, the sweet kid they bailed out today, he was a former asset of that exact same cartel. Boom. You could practically hear the gears snapping into place as the horrifying reality finally smacked Ras across the face. Jamie smirked, knowing he had successfully cracked the knight's dense skull open to the truth. Now it was time to drop the absolute nuke and blow this conspiracy wide open. He pointed out the blatant hypocrisy the Zenith Church proudly paraded around their massive charity operations, but linking that to the underground trafficking painted a terrifying masterpiece. Their holy goodwill was entirely fabricated. This entire orphanage was never a safe haven. It was an unholy meat grinder, trapping broken street kids to exploit them as disposable pawns, instead of saving them from the streets. With the horrifying puzzle solved, the duo rushed straight back to the Welton estate to drop this massive intel dump, squarely on the Count's desk. Stepping up to the plate, Ras formally briefed his liege, laying out the sickening timeline. Capping it off with the smoking gun, Ricky, a known mafia affiliate, was currently stashed inside that very sanctuary. Count Argano leaned back, his eyes narrowing. He admitted the church provided god-tier PR and stability for his territory, which was why he let them operate. But these new, incredibly shady red flags were impossible to ignore anymore. Ras then brought up the bishop's silent muscle, admitting that the heavily armored brute seriously messed with his radar. There was a glaring anomaly he just couldn't shake. The guy leaked an overwhelmingly oppressive mana, but the vibe was entirely toxic. It didn't feel like pure Zenith holy magic at all. Instead, the frequencies were twisted, radiating a deeply chaotic, mutated divine power. Ras was seconds away from blurting out the ugly truth about a chimera, but Count Welton brutally cut him off. Argino had already connected the dots to a monster, his face pale with dread as he processed the nightmare. The Count knew playtime was officially over. He couldn't just sit on the sidelines, he had to mobilize his elite vanguard and cleanse this corruption immediately. Lars totally got the Count's hardline stance, but he wasn't about to crash out without solid proof. He needed hard facts, refusing to make a blind move that could blow up in their faces. He swore on everything that he would dig up the receipts, finding the ultimate smoking gun to nuke this chimera-making psycho and the corrupted network, poisoning the Count's turf. But Argino wasn't having it, warning him that pulling a solo run against these freaks was pure suicide, making backup an absolute necessity. Even with Lars ready to throw hands with whatever came next, the Count kept it strictly business, grilling him on their actual odds since they were flying totally blind in the intel department. But the blonde holy knight wasn't sweating it at all. Flashing a confident grin, he dodged the heavy doom and gloom vibe radiating from the Welton family head. Argino realized that buffing his new squad mate wasn't optional anymore, promising to hand over 3 of his elite hitters to back Lars in his underground war. Before the words even hung in the air, 3 absolute units materialized right behind the knight. Their movements were razor-sharp, cutting through the space with dead, terrifying silence. Lars flinched, his eyes darting around, mind blown by their stealth. He hadn't sensed a single pulse in that room. Smirking, the Count dropped the lore. These were Shadow Knights, top-tier ghosts literally bred to guard the estate, bringing serious professional heat to the mission. Lars squinted though. With their lethal drip and sketchy energy, they looked way more like cold-blooded hitmen. He didn't even know how to talk to these guys, doubting they were actual knights beyond the title. But whatever. They were the ultimate safety net. Hyping up his gratitude, Lars vowed to rip the mask off the enemy, no matter the cost. The Count nodded, locking in their alliance, while a tiny shadow watched from the corner. Black recorded every single detail, beaming the intel straight back to Jamie, who was hungry for updates. Meanwhile, chilling in his room, Jamie was already plotting his next massive brain play for the upcoming chaos. The kid genius clenched his jaw. Treating innocent kids as blank canvases for sick lab experiments was vile. In his mind, there was zero chance God would let that slide, because it completely shattered every moral code. And the fact that the bishop ghosted the project halfway through meant he was definitely running from something huge. You don't just ditch a high-stakes op without a terrifying reason. Snapping back, Jamie locked eyes with his familiar, ready to drop an order. Stuck in a kid's body, he needed his magical pet to make the physical plays, and Black was all ears. He slid a sealed letter to the shadow bird. Get this to Ricky. Now. Do not stop. In a heartbeat, the pet launched out the window, diving into the sky. This delivery was literally do or die. Left alone in the quiet room, Jamie's eyes glowed. It was time to grind. Because the incoming war was going to demand magic way beyond his current stats. He mentally put Zenith on notice, promising to be her absolute worst nightmare, as he started practicing cracked high-tier techniques. His go-to was memorization, a crazy skill that trapped massive mana deep inside the soul, letting him spam spells later with zero cooldown. Cut to the other side of the city. His undead minions chilled in the dark, wondering when their boss would finally drop the green light. Number 2 laid down the law, telling them to hold the angle, until something sketchy popped up. They just needed to keep their dead eyes peeled and wait for the perfect strike. Azar groaned, complaining the streets were completely dead. Not even a rat was out here, let alone some rogue knight, making his enthusiasm drop into the negatives. But his partner wasn't having it, fiercely barking at him to stick to the mission parameters and follow the boss's script to the letter. The beefier zombie sighed, bored out of his skull. The absolute lack of action was driving him insane, convinced they were just wasting time waiting for a fight that would never happen. Suddenly, the dead silence shattered. Heavy armored boots pounded the pavement, proving their brutal stakeout wasn't a bust after all. But this knight closed the gap with glitch-like speed. Ripping his sword from its sheath, he lunged, aiming to send them straight back to the grave. Azar's jaw dropped. Their survival odds just hit zero. The guy ambushed them so fast, they couldn't even throw up a basic guard. And the craziest part, the knight was radiating insane amounts of stored mana, glowing like a walking nuke, ready to detonate all over them. Every single swing carried bone-crushing weight. Dodging was basically impossible. With their backs against the wall, the undead duo had to desperately scramble to block. But here was the massive plot twist. The crushing energy was pure holy magic. Who even was this guy? He was absolutely wrecking them with church techniques, yet his aura felt completely twisted and wrong. This dude was basically a glitching NPC programmed for one thing: catching bodies. No strategy, zero hesitation, just locking onto foreheads and swinging for the fences. Pure, unfiltered malice burned in his eyes. It was like that toxic hatred was his actual health bar, pushing him forward like a total juggernaut. The whole vibe was incredibly off. He was completely stripped of his humanity, missing that mental chip that makes a normal fighter adapt or react. There was zero battle chemistry. He wasn't trying to read his opponents at all. He was just a meat grinder on autopilot. Jamie's squad realized they needed to break his aggro. They split up, hoping to scramble his radar and buy themselves a literal second to breathe. The plan was simple: stall him and get word to the boss. But the second they dashed, this Terminator instantly snapped his neck toward them. He locked right back into kill mode, spamming that exact same brain-dead attack pattern he just used a second ago. It was crazy obvious this guy wasn't normal. Whatever drove him was forcing this tunnel vision rampage, completely ignoring how the battlefield shifted. Closing the gap, the knight went right back to his signature move: mindless, heavy-handed swings. No fakes, no dodging. Isart was literally sweating, trying to calculate a counterattack against someone playing without a brain. How do you outplay a guy who doesn't even perceive your feints? The knight just wanted blood and ignored every trap they set. While Isart was overthinking the matchup, the enemy closed in tight. It was a do-or-die moment to save his bro. So the second undead minion made a clutch split-second sacrifice play to keep him alive. He literally yeeted Isart straight out the window, blasting him away from the danger zone before he could even process the chaos. airborne and tumbling from the second story, leaving his partner locked in a deathmatch with the rogue knight. Mid-fall, his brain was on overdrive, desperately trying to decode a survival strat to get them out of this nightmare. Back in the room, the abandoned servant ate the raw damage to save his boy, tanking a catastrophic hit. The knight's strikes were brain-dead but packed ridiculous firepower, severely wounding the minion. Then, out of nowhere, a massive shadow barrier erupted. The boss's signature mana flooded the room. Talk about a clutch save. If anyone could pack up this rogue enemy, it was him. Enter Jamie. He spawned in at the absolute perfect frame while his crew was getting wrecked, shutting down the chaos without even breaking a sweat. A cocky smirk flashed across his face. This entire chaotic scenario, it was playing right into his hands. He already had his suspicions about this so-called holy warrior, and getting confirmed right just hit different. Plus, it was prime time to flex his insane scaling by bailing out his squad. They did the heavy lifting on the recon, even if their stats were way too low to secure the final elimination. Now it was just him and the rogue paladin in a locked room. Jamie was hyped he could finally take the training weights off. Total blackout mode activated. Whatever went down next was strictly off-camera, blocked out by a massive magical dome. No peeping toms allowed. Tapping into his past life's dark vibes helped, but tossing around tier 6 spells still drained his mana hard. This wasn't going to be a walk in the park. Completely unfazed by the boss-level aura, the knight just full-sent it, charging straight at Jamie. Zero mix-ups, just aiming for pure brute force damage. Jamie didn't even flinch. He just saw a free test dummy for his combos. Knowing he had to grind his skills for the endgame, he casually dropped a tier 5 spell, Gravity. Boom! The atmospheric pressure multiplied instantly, pinning the heavy hitter to the floorboards and flipping the momentum entirely. The knight strained to keep swinging, but the insane gravitational pull absolutely nerfed his mobility. He was completely stun-locked. Capitalizing on the crowd control, Jamie transitioned smoothly into his next skill, Corpse Touch. Phantom hands burst from the floor, chaining the victim down. His reckless aggro was officially cancelled. Forced to his knees, all the dude could do was scream absolute rage. His hand desperately clawed at the air, begging for a miracle. But spoiler alert, nobody was coming. The young mage had him completely cornered. Now Jamie queued up an ultimate ability so dark it didn't even have a title. The play detonating those spectral chains into a delayed catastrophic nuke. A guaranteed one-shot kill. The knight was clueless about the absolute devastation currently cooking right in front of him. He just stared, blankly, utterly shook, while Jamie locked in to perfectly execute the spell's mechanics. A blinding orb of raw mana materialized inches from his nose. The power gap was sickening. His win probability literally dropped to 0. But then snap. The kid cancelled every single aura and spell in the room. The fight was over, so why waste the energy? Drenched in his own blood, the enemy just slumped over, thoroughly deactivated, and no longer a threat to the squad. With the flawless victory secured, Jamie leaned in like a scientist, analyzing this weirdly loyal killing machine. He needed to know what code kept this guy attacking. But out of nowhere, running on literal 1 health point, the knight snapped out of his trance. His knuckles turned white around the hilt, ready to reboot his absolute slaughter all over again. Covered in gashes, the dude just threw himself forward. It wasn't a calculated strike anymore, just a desperate, chaotic lunge from a totally broken body. Jamie had to give him props though. The guy was built different, stubbornly clinging to life when he should have been dead 10 times over. Still, trading physical punches wasn't going to end this. Jamie knew it was time to drop the brawl and tap back into his magical arsenal. Channeling his raw mana, he prepped a devastating spell, designed to completely shut the knight down and drain whatever fight he had left. Enter the marionette art. Ethereal threads of fate shot out violently, hacking into the enemy's nervous system. Just like that, Jamie flipped the script into total undisputed domination, and honestly, he was absolutely here for it. The armored warrior crashed hard to his knees. His brain screamed at him to move, but it was officially game over. His limbs weren't his own anymore. Every twitch and muscle flex was brutally puppeteered by Jamie's glowing strings. The crushing metaphysical weight of those threads bypassed any defense or logic. He had walked right into a flawlessly executed death trap. There was literally zero way out. Jamie sauntered up, eyes glowing as he psychoanalyzed the very core of his captive. Judging by the knight's bizarre, unnatural vibe, Jamie figured the poor guy didn't even process the absolute reality check he just received, so he laid it out for him. During that massive blast earlier, Jamie had secretly embedded fragments of corrupted souls deep inside the guy's armor. Basically, the knight's free will was completely deleted. He was officially Jamie's personal property now. Resistance wasn't just futile, it was mathematically impossible. The crushing realization finally hit the knight he was trapped in his own flesh. Purging this tier of dark magic was a pipe dream. Throwing another punch would just be an embarrassing waste of energy. Since securing a win was completely off the table, survival instinct kicked in. The only play left was to bail before this monster ripped him apart. Clocking his erratic movements, Jamie's eyes narrowed. Was this dude actually trying to self-destruct just to dodge being enslaved? Yeah, that wasn't going to fly. Annoyed by the sudden inconvenience, Jamie bolted after his hijacked toy to shut down the suicide run. Locking onto his target, he thrust his arm forward, manifesting a terrifying spell known as the Hand of Darkness. A massive shadowy grip swallowed the distance in a flash. The retreating warrior instantly realized he was snagged all over again. Plan B was a spectacular flop. However, by grabbing onto his enemy directly, Jamie had accidentally painted a massive target on his own back. Their highly incompatible auras violently clashed, creating a super volatile reaction that was about to blow up in his face. Dark magic suddenly fizzled out as blinding holy energy flooded the entire chamber, aggressively neutralizing Jamie's offensive strike. It completely severed his connection, and because he was literally at point-blank range, dodging the incoming counterattack was practically impossible. Talk about a fatal miscalculation. His cocky little cat-and-mouse game had instantly backfired into a deadly trap. With his dark-infused hand literally buried inside a vessel, radiating pure holy fire, pulling away unharmed was off the menu. Boom! The knight detonated a massive shockwave of divine mana, violently launching the boy across the room and shattering the puppet strings. Brilliant, blinding holy light swallowed the shadows, turning the crumbling dungeon into a radiating beacon of pure, sacred power. The sheer intensity actually forced Jamie to freeze. He instantly dropped his defensive barriers, just to redirect every ounce of his raw power. He needed to prioritize raw survival, aggressively cutting off any minor spells that were bleeding his energy dry. Honestly, if Black's shadowy familiar hadn't stepped in right then, Jamie would have been completely vaporized by the blast. He definitely didn't see that coming. The fact that Black could crank his divine output to the absolute maximum and literally tear a hole through the dark dimension. But taking a breather wasn't an option, so he barked at Black to devour the blinding light. Meanwhile, the knight hit the gas, desperately trying to dip from the battlefield. Tactical retreat was literally the only logical move left on the board. But Jamie was way too petty to just let his prey walk out the front door. Not after this guy had the absolute audacity to disrespect his dark magic and embarrass him like that. It was personal now. Another lethal spell blitzed through the air, aimed straight at the runner's back, silently demanding he finally accept his inevitable defeat instead of mindlessly sprinting away. Suddenly, the armor burst open, and a grotesque, writhing mass of flesh spilled out. Whatever this thing was, it definitely wasn't human anymore. It was straight-up nightmare fuel. Jamie's eyes went cold as he immediately diagnosed the grotesque mess. This was the Chimera's ultimate unholy form. The sheer body horror of it was enough to make anyone freeze up in panic, but Jamie ruthlessly locked down his focus. With a flick of his wrist, massive dark chains erupted from the ground, violently coiling around the beast to crush any hope of escape. The boy simply watched with dead, icy eyes. He hadn't cracked a single emotion since this brawl started. Trapped in the crushing metal links, the mutated knight was pinned dead in his tracks. Jamie's relentless rapid-fire combos had completely stripped the creature of its mobility. Knowing he had total, absolute checkmate, the Dark Mage began charging up his ultimate finisher, the Death Explosion. The monstrous warrior was forcibly dragged down to his knees, paralyzed by massive structural damage and the suffocating pressure of the shadow chains. The catastrophic blast slammed into him point blank, an apocalyptic force designed to shred impenetrable armor and instantly fry his core combat processor into ash. Jamie clocked the brutal state of his enemy. That twisted body was totally trashed, completely maxed out on damage, making any basic counterattacks literally impossible. Backed into a seriously tight corner, the monster had exactly one desperate play left on the board. It was time to trigger its final last-ditch protocol. With things looking incredibly bleak, Jamie braced himself. He knew he was about to witness the raw, unfiltered nightmare, hiding underneath all that metal, as the beast violently tore its way out of the heavy armor meant to keep its hideous true form a secret. But before Jamie could even blink, that freakish thing bolted. It launched itself out the window, violently splitting into scattered chunks, just to guarantee its own survival against impossible odds. Talk about an epic letdown. Jamie just had to stand there and watch it bounce, completely zeroing his chances of chasing down that fragmented mess, because of how insanely fast the entire escape flashed by. Out of nowhere, his loyal undead minion popped up from the sidelines, after spectating the whole crazy showdown, visibly stressing over whether his master survived that blinding blast of holy energy. Right after tossing Jamie a massive compliment for clapping that beast, the undead hype man realized the target had simply dipped. He was seriously tripping over his master's ultra-chill reaction, completely failing to grasp why Jamie wasn't sprinting out that window to hunt down such a top-tier threat and finish the job permanently. Jamie smirked, admitting the disrespect stung a bit, but going on a wild goose chase was totally unnecessary. The undead subordinate was still scratching his head, absolutely baffled as to why his boss just handed the enemy a free pass to escape without throwing hands. Assuming they tracked this armored freak solely to secure the kill, the living corpse quickly backpedaled and apologized, but honestly begged Jamie to drop some logic. Right now, this whole catch-and-release strategy made zero sense to him. The young sorcerer just flashed a wicked grin, casually pointing out that scrubbing off his dark mana is literally impossible. Plunging his shadowy hand straight through that knight's chest earlier wasn't just for show, it was a calculated game-changing move. That shadowy energy had essentially hardwired itself into the monster's veins, transforming it into a walking, breathing tracking device. Meanwhile, across town, the bishop was chilling in his luxurious office, mindlessly signing paperwork, totally clueless about the absolute beatdown his pet project just endured. His supposedly invincible bodyguard was nowhere in sight. Out of nowhere, a super sketchy scraping noise hit the window glass, forcing the holy man to snap his head up. Squinting through the glass, he caught sight of a pulsating chunk of the chimera, desperately clinging to the ledge. The fleshy blob was so violently mashed up you could barely even comprehend the absolute nightmare it had just survived. The bishop glared at the gruesome leftover with pure disgust. His brain literally couldn't process the idea that his flawless creation actually took a brutal loss, which meant someone out there flexed hard enough to body an armored beast pumped full of literal divine juice. Snapping back to the ruined house, where the dust was barely settling from that insane boss fight, Jamie's undead sidekick was still hardcore stressing over the game plan. Flexing forbidden magic like that felt like a massive gamble, practically screaming to the world that a dark sorcerer was operating in town. Basically, it was a fast track to getting completely exposed and hunted. Jamie totally got the paranoia, but coolly promised that his cover remained completely bulletproof. Nobody was going to uncover his true identity. He explained that his current energy signature had evolved way past basic dark magic, creating the ultimate stealth cloak, to keep him entirely off the grid. But it also brought up a wild mystery. Why the heck did modern black magic seem so laughably weak against holy power lately? Especially since shadows were literally engineered from day one to perfectly counter and devour divine energy. Crushing that blinding holy light required raw, suffocating darkness, capable of swallowing it completely whole without leaving a single trace. And Jamie, he was the absolute embodiment of that devastating power.